In the middle of a relentless blizzard lay the still body of a woman, her outline concealing the tragic story of her past life. No one knew how long she had lain motionless in that same spot, slowly dying from the horrifying cold. She had no friends or family left alive to save her, but the Lady of Ice was not the only one on the plain. On the frozen plain that day, a man approached her. He knew her story. He merely remarked aloud on the absurdity of how she had been mercilessly abandoned in that frozen kingdom. The man couldn't leave her in such a state, so he approached and spoke to her, calling her Empress. She looked at him with disinterest. He began to tell her that if she had no more use for her own life, he would gladly take it from her. Finally, the man took her into his arms. She looked at him and recognized an acquaintance, then wearily closed her eyes. He held her head in his hand, looking her defiantly in the eyes. He pronounced that she was now his. The Empress's tragic fate had plagued her entire life, but the truly fatal events occurred precisely 3 months ago. For a long time, Natalia, the Emperor's mistress, had tried everything to convince him to conspire against his wife. Like a tempting serpent, she wrapped her arms around his shoulders. She whispered her secret plan for him to strengthen his power. Her words had a strange effect on him, and he smiled wickedly. Upon learning his power had been usurped by the Empress, he fumed that everything in the lands of the Thanatos Empire should belong to Emperor Gilotti, but his wife was the exception. She was so skilled in political and diplomatic affairs that Gilotti became her shadow and no longer held much authority. Natasha continued to incite him. She proposed to handle the Empress's brother herself. Her Machiavellian plan consisted of attempting to seduce him and then accuse him of a brutal sexual assault. The Emperor's mistress was a member of the Imperial Council, so such a crime would undoubtedly be a death sentence. She caresses his torso, knowing this will ruin the Empress's reputation when she tries to defend him. Natasha presses against his back, claiming that by protecting her criminal brother, the Empress will become repulsive in the eyes of society. The final blow to her position will be the discovery of faked evidence of treason in her office, which he will plant for a later inspection. A letter will be found stating that the brother acted out of his sister's hatred for Natasha and the Emperor. After laying out her brilliant plan, the blonde woman caresses his cheek and asks him to do something for her first. To his surprise, her caress suddenly turns brutal as she violently climbing on top of him. She demands that he break the Empress's limbs before executing the main part of the plan. Then she orders him to eliminate everyone dear to her, including her family, servants, and inner circle. The end will come when the woman appears in the banquet hall, oblivious to everything, to present herself before His Majesty as she pushes him onto the bed. His mistress announces that in front of all the guests, she will reveal that she has the Emperor's son according to her calculations. It will be the last time she appears in Thanatos as Empress on criminal charges due to her brother's crimes and her own jealousy. She will try to get rid of the Emperor's mistress and her son. Gilotti barely comprehends what she is saying due to his focus on the single act of infidelity. Without stopping his intimate act with her, Natasha claims that after the Empress's actions, he will be forced to draw his sword. His sword to kill her and her family. Touching the Emperor's neck while he is lost in pleasure, he smiles and comments that his opponent will have to be very cunning so she isn't discovered. The young woman shrewdly observes that once she is alone, it won't matter how smart or skilled she is. After some time, the 16th Empress of Thanatos found herself on the verge of a new tragic turning point in her immense misery. By then, with the Emperor's help, she had become lame and could only move by leaning on a cane. Sunset Rosalyn Mia was known as the most noble, beautiful, and ideal empress in the entire history of the empire. Not only was she a brilliant writer, but also a perfect diplomat, mastering 6 languages as well. She frequently established new medical institutions, genuinely caring for the sick and the poor of society. Rosalyn was considered a loving and kind empress, as she used to spend hours by the beds of the sick supporting them despite her limp. Everyone loved Rosalyn's cold beauty and dared not point out her ailment. Only one man did not share the general love and recognition, precisely that emperor known for his evil deeds. Several factors influenced his growing hatred, including the fact that they had been childless for a long time. Rosalyn remained calm in the hallway, understanding that that man had eliminated all her followers, even her close relatives. Her handmaiden watched Rosalyn with concern, immersed in her dark thoughts while she meditated that she was not going to give up. The girl felt a deep pain for Rosalyn, because she immediately remembered how she had returned even with her broken leg that day. Despite the serious injury, she calmly continued to convince the servant that she was fine and alive. Looking at the Empress's back, she cannot get used to understanding how cruel her destiny is to her. Rosalyn hears how from the adjacent room, which was the banquet hall, music comes as if inviting her to join. She stood motionless in front of the door of the fateful place, not knowing exactly what awaited her there. The Empress turns upon hearing the girl waiting for her approach her from behind with concern. At first, she remains restlessly silent, trying to get the words she wanted to say off her chest. Noticing her concern, Rosalyn tried to convince her that she was fine, then asked her to open the door in front of them. It's clear that this conversation was incredibly difficult for the girl, because her voice almost broke as she swore to be with her until the end. Rosalyn interrupted her, but fear made her remember her loved ones who died from illnesses and other accidents. She knows perfectly well that in all those deaths, including that of the Minister of the Interior, the beloved maid and others, the Emperor is the culprit. Seeing Anna clutching a fist to her chest, she thinks that she is the last one left with her, and she cannot lose her. Trying to appear as calm as possible, she orders her to leave without hesitation if something happens to her Anna. Begins to cry when she tells her that she prepared everything necessary in a safe place at the beach house. At first, she desperately refuses. But upon understanding that the Empress only wants to protect her, she finally leaves her. The way she addresses her makes the Empress smile, as it had been a long time since anyone called her by her name Rosie. Anna insists that Rosalyn wait a few days for the Count's help, who is fighting to save the Sunset family. This conversation is difficult for both Anna and the Empress, but she controls herself and with a soft smile asks for the door to be opened. No longer able to argue, she opens it for her. Through the doors of the room that would be her personal hell, Rosalyn walked forward and found herself in the middle of a bustling hall. Surrounded by guests and deafening music, she instantly found herself facing her greatest enemy sitting proudly on the throne as he watched her arrive. Gilotti watched tensely, as despite her injury, she walked with a steady gait through the banquet hall. Their gazes met when he called out to her. Terrible as ever noticing her inscrutable gaze, he ironically asks how she made it to the hall with her injured leg. Staring back at him with disdain, Rosalyn has no intention of backing down, so she retorts that, just because her leg doesn't bend doesn't mean she can't walk. The woman's reply provokes the expected reaction, so he just smiles wickedly and calls her a witch. In his thoughts, their argument doesn't go unnoticed by two men, one of them the foreign minister of Amor. The enemy nation's minister is surprised that despite all the obstacles placed in her way, she still managed to attend this event. Meanwhile, the argument between them reaches its climax, as Rosalyn infuriates him with her presumptuous comments. Although Rosalyn is clearly dominating the conflict, she knows that today she will be the one to fall. She sadly remembers her family, who did everything in their power to protect the family heirloom passed down from generation to generation. Her reflection is interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Natasha Roanti, who is determined to end this bloody game of chess. Like a red rose bearing death, she approaches the Empress, who is shocked by her bold appearance. Looking coyly into Rosalyn's eyes, she shamefully covers herself with her fan and asks to be punished without initially stating the reason. They are in the middle of a vast hall where Natasha announces that he would not have done it if she had told him she was carrying his child. Her declaration shocks all the distinguished guests, who for a long time can't believe what they are hearing. Rosalyn is also dumbfounded by this news, which now fills her with deep resentment and fury as she glares at the other woman. With a deathly glare, while Natasha continues her act, feigning pity and guilt without remorse. Without hesitation, she touches the Empress's hand to get closer and execute her plan. She smiles wickedly and opens her fan, revealing the bloody knife she was hiding, her chosen weapon at last. Natasha Roanti falls to the ground, surprising the Empress, who didn't even understand where the knife came from. She lies on the floor, her stomach bleeding profusely from the wound. Like a bloody rose, she silently demonstrates to everyone present just how serious her feigned injury is. The other guests immediately rush to the scene of the crime, just as bewildered as the Empress herself. Both Minister Amora and his aide were shocked by the skillful way Rosalyn was framed. Using such an ingenious trick, their eyes widened in surprise as they watched everyone worry about Natasha's health and see Rosalyn as the villain. The Emperor, meanwhile, is simply rejoicing, mentally, for having finally trapped the woman. Hiding his satisfied smile, he fuels the spectacle and stands up, furiously from his seat, waving his arms expressively as he calls for the soldiers.
Hearing the order to use weapons against the criminal, the Empress remains motionless as if being swallowed by water. At her feet lies her husband's bleeding mistress,
The one responsible for the absolute collapse of the Empress's power. On the victim's face, a pleased smile shines for having skillfully executed her terrible plan.
Receiving the order to surround the Empress and assist the wounded woman, everyone continues to stand still.
Around the bright patch of blood, Gilotti howls, furiously announces the end of the banquet and demands, openly, that they leave the scene of the incident. Finally, Rosalyn ends up completely isolated in the country she had served with passion and dedication her entire life. The delegation from Amor goes mad with rage, aware that the woman might die unable to survive the winter. As expected, the Empress was already in the dungeon guarded by strict guards. He locked her in the dungeon and tortured her for a long time, trying in vain to discover the location of the family relic, even though she knew his intentions. And despite the hellish pain caused by the most refined tortures, the woman kept her secret. They whipped her back with lashes, tore out her fingernails with pliers, and beat her mercilessly until her body was drowning in blood. Meanwhile, the news reached the people outside the palace, triggering an uprising, whose only objective was her freedom. A group of commoners and followers of the Empress begged the Emperor for a pardon. He simply watched them coldly from his balcony, seeing more and more people join the protest, his face radiating fury, as he had truly believed their protest would subside in a few days. The poor woman was mercilessly hung by her hands, preparing to execute Gilotti's brilliant new plan. Her clothes were just a blood-soaked rag, those of a barefoot martyr, whose only surviving beauty was her long hair. After being unconscious, she woke up again, when they cruelly threw ice-cold water on her. Her suffering eyes opened, and she instantly saw the satisfied Emperor before her, with his hands shamelessly crossed over his chest. Like two opposite poles, their gazes met as he spoke about not having gotten anything from her. The pleas of the inhabitants who surrounded the building reached them with the clear demand to free the poor woman. Seeing her battered but still proud face, He informed her that he would spare her life, for which she should be grateful. Finally, he turned to the two executioners and ordered them to deport her to the frozen mountains of Kraturia. That wasn't the only thing her ex-husband had prepared for her, as he caught her attention by proudly showing her two chests. He presented his gift and threw the two heads of Rosalyn's deceased parents, causing a shock. At first, she found it hard to accept what had happened, so she remained silent and paralyzed, feeling as if she couldn't breathe. Screaming hysterically throughout the dungeon, she uttered his name with fury and made a sudden lunge forward. Two unscrupulous servants immediately stopped the woman, pinning her head to the ground with a sharp pole. Gilotti clearly enjoys the open spectacle, mockingly watching as her face takes on a vacant expression. Pinned firmly against the floor, she glares at him, furiously promising that she will never forgive him. Meanwhile, nearby stood that man dressed in black like a warrior, a horseman of the apocalypse. He looked with discontent at the city spread out before him, thinking it was time to return, not to stay there. The man feels a strong sense of anger growing inside him, caused by the overthrow of the enemy empress. As he tried to understand the reason for such emotions, he looked at the tower, convinced he would destroy it with his own hands. The red-haired man interrupted his solitary meditations, approaching from behind on his horse. At first, he didn't understand what Timon was staring at so intensely, but eventually he saw the courtyard of Thanatos behind the man. A cunning smile lit up his face, as he thought that recent events might have influenced his companion. He decided to intervene in the unfolding events, so he approached Timon and casually mentioned where the Empress had been exiled. Without getting any reaction from the silent man, he simply expressed his regret for what happened as memories of their encounters surfaced in Timon's mind. When his companion mentioned how much she surpassed others, he silently agreed that someone like her couldn't be lost. The minister abruptly pulled the reins and turned his horse around before the other could react. Timon was already at a distance, without explaining where he was headed, riding at full speed. He only heard the shout of his companion, who was trying to figure out his direction, while meanwhile the Empress lay peacefully in the middle of a mountain of snow, mentally cursing Gilead for a death like this before her very eyes. The faces of her loved ones murdered by the Emperor appeared, making her suffer for not being able to protect them. She tried to understand where she went wrong, since all this time she had only tried to be a good ruler and protect her loved ones. Her ready departure to the afterlife was interrupted by a man who appeared suddenly and stopped about 3 feet from her. Rushing, he approached her, thinking what a ridiculous death was destined. For such a majestic woman, getting close enough, he sat beside her with thoughts tormenting him about why she was born specifically in Thanatos. He couldn't understand why this woman had to be with a beast like the Emperor. The current one who killed her, Timon, watched as her already lifeless eyes slowly began to close. Losing contact with the reality around them, the man impulsively hugged her agonizing body, consumed by his thoughts. Why wasn't he the first to find her while holding her head? He said aloud that if this life is no use to her, he would gladly take it. With his finger, he gently traced the corners of her lips down to her cheeks. Then he pressed his lips to hers. Their human story is not so simple, for on one occasion a curious god was gathering materials to create man. Gradually adding different emotions, he was satisfied with the process, but wished to fill the future creature with goodness. To his dismay, as soon as he turned his back, the devil jumped into the pot, which naturally had consequences. Every step the newcomers took placed them between good and evil. They could attack others over trivial things and start wars for no reason, and showing none of their virtues, killing each other upon finding out the supreme god was enraged and tore apart the creator of humanity, punishing him for the imbalance caused by scattering his fragments across the land. It spawned 6 divine elements sealed in objects endowed with elemental power, while the remaining particles penetrated the human mind, gifting them with various supernatural abilities. Timon possesses the power of life, which is why he kissed Rosalyn to infuse his energy into her. Giving a part of himself and quickly returning to the camp, he held the Empress's body in his arms. In disbelief that he had managed to touch her, he thought that now that he had her with him, she would definitely live no matter what. Meanwhile, his partner was already working on setting up personnel in the new snowy area. Setting up a temporary post, the man watched ironically as his soldiers shivered in the cold. He was wondering how the people of the Imperial region survived such cold when Timon finally arrived at the settlement. He immediately drew everyone's attention by showing up with the Empress in his arms. Ignoring the other man's anger, he walked right past him. He covered her with his coat, and a few seconds later his perplexed friend could only turn to see her veil fluttering behind them. Surprise washed over him when he finally realized the utter foolishness of the minister's actions in kidnapping the Empress. As he carried a weakened Rosalyn to the bed, he stopped. He felt an inner sense of relief that she was finally safe the moment he laid her down. She was already unconscious, and didn't immediately notice the drastic change in her situation after he had completed his ultimate mission. The man sat beside her and thought deeply as he watched the sleeping Empress, noticing her exhausted appearance. He could only remember how majestic she appeared during their last negotiations. Timon had tried to obtain the island in exchange for protection against pirates, but Rosalyn immediately discovered the detrimental aspects of the offer. Timon had smiled shamelessly, trying to convince her that her potential losses were insignificant. But she was an impenetrable diplomat. She proposed another island and immediately presented him with one of her options. Thereby revealing her true motivations and goals, the Empress knew that one of Timon's ships had previously wrecked near that island, losing valuable jewels. Skillfully manipulating her opponent, she insisted that very valuable items needed by her country were located there. His face twisted into a grimace of displeasure when she claimed that the property had already been rescued by her family. Finally, she promised to return it only in exchange for Timon's exclusive trading rights. The red bud loomed over her like a sin on his conscience as he remembered how she had negotiated for those rare rights. For an exclusive resource belonging to Timon, the minister recalled how she irritated and criticized him without ever losing her courage and elegance. Watching her physical reactions, he noticed her fever was slowly getting higher and more intense. As if calling out to him for help for a moment, he hesitated. Thinking about how to improve the Empress's condition, he recalled the previous kiss on the snowy plain and guessed that the energy he transferred hadn't been enough. Supporting her back with his arm, Timon reflected on the fact that she was once his enemy, the very one he had so desperately wanted to defeat in the diplomatic arena. Drawing her weak and fragile body closer to his, he couldn't understand why he couldn't bear to see her in pain as he kissed her lips once more. He repeated the process of transferring his life energy to improve her condition. As she felt a flow of energy and strange sensations in her mouth, Rosalyn opened her eyes and saw his were closed, realizing what was happening. She recoiled immediately as if she'd been burned, slapping his cheek with her palm and staring into his eyes with astonishment. She managed to form the question about what he was doing, and he replied that he was healing her, but his excuses about healing weren't enough. So she demanded that he return her to the frozen mountain. She froze at first when he said he wanted to see her alive, but then he grabbed her by the wrist. Hearing her plea to let her die, the man looked at her as if she were an alien, not understanding how she could talk about her life like that. He observed her hands, tormented by torture, listening to her words about not wanting to live after everything that had happened. The Empress knew that she now had no one close to her left, nor any chance to reverse the situation. Not expecting this from her, he angrily asked if after so many years of service, she wanted to die so easily. Deep down he hoped for a no, but the helpless woman did not meet his expectations after several seconds of silence. She took his sturdy hand with her delicate stump, finally confirming that he had been her last hope for a long time, provoking the urge to crush her throat. Smiling wearily, she pulled his hand to her neck and closed it around it as she began to ask him to end it, leaving him completely shocked. To his very soul, when Rosalyn looked at him with a plea begging him not to save her from imminent death, Damon didn't even realize how both. His hands ended up clasped around the woman's neck as she intensely begged him to kill her. He only felt a perceptible tension. Understanding that she had been his problem from the beginning without letting go, he noticed how thin her neck was, and how easily it could break if he just applied pressure. One single movement would be enough to help her close her eyes that no longer had the will to live. The woman's current state clashed with the grand and noble bearing she displayed during diplomatic negotiations. The Empress continued to look at him in silence with glassy eyes, causing him only sadness. He finally separated his hands from the woman's neck, refusing to become her instrument. For her own suicide, instead, he pulled her toward him, grabbing her broken leg and squeezing it with his large hand. Much to the Empress's surprise, he shocked her even more by bringing her limb to his mouth and pressing his lips to it. Beginning the treatment, she tried to pull away, asking him what he was trying to do without having explained first without letting go of her calf. He ordered her not to move since it could interrupt the treatment. Damon stopped when she almost pleadingly begged him to stop averting her gaze to the side. Her complaints angered the man, so he was ready to leave if she wanted him to, but he cut himself off mid-sentence. He impulsively gets closer to her, and almost shouting tells her to keep fighting until the end. Damon can't believe that she would ask this of him. So he orders her to fight and win, not just against him, but against others too. He reminds Rosalyn how majestic she was and insists that she fight until the end. Surely in that moment she herself felt that the man believed in her more than she did herself, even though he had been her enemy before after a long conversation and a difficult treatment. Damon decided to leave the tent, stopping one last time at the doorway, holding the curtain with his hand. He glanced back looking for Rosalyn, and noticed with satisfaction that the Empress was still sleeping, settled comfortably on the large bed where he had been with her. Meanwhile in Thanatos, an uneasy atmosphere reigned, caused by the new shenanigans of the Emperor. Gilotti stood proudly in front of his messenger, whom he had previously ordered to obtain certain information. Suspicious of the result, he forcefully asked the man if he was sure that the Empress was dead. The man replied confidently that she was, which raised further questions as to why he was so sure if the woman's body had not yet been found. The Emperor looked away uneasily, listening to the servant's words about the blood trails they had found, possibly left behind after an animal attack, but that wasn't their only task. So when Gilotti asked about Rosalyn's relic, the man looked down in shame. The servant then voiced his assumption that the relic had already been stolen a long time ago since they were unable to find it. His words enraged the Emperor, who was convinced it was impossible since the ornament had always been with the Empress. The messenger was ordered to search all places related to the Empress and find the relic. As he prepared to carry out the order, he walked toward the exit, leaving the Emperor alone in his room. Gilotti was suddenly overcome by a sickening feeling of slow decay running through his entire body. Covering his mouth with his hand, he felt like he was going to throw up before he could reach the bathroom. The imperial family's ability was death. Its potency varied depending on the vessel, manifesting in different forms each time, and Gilotti's power wasn't very strong. He could only use it on humans, fatally infecting them with the plague, and every use of his power brought consequences. He began to feel these consequences after destroying Rosalyn's surroundings. No matter how much he tried to use his ability against the Empress, he failed to kill her due to a ritual. The ritual required that during the wedding ceremony, she drink his blood mixed with holy water, so that the spouses would not kill one another. The Emperor tried to kill Rosalyn using other methods, but he always failed because of the sacred relic of her lineage. Gilotti was unaware of the woman's true fate. So now, upon learning of her death, he celebrated, bursting into laughter. His mind was overcome with a mad joy. Realizing he had finally killed his worst enemy and achieved his goal, he raised his hands joyfully. He shouted that he had finally done everything correctly, not noticing that the painting behind him was moving until he instinctively turned upon hearing the noise. He saw the heavy portrait of Rosalyn's deceased brother hurtling toward him. He screamed in terror and jumped back from where the painting was about to land. He saved himself from a painful impact. At the last moment, a group of servants immediately rushed into the room upon hearing his piercing scream. They found him lying on the floor about 3 feet from the portrait. Unwilling to answer what had happened, he angrily ordered his servant to help him up. Gilotti gets to his feet and stares at the enormous portrait in front of him, after which he immediately orders them to get rid of it. That incident wasn't the last to throw his plans off course. As now surrounded by his servants, his gaze was drawn to another painting. He focused his attention solely on Rosalyn's portrait, as if she were devouring him with her chilling gaze from the wall. The majestic portrait painted during the time of their shared past life instantly captured the man's attention. Unable to bear the tension any longer, he grabs his sword and begins slashing the painting in a frenzy. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he wearily throws his weapon to the ground and tries to catch his breath as he desperately begs for her to die. The Emperor completely ignores those around him and once again lifts his gaze to the terrifying portrait. His eyes meet again with the horrifying, albeit painted eyes of the Empress, whose image on the canvas he had just torn apart. He cries like a baby, kneeling and clutching his head, causing great anxiety among his servants. Meanwhile, Timon and his followers begin to approach the lands of his home nation, surrounded by hot sands and the scorching sun. He carefully sits Rosalyn down beside him and rests her head on his shoulder, aware that the suffocating heat. This is unusual for her. The Empress gazes thoughtfully at his face, trying to remember how long they've been together. Images of their last night immediately appear in her mind, during which a sudden act of adultery occurred between them. Rosalyn curiously extends her hands in front of her and inspects them. Comparing them to their previous condition, she finally notices a huge difference in their healing. Even though she hadn't used any medicinal ointment, this immediately leads her to believe it was all thanks to the man sitting beside her, who had so painstakingly healed and helped her. Rosalyn averts her gaze, continuing to reflect on the train of thought that had arisen. She refuses to believe that he possesses the last fragment of divine power, as its wielder had never appeared among the others. Noticing the shift in her mood, Timon decides to ask how she feels, thus interrupting her train of thought. Rosalyn looks at him and states that even though she's been saved, she could still die at any moment. In response, the man moves closer to her, and with a defiant smile tells her that he doesn't give a damn, holding on tightly to both the reins and the young woman. He declares honestly that he will save her as many times as it takes. At first she wanted to protest, but didn't have the chance. Distracted by the walls that appeared before them surrounding the capital city, Timon got her attention and calmly concluded that they had finally arrived in his homeland, where she would now be staying. Before them rose a fortress of sand, surrounded by vibrant flowers, hot sands, and a warm blue sea. Crowds of enthusiastic citizens joyfully welcomed the great minister and General Timon, who arrived surrounded by a delegation. He first glanced at the crowd, then at the young woman, and noticing she was feeling worse, he decided to leave the event as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Rosalyn was already drenched in sweat from the sudden unpleasant change in climate. He turned to his companion Ronazzo, ready to ask him to cover for him in his absence. Timon explained his urgent business and said he was leaving first, since Ronazzo would have to present all the reports himself. Without waiting for a reply from the red-haired man, Timon rushed off, which further angered Ronazzo at his brazen audacity. Timon galloped at full speed towards his palace, worried about the woman's condition. With her oblivious to the situation in his arms, they finally reached Timon's estate, where a group of servants greeted him. The minister ignored his butler, who was pacing restlessly with the others, and immediately overwhelmed him with questions about who he was carrying. Looking at the older man, he only asked if the water had been prepared as he had requested in advance. In the end, Timon ended up in front of the door to the room with the pool where a servant led him. Upon entering, he held the Empress in his arms, and finally ordered them not to disturb him or enter the room, forcefully shutting the door behind him. He laid her down on the tile next to the hot water pool, then stripped down to his underwear. He leaned over the young woman and removed the white cloak that had covered her during the trip. Timon examined her body, and with a calm smile, noticed that her wounds had already closed. The man was clearly satisfied with the results, since even the immense number of bruises had preparing for the next hydrotherapy sessions because of the intense heat. His companion woke up immediately and screamed in surprise. Observing the new surroundings, Rosalyn stares at him intensely, trying to get a clear answer about where they are. He just smiles satisfied. He informs her that they are in his house, and more specifically in his private bathroom. She turns around and is surprised. Wondering why he has such an immensely large bathroom, her eyes widen as she notices a shelf. With the man's belongings nearby among the mess of towels and cloths, her gaze fixes on a knife. It was meant for self-defense. Timon followed Rosalyn's gaze, and with his arms crossed in disapproval. He decided to ask her what that was about. The Empress approaches and resumes the conversation, accusing him of making a bad decision by saving her. Her attempt didn't have the desired effect, so he just replied with a smile that he would decide what was right. She walks away disappointed, calling him smug, to which he responds that arrogance is a part of everyone. Meanwhile, the woman approached the edge of the pool, distracting him with questions about his intentions, until she asked him directly. He fell silent and openly looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her chest. Timon was so absorbed in looking at his companion that he didn't answer her question. Rosalyn notices his reaction and mocks him, saying that she didn't expect that someone like him would get flustered seeing a woman. He awkwardly scratches the back of his neck and notes that he also didn't expect to be so fascinated by the empress of another country. The woman looks at him with disdain and tells him to find someone else. Instead of bothering her with his whims, he agrees with a smile that there are many who want him, but they are all insignificant compared to her. The empress dismisses his words as nonsense, assuring him that she possesses nothing, something he clearly disagrees with. It's clear the man didn't accept her self-assessment, so for a moment he considered saying something about it. Timon watches the young woman get out of the water and begins to list her virtues, mentioning her heart, her mind, and her body. With a smile, he offers her his hand and states that he wants to possess all those qualities, and all of her. Upon hearing him, she responds with a triumphant smile, saying it's a pity that because he didn't follow her movement, he will get nothing. And as she was speaking, he doesn't even notice how the young woman quickly got out of the water and moved toward the wall. She pulls out a dagger, then bravely places it to her throat, makes a cut, and states that from now on, she has nothing to give him. Her act deeply disturbs Timon, who watches as the crimson drops spread quickly across the floor by his feet. In a fit of rage, he tackles her to the ground, furious that she has acted this way again. Even after he had just saved her in her state, only fragments of his words reached her. This surprised her, since before they had always wanted to kill her. Memories immediately surfaced in her mind. Memories that included the conversation with the Emperor after those endless days of torture. Timon was different from the Emperor in that he had a desire. An overwhelming desire to save her, which is why he was now fighting again to save her life. Rosalyn shuddered as the man pressed his lips more firmly to her bleeding neck, gently holding her head with one hand. He continues to hold her limp body in his arms. Relieved that the wound wasn't too deep, the man bared his teeth as she opened her eyes again. Annoyed that she dared to try to die again, feeling a rush of emotions, he leaned in towards her and tried to connect. Telling her that he saved her by giving her his own life force, he finally gently embraced Rosalyn, reflecting on how he had desperately saved her. And now he held her carefully in his arms. Leaning completely on the man's body, she still felt weak, so she could only continue to listen to what he was saying, unable to respond. Timon hugged her tighter, holding her tightly in his powerful arms and declaring that she was now his. Meanwhile, his companion Renazo found himself in a difficult situation when he ran into Queen Amora Theolantifu, much to his dismay. Due to Timon's disappearance, he had to face his fear when she started asking why Timon wasn't coming to the palace. Not knowing how to answer, Renazo timidly looked away, hastily making up an excuse. The man regained his composure and skillfully began to flatter the queen, diverting her attention from the subject. She didn't forget to ask where Timon was, either forcing Renazo to invent new excuses once again. He finally replied that his companion had fallen ill after getting angry with Emperor Thanatos. Seeing Theo's displeased face, he immediately explained that Timon hadn't said much, and just announced he was going home. The queen, with a defiant smile, claimed she wasn't surprised. Because the emperor's family is disgusting and nauseating still, she expressed curiosity since this was the first time that Timon's supposed illness had appeared so suddenly. The thoughtful queen commented that she should visit him, but Renazo tried to convince her otherwise by any means necessary. Suddenly he began to tell her about what the Emperor of Thanatos had done, asking if she knew anything about it. At first she listened to him in silence, analyzing his proposal. But then she enthusiastically declares they should hold a banquet for his return. Renazo exhales in relief, having gotten rid of her, and returns calmly to the palace. As they were traveling, a knight broke away from the group. Stopped by a girl who had spoken with Theo earlier, after a few brief exchanges, the young black-haired woman manages to convince him to follow her. From that moment on, the procession ahead didn't notice his absence, so he left the formation and walked after the girl. Meanwhile, Timon again uses his ability to transfer Shangming Li, biting the lips of his former empress. She feels her body being pressed against his, and realizes that his healing methods are making her uneasy. Rosalyn places her palm on his chest and pushes him away. Interrupting their kiss reluctantly, he pulls away from her lips. And he, just like her, tries to catch his breath in silence. Noticing the change in her emotions, Timon watches her face and sees how she averts her gaze out of discomfort and rejection despite her doubts. The young woman does feel completely healthy. After the man's magical touch, Timon smirks shamelessly again, asking her if she was starting to regret not being able to die when he received no answer. He asked her not to look at him like that, because both her expression and her eyes excited him. The man's last words stunned her so much that for a few moments, she repeated his words in her mind thoughtfully. After all the humiliations from the Emperor, she had started to doubt her own sexuality and appeal. He used to criticize her in front of other women, saying that even hugging a doll was more pleasant than holding her. Realizing that Timon was waiting for an answer, she lowered her gaze and asked him to leave her alone. At first, he thought she didn't like him. But she immediately retorted, asking if she was supposed to obey his orders now. The man stood still in front of Rosalyn. Sitting on the floor, she asked if he would keep saving her like he had just done. The Empress stood her ground, defending her right to decide whether she would live or die. Timon looked away calmly, accepting her point of view on the matter, then looked back at the woman. And he joyfully realized that she had returned to her old self. She finally looked like the majestic Empress she was. Not like the sad woman who begged for death. Smiling, he noted that she looked more beautiful now than ever, arguing with him and defending her point of view. The man reached out to her, intending to touch her and offer some kind words as he touched her chin. He openly confessed that she was driving him crazy. Unable to bear his attention, she immediately swatted his hand away and ordered him to stop touching her. She turned away, accidentally revealing the cut on her neck, and told him not to touch her. At first, he fell silent, annoyed at her ordering him not to touch her lips whenever he wanted. She is surprised at how the man reacts with approval to her firm defense of her boundaries, and he promises not to do it again. Closing his eyes guiltily, he repeats that he won't kiss her again if it bothers her that much, stating his promise once more. Looking her seriously in the eyes, he finally makes an oath to reinforce his words. Rosalyn then resumes the conversation. Recalling that she had always believed he hated her, she asked him directly, and Timon looked slyly at the woman sitting before him. She asked why he insisted on tormenting her. Timon explained that he had never hated her, and the previous resentment was only because she annoyed him. The man stood up, adding that despite everything, he had given her all the life force she needed, even though she hadn't asked for it. He glanced slyly at the indignant girl and suggested she find a new reason to live, since she no longer had one. Rosalyn was still sitting on the floor as he curiously began to list options, including revenge and the fall of an empire. When she rejected all of his suggestions, he quickly moved closer to her. Pulling on a lock of her hair, he asked, "What about love?" The Empress was so embarrassed that for the first few seconds, she didn't know how to answer her arrogant companion, who was smiling sweetly. Timon cheerfully commented that he loved her expression, which proved he had hit the mark. The exhausting day finally came to an end, and Rosalyn finally found herself in her new bed. The young woman was tormented by a nightmare about the fatal events of her distant past. That night, an ordinary town suffered greatly from an attack by aggressive bulls that destroyed everything in their path. There were so many that the surrounding area was literally swarming with enemies falling directly from a magical fissure in the sky. Meanwhile, in a shelter, the Emperor and Empress were protecting the small, helpless children. Rosalyn was terrified, but she continued to reassure the children, promising to protect them from the creatures. One monster broke away from the pack and headed straight for the shelter, smashing through a wall and rushing toward the woman and children. Gilotti feebly tried to protect them, holding his sword with trembling hands, but he doubted he could do much to affect the situation. Upon confronting the bull, he dramatically addressed the Empress, promising to eliminate the dangerous creature. The Emperor raised his sword once, but immediately backed away in fear when the monster dodged and rushed toward him. Then, changing its trajectory, it began to run directly toward the Empress and the children, terrifying them deeply. The sight shocked that woman so much that her face screamed danger and fear. At the last moment, she managed to dodge the attack without letting go of the little boy, and the bull crashed head-on into the wall. While trying to escape, the Empress didn't notice a piece of sharp wood that pierced her foot and calf. She felt an infernal pain and wanted to scream, but managed to hold back in the end. Meanwhile, Gilotti continued to call out to the monster timidly and dramatically, while Rosalyn covered her mouth. Knowing that the creatures reacted to sound, he swore he would demonstrate the strength of imperial power, but in response, he was brutally kicked by the animal's hind legs like a sack of potatoes. The Emperor was thrown a few feet against the wall, and then he was punched in the face by a piece of rock. Squatting down, he furiously asked what the knights were doing. Clearly understanding that he had to flee, a terrifying creature stared him down grotesquely, showing its long green tongue. Out of fear, the Emperor immediately ran to the other end of the room, abandoning his wounded wife and the child. Ignoring the children who were right there, he hid behind them, using an overturned table for protection. The poor little children immediately understood that the man was trying to use them as a human shield. Putting them in danger, the oldest among them, a boy, looked around the destroyed room, realizing they had to take urgent action. At the same time, Rosalyn, with trembling hands, was trying to come up with something to save herself and the children from certain death. In front of her was the sword abandoned by the Emperor, which she immediately recognized as her last hope for salvation. By then, the boy had already approached the woman, confidently agreeing when she asked for his help. Rosalyn told him she was proud of him and quickly explained a plan where he had to run toward the door, acting as bait calmly. The Empress gently caressed the boy's cheek, adding that he should scream loudly while doing it. The boy stood up. Preparing to carry out his dangerous mission to save the others, he gathered his will into a fist. He shouted and began to run across the room, attracting the monster's attention. Rosalyn understood she had to hurry, but her injured leg greatly hindered her movements. She gripped the sword tightly, feeling that she couldn't waste the opportunity this brave boy had given her. With some difficulty, she stood up and approached the monster from behind, ready to deliver the final blow and kill it. The others present, including Gilotti, nervously watched the actions of the boy and the woman as if they were actors in a movie. Finally, Rosalyn landed a clean blow to its side that immediately brought the being to the ground, no longer dangerous. Turning toward the Emperor, she fixed a contemptuous gaze on him, knowing how he had cowardly hidden behind the children. Both froze as if in a slow-motion recording as the wounded Empress continued to lock eyes with the coward at first. He just shrugged awkwardly, trying to ignore the uncomfortable stares. But he finally felt fear when he noticed a detail. He saw the hatred from the children he had so maliciously endangered as they clenched their fists. He understood that now everyone knew of his shame and tried to justify himself by saying he was the emperor of the country, but the pressure of their glares only increased. When he noticed that his joy at them being safe didn't affect them, stammering Gilotti alternated, his gaze between the children and the bloody sword in the Empress's hands, which was the last straw in his personal hell. It was the intense gaze of the woman who had protected them all instead of him, and unable to bear the pressure any longer. He let out a hysterical scream that echoed throughout the town like a stuck pig. Having dealt with the rest of the monsters, the knights came running at the scream of the Emperor who had escaped from the shelter. Obviously, the incident didn't affect his despicable character, which he continued to shamelessly display once back at the castle. Feeling no guilt for the Empress, who was now limping because of what happened, he proudly paraded around with Natasha by his side. She appeared before him with her maid, and his companion didn't hesitate to mock the woman after he once again used their encounter. As a pretext to humiliate her, and ignoring the Empress's existence, Natasha spoke loudly about her limp. Gilotti supported her outburst, saying he didn't understand how she could remain so haughty with such ugliness. Rosalyn remained standing with her servant, feeling as unpleasant as if she'd been doused with cold water. She finally woke up and opened her eyes, pushing the memory of how she had been crippled from her mind as she held her head. She remembered that exactly 3 years had passed since all that happened, but what worried her more wasn't so much the humiliating way they treated her back then, but whether the child was okay now. He was precisely the one to whom she had given her relic before attending that fateful banquet, and getting out of bed the former Empress headed quickly towards the doors leading to the terrace, and taking her solitude as an opportunity, Rosalyn, illuminated by the moon, decided to die. Upon opening both doors, she found herself on a wide terrace with a breathtaking view. The woman never imagined the view from her room would look directly out onto the glistening night sea as she gripped the railings. She was surprised to see that this was what the sea she had only heard about looked like, and she smiled calmly at the thought that such a beautiful world exists after all, and Rosalyn paused to enjoy the scenery. She saw it before her death, and began to eagerly climb the railings, finally sitting on top of them facing the beautiful sea. Feeling gratitude towards Timon for showing her this, she was about to plummet to the ground, but her attempt failed once again when a man caught her at the last moment, and Rosalyn turned to him wearily, as he murmured that he wouldn't abandon his post even in his dreams to save her the previous feeling of calm. Turned to surprise when Timon shifted her pliant body, holding her in his arms. He smiled, saying he wanted to change her position a bit, which surprised her as he maintained eye contact, and promised to save her no matter what. Although she knows his healing method is somewhat problematic, she blushes and becomes enraged. When he says her actions indicate she desires him, Timon continues that if that's the case, she should say it openly, and he's always willing to listen to her. He smiles, realizing he has changed her negative attitude and provoked an outburst of emotions. The man took her back to the room and proposed a walk, mentioning they were both awake, although Rosalyn refused. Timon sat her astride in front of him to show her a good spot, looking at her mockingly. He advised her to hold on tight, intending to speed up. The Empress didn't answer, and looked away, understanding that he wouldn't listen to her now. He just thought with satisfaction that seeing her recover his ability didn't seem so useless. Timon remembers how 5 years ago, his condition began to worsen due to a sudden increase in body temperature. This illness affected all the members of his family, and it was passed down from generation to generation. If he hadn't found a worn-out manuscript in one of the corners of the family library, he would have died without knowing it was the 5th divine element. It was called life and was unknown. Until now, because no one could physically withstand it. The wielder could die from the strain on their heart. If he didn't release the accumulated heat in his body within a certain period, Timon could easily solve this by finding a woman. Considering this was the primary method to get rid of the heat, he curiously never used this option for a very simple reason. For an unknown reason, being near women frequently made him nauseous. The general would run out of brothels away from courtesans and dancers whenever they approached him. One such night, while in the company of beautiful women, he once again ran out of the place. On the verge of vomiting, the man leaned against a palm tree, suffering an attack of nausea and dizziness caused by the acidic smell. Immediately, a thought struck him. The Empress, unlike other women, didn't have that smell. He became enraged, realizing that such inappropriate thoughts shouldn't arise since she was the ruler of an enemy country. After a few endless minutes, however, Rosalyn's voice pulled him from the depths of his memories. Timon answered her question about where they were. He said that he wanted to show her something on his forest grounds. She dismounted, leaning on his hand, and at the same time, she remarked that she didn't know he was so spontaneous. Extending his large palm to her, he asked her to give him her hand to hold. Obviously, Rosalyn first ignored his help, saying she could continue on her own. He then pulled her towards him. He warned her that she could slip on the damp ground just as he'd cautioned. The Empress gave in to his request and placed her hand in his, preparing for what he was about to show her. Timon then led them without stopping deeper into the clearing, telling her they were almost there. Finally, the man stopped and calmly indicated they had arrived at the right spot. Before the woman's eyes appeared a multitude of moon butterflies fluttering and filling the space with their silver light. Rosalyn was so impressed by the creatures appearing under the moonlight that at first she couldn't utter a word. The man observed her amazement and went on to share the story of the moon butterflies' origin and their life cycle. Although it takes them up to 9 months to take their form, their life is brief, lasting barely more than a week. During all that time, Rosalyn couldn't look away and commented with a mischievous smile on her face that they looked like real dancing stars. Timon looked at the Empress, asking if she knew why they shone so brightly. The woman finally turned her attention to the man, looking questioningly into his eyes, waiting to hear the answer as he approached her. He didn't rush to reveal the answer that held the mystery, because for him that reason was significant. The girl turns around. Understanding what he'd meant when he said they simply try to live and desperately flap their wings, she doesn't share his optimistic enthusiasm. So she replies that they will die anyway, even if they leave behind descendants, but before Rosalyn can finish speaking, a bright butterfly flutters toward her face, catching her attention. Smiling with satisfaction, Timon responds that it's different and that they're talking about slightly different things. He believes there's a huge difference between dying, leaving something behind, or turning to dust. His words that some die without doing anything leave the girl thinking. Rosalyn raises her head again, watching thousands of magical butterflies, illuminating the path. Right before this romantic stroll, turmoil related to Rona was brewing, and a worried queen. He ran at full speed toward Timon after everyone, including Teo, gathered at a table to celebrate the arrival. At first, the queen was in a good mood, so Rona ate and drank as if nothing was wrong. The man choked in surprise when the woman asked him directly who Timon had brought from Thanatos last night. He was so surprised by the question that at first he could only clean up the spilled alcohol without saying a word. Like a huntress, Teo noticed his hesitation and how he struggled to find an answer. Rona decided that leaving was a bad idea and lied, saying he felt sick. The perceptive queen sensed there was something strange in his words, perceiving that he was hiding something. Upon leaving the general celebration, he headed immediately to Timon's palace, intending to warn him that Teo already knew everything. Renazo left his horse and ran quickly toward his comrade's room, overcoming every obstacle in his path. The administrator tremblingly blocked the sacred door, refusing to let him in even if it was about royal matters. The man roared furiously, telling him that it couldn't be more important than a royal order, and pushed the administrator aside. Renazo ordered everyone to move and grabbed the doorknob, yanking the door open. Upon bursting into Timon's room, the red-haired man immediately saw the scene he had already imagined. As soon as he entered, a sharp knife came flying at him, missing his head by just a few inches. In front of him, a barefoot man appeared, wearing only a kimono, clearly annoyed at being awakened by a guest. Looking closer, the red-haired man, as expected, discovered the Empress, sleeping in the same bed as Timon. The minister noticed his unexpected visitor's hesitation and threatened him again, saying he'd tear his eye out if he didn't leave. Seeing Timon's ready blade pointed directly at him, Renazo shot out of the room. The man accepted defeat and sat on the sofa, listening to the scolding from the administrator, who had already warned him about this. The young man was surprised when the old man spoke to him, suddenly offering a clean cloth for his wound. At first, he didn't understand why he was being given the object, but the administrator immediately pointed to his cut cheek as he took the cloth. He reflected that if not for the illness, the general would definitely be the best in battle and would strike fear into his enemies. He, the queen, and Renazo were true friends since childhood, who helped each other through any misfortune, and the red-haired man is sure that. Even as students, he always teased Timon and played with him while Teo stood by and joked around. As he looked at the coffee that had been prepared, he remembered how Timon helped him when his family was accused of treason, thus saving him from death. For this reason, the man sat down to reflect on whether he should obey him as the friend who once helped him or not. To the guy's surprise, his friend did bother to pay attention to him. To hear what he wanted to report, Timon leaned back in his chair, sitting across from the red-haired man, and said he was ready to listen. For the first few minutes, a long and awkward silence filled the room. As the guy prepared himself, Renazo cleared his throat, ready to speak with the serious man about everything he had hidden for so long. When he finally asked if Timon had really brought that woman with him, he pretended not to understand upon hearing this attempt to change the subject. The red-haired man repeated the question about the woman, slamming his fist on the desk. Timon clearly didn't like that behavior, so he glared at him and asked what he saw. Angrily, Renazo replied that he saw everything, including her strange silver hair. This provoked a wave of anger in Timon, and in response he stated that Renazo should tear his eyes out. After that, Renazo started to deny that he had seen anything. He got angry, joking with Timon and adding that he probably wouldn't talk like that to Her Majesty the Queen. Taking a sip of tea, the general asked why he suddenly mentioned the Queen and what role she played in all of this. Renazo clutched his aching head and answered honestly that she also wanted to know who had come with him. Timon placed the cup on the table, saying he would ask one last question, but the other man immediately interrupted him. Timon asked with irritation if he planned on personally telling the queen about the woman who was living with him. The man just smirked disdainfully without looking away from him, and said that he didn't plan on telling her. Meanwhile, Rosalyn was dreaming again a dream whose emotional tone remained unclear. The pleasant young woman who invited her to join turned out to be her maid Anna, who promised to serve her some delicious tea. The Empress stared at her perplexed, trying to guess what she was doing there. Anna didn't calm down until she called the young woman to the improvised table and sat her down beside her on the mat as she had been ordered. Young Rosalyn took the cup waiting for Anna to pour the tea, but the scene changed rapidly before her eyes. She didn't have time to get used to the calm atmosphere when the cup in her hands filled with blood that quickly spread over her hands. The peaceful garden transformed into the Empress's personal hell, where she sat amidst rivers of blood and looked at the arrested young woman. Rosalyn screamed in shock upon seeing that the arrested young woman was her former maid Charlotte. That wasn't the only nightmare that was destroying her. Slowly that night, so she opened her eyes in shock at the next sight. It was the heads of her father and mother, flying from their shoulders after an unjust decision by the cruel emperor. Feeling a wave of panic, she covered her mouth with her hands upon hearing their voices calling her dear Rosie. She cried inconsolably while screaming hysterically about how this could happen to her dear and beloved parents. The Empress continued to cry desperately until the next guest in her dream spoke to her from behind, and though she was still crying, the young woman turned when she heard her name Rosie, as someone called to her again. The guest turned out to be her grandfather, who filled the place with light as he spoke about what he should have watched over. He looked down sadly and said he never wanted to send her to the imperial family, fearing that Rosalyn would be unhappy. She shouted that he wasn't to blame and that she had made her own decision when he asked for forgiveness for abandoning her. Not wanting to let him go, she squeezed her deceased grandfather's hand tightly until she noticed he was starting to disappear. Before she could even think that he was gone, everything vanished into the void, leaving her alone and very vulnerable to the ghosts of the past. She tried to process it all and fixed her gaze forward, her sadness turning into a strange smile, a sign of her imminent collapse. While convincing herself that she was fine and leaving trails of blood, she approached the edge of the cliff, symbolizing the end of her cruel fate. Standing on the edge, she addressed her loved ones, saying she would soon join them, and jumped instantly. She falls for a long time with the intention of crashing against the ground and finally putting an end to her suffering. But to her misfortune or fortune, a man was waiting for her at the bottom like a guardian angel. Determined to save her, Timon caught her in his arms, saving her from the tragic fall at the very last moment. He calmly lowered the woman to the ground, surrounded by flowing water, as if they were in front of the tree of life nourished by its roots. Unwilling to release her from his gentle hands, he repeated the same phrase for a second time, promising to save her over and over again. That sad dream replayed exactly like the scene from her life, which is why she was now begging him to abandon her. With no desire to keep living, she pleaded, but he ignored her, placing his hand on her face, and added that together they would find new reasons to go on with their lives, just like that time by the pool. She rejected him in denial, saying she didn't need him. When he asked what she desired, Timon didn't give up, and taking a lock of her hair, he brazenly asked for her thoughts on love. Rosalyn blushed instantly, not knowing how to answer the persistent man about something she had never felt before. Finally, the nightmare transformed into a happy episode ending as she opened her eyes, still with a blush on her cheeks. 3 cheerful maids ran toward her, among them 2 teenage twin girls and an adult woman, as Rosalyn still hadn't recovered from the dream. So at first she couldn't even answer why she was breathing so heavily. Smiling kindly, the maids introduced themselves. The eldest was named Asriel, and the twins were Tasha and Luis. Meanwhile, the sad Empress didn't understand why her mood had changed so much, or why her body was suddenly trembling. Without trying to hold back, she cried like a baby, filling the room with loud, muffled sobs, which alarmed the maids, who immediately began to wonder what they should do in this situation, while Asriel, like a mother, approached and began to comfort poor Rosalyn, while the nimble twins ran out of the room. The girls quickly found the Emperor, ready to tell him about the Empress's mood swings. As he took on a clearly affected expression, they couldn't even form a complete sentence at first, until finally the master of the palace. He ended up hearing her explanation for the sudden visit, and when he learned Rosalyn was crying bitterly, Timon rushed out, as if he had been freed from a chain, which deeply surprised the maids, to whom he didn't say a single word. Noticing his obvious shock, they just exchanged furtive glances, understanding that he had feelings for that woman. They happily went into another room, talking at the top of their lungs about the pressing need to share such exciting news. Meanwhile, Arcel was already consoling her, stroking her back and softly repeating her people's prayer to soothe her. The Empress listened intently to her words and recognized them as the prayer her Asian nanny used to sing to her as a child. The maid released her warm hug and asked how she was feeling, offering her water if she was thirsty. Her peaceful moment was interrupted by Timon, who burst into the room, almost running, clearly distraught by the news of her condition. Seeing that the young woman had calmed down beside the maid, he stood silently in the doorway, assessing the situation. Rosalyn looked at him but felt uncomfortable and refused to share her emotions. She deliberately turned her back on him, determined to comfort the woman himself. He walked firmly toward the bed as Arcel left the room, finally appearing before the Empress wearing only a kimono. Noticing she still hadn't looked his way, he silently watched her, considering what he could do to lift her spirits. To her great surprise, he knelt before her, and holding her shoulders turned her face toward his, making her blush. Feeling herself blush, she awkwardly looked away, still not wanting to talk to him. Timon pulled her into a tight hug. Wanting to show his support and offer a strong shoulder, he began to gently stroke her head, preparing her for an intimate conversation about what was troubling her. The surprised young woman wasn't ready for such tenderness, so she pulled away abruptly, blushing even more. The man asked her why she was crying so bitterly, as if she'd been hurt or was in pain, clearly reluctant to share the details of her dream. She decided to use her previously injured ankle as an excuse. Without hesitation, Timon looked at Rosalyn's leg, which was bandaged, and took it in his hand, asking if it hurt. She was surprised and blushing at his persistence and audacity, as he wrapped his hands around her leg and brought it closer to his face. Rosalyn cried out loudly when she saw what he was doing as the man began to kiss her injured leg without any shame. For the first few moments, she was unable to say anything. Burning with shame in front of the insistent man, the moment immediately reminded her of an unpleasant event from her life that completely contradicted Timon's reaction. That day in a shoemaker's workshop, she had to endure the anger of the Emperor over her leg injury. He had shouted with irritation throughout the shop that her leg wouldn't stop hurting if she didn't wear special shoes, forgetting that she had been injured while defending the children and him. He said she was trying to hide her ugly leg. Looking at her bandaged foot, he finally said that no leather or silk could hide that deformity. After several minutes of silence, she calmly addressed Timon, asking if he considered her leg a deformity. Still holding her ankle with his strong hands, he said it was so beautiful that he wanted to kiss it. Upon hearing this, she leaned a bit closer to him and questioned his audacity, receiving a friendly smile in return. Wearily clutching her head, she closed her eyes, not wanting to talk about it anymore, and sensed the man beside her radiating with joy. She tried to turn to the other side of the bed, saying that even talking to him was exhausting, but the man didn't let her get away, picking her up in his arms. He proposed they have lunch together, and she agreed. Meanwhile, several days ago, that same boy was traveling in a carriage at night, intending to carry out the Empress's errand. Two coachmen were animatedly discussing the latest events, including rumors that the Emperor was torturing the Empress. The older man ordered the other to lower his voice so no one would overhear their provocative conversation. The second coachman replied that the boy in the carriage hidden among the boxes posed no threat to them. He added that if the boy tried to tell anyone, he would have to take out his axe and split all of their heads open. Listening to their predictions about what could possibly go right for the country under Natasha and the Emperor's rule, he also became lost in his own thoughts. The boy remembered how a few hours before the banquet began, he had been in the Empress's room. He was begging to be given a task, understanding he didn't have many options, and in the end, he decided to ask her for help. The woman extended her hand toward him, upon which rested the magic amulet that was to be delivered to the city of Love. She explained that in this port city, he would have to find a sea merchant nicknamed the Red Serpent. The merchant would be setting sail soon across the Talsky Sea, so he had to hurry. Remembering that the journey to Love and back was very dangerous, the brave Arson gathered all his determination. He promised to carry out her errand without fail. Rosalyn, filled with deep gratitude, leaned down and placed her hand on the crown of his head, caressing it. She looked directly into the surprised teenager's eyes and sincerely thanked him for his willingness to help. The boy noticed the amulet. He realized it had power as it changed immediately upon wrapping around his wrist. He was already familiar with the Talsky Sea that surrounded Love. It was a place where monsters frequently appeared, which is why armies from several countries would head there to take advantage of the monthly trade period. This period coincided with the trade month, which was currently coming to an end. The fact that his journey to Love would take at least 10 days put him on alert, creating a strong desire to hurry. To his surprise, the carriage overturned abruptly, throwing him from it. At first, he heard cries for help, and then his face was illuminated by a brilliant light, signaling danger. Arson opened his eyes and saw a group of men dressed in black appear before him. With their faces covered, they got rid of the drivers and began to pull the boy from the carriage. As they began to abduct him, he tried to resist the band of kidnappers with all his might. But he had no choice but to surrender when they covered his nose and mouth. The cloth was soaked in a noxious substance, so the last thing he saw before he closed his eyes were those very criminals. The Empress suspected nothing, which is why she was now sitting calmly beside Timon preparing for dinner. Her gaze was fixed on the magnificent view of the waves bathed in the brilliant light of the setting sun. With a serene smile, the young woman continued watching the movements and sounds of the tide, finally understanding what they meant, as Rosalyn admired the sea in fascination. The man watched her in turn, noticing her inner peace and well-being. Timon calmly observed that she liked the sea, after which she replied that there was nothing about it she liked. He was surprised to discover that it was the first time the woman had ever seen the sea, so he decided to confirm that information with her. Her answer contradicted what he knew. He knew that Thanatos also has access to the sea, which she should have seen. His words brought an unusual smile to Rosalyn's face. As she reflected on the real reason, she finally explained that she had been forbidden to leave the palace, so for all that time, she was locked within 4 walls. While reflecting on her words, the man tried one of the dishes prepared for their shared dinner. Seeing that Timon was finally starting to eat, she clearly wanted to ask him what he was eating. Without asking the question out loud, she simply looked at the dish with interest. Noticing her curiosity, the man decided to reveal the ingredients of one of his exotic dishes. He lifted the fork to his mouth and looking at the piece, he explained that it was a sea clam that they cut and ate either raw or cooked. Then he immediately put the piece from the dish into his mouth, confirming that it was especially delicious that day. After hearing his explanation, the young woman sank into deep thought. Looking at her plate in search of that gastronomic miracle, she finally imitated her companion and also began to try the dish. Damon smiled with satisfaction, noticing that the young woman liked the food. Rosalyn turned her gaze back to the calm sea. She wondered if arson had reached Loba without incident. Knowing the danger of the route to the port city, Rosalyn could only hope that he was safe. She looked toward those same railings, remembering how that man had saved her from death again just days before. These reflections clearly affected the young woman's mood, immediately drawing Timon's attention. Observing her, he concluded that her expression had clearly changed. Trying to start a conversation, he instantly understood what she was thinking. And he warned her that now that everything was over, he would ask her a question without mincing his words. He again asked her directly why she wanted to die so badly. The young woman lowered her gaze, telling him in a low voice that she hadn't managed to save anything. Her victim mentality disgusted him, so he decided to ask if she believed she was to blame for all this. Looking at the sea, he said he considered that strange. Despite feeling sorry for her in his opinion, it's sad that everyone is dead, but that can't be an excuse for her own death. His words drove her over the edge to the point that she jumped to her feet and shouted indignantly that it wasn't an excuse. He continued to provoke her with a smile, adding that she shouldn't have to pay for it with her life. Damon had hit the nail on the head. At first, the young woman was so surprised by that opinion that she couldn't say anything. He was sure that her loved ones would not have wished for her tragic death, provoking the Empress's wrath. She claimed he was insensitive, as if their unjust deaths were no longer that important. Damon said thoughtfully, if it had been him and he had died defending his loved one, he would return even from hell to say that it's okay. Something inside Rosalyn broke as he continued saying that he would want that person to live peacefully without feeling guilt. His words hit her so hard that she began to cry bitterly, leaning over the table. Meanwhile, Gilotti was having a very realistic dream, as if he were truly at sea walking across the immense expanse of the ocean. Searching for someone in that cold, damp place, the Emperor froze when he was suddenly sprayed with a nasty purple liquid. He looked back in fear and saw his angry father looming over him like a mosquito. He looked at him sternly and said that Gilotti was so pathetic that if he had another son, he would never leave him the throne. His words wounded him deep in his heart to the point that he could only sit sadly and look at him. Feeling righteous anger, he muttered that because of his weak spirit, he prayed for his marriage to the Duke's daughter, who would become a worthy empress. The imposing spectral figure objected to a careless ruler making all the decisions on his own. Gilotti flinched when he raised his hand over him, saying that he must consult with her on everything, not destroy things, pointing his index finger at the whimpering boy. He yelled that he was a worm whom fortune had made an emperor, the shameless son. He tried to escape his father, who terrified him for all the crimes he had committed, running away from him in terror. He ended up in a spacious room occupied by the majestic Rosalyn sunset, just like in a horror movie. She turned and looked menacingly at the boy who ruined her life. He shuddered in fear as she approached him, coldly stating she was dead. Filling the space with bloody butterflies, she sternly declared she would return all the evil he caused Gilotti. He tried to get rid of the flying apparitions that were getting closer and closer. The image of the Empress was etched into his subconscious, torturing him until he woke up. The Emperor jumped out of bed in terror, trying to recover from the dream, and woke up Natasha. She tried to calm him by touching him and asking why he was so upset, but he didn't even react, and immediately shouted that the Empress had definitely survived something he knew for a fact. Natasha Roanti looked at him sadly as he screamed. He insisted that strong woman was alive. Realizing she needed to act quickly, she gently pressed him against her chest. Trying to convince him she was dead, her comfort had no effect on the Emperor, who rudely pushed his pregnant mistress away. He practically flew out of the room, shouting that he had to see Rosalyn's dead body with his own eyes. Natasha watched him in fear, realizing that the man was slowly going insane. Still on the floor, she said that the further they went, the more selfish he became towards her. The girl had thought in vain that if she helped him get rid of the Empress, everything would be okay. But everything turned out differently. However, Natasha knows why she does it, so with a smile she caresses her belly. Muttering that all of this will one day belong to her son, she promises to prepare everything for when he is born and overthrows his foolish father. Meanwhile, Amor was still lit by the brilliant sunset, warming its inhabitants with its last rays of heat. By the end of the meal, Rosalyn had completely distanced herself from the man, contemplating the calm seascape. After a pause, Timon addressed his companion again, speaking about her name and instantly capturing her attention. Not understanding what the man meant, Rosalyn indifferently repeated his words, waiting for him to continue. Carefully examining her features, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. Finally leaning in closer, Timon announced her new name, the one he would create to replace her old one, as he inhaled the scent of her hair. He refuses to tell her the meaning of her new name, Erin Rosie, which he invented surprising her with his new idea. The woman remained silent and thoughtful as she watched him stretch lazily. She calmly asked why he chose her specifically when he proposed they go to sleep together at the end of that warm night. He looked at the young woman mischievously and repeated the phrase, offering to share his bed that very night. An angry Erin Rosie exclaimed that she didn't want to sleep, but the man took her by the hand and quickly led her away. However, she reconsidered. She reconsidered the proposal upon hearing that her only task would be to lie down and rest while he slept beside her. Hearing her speak, he stopped and turned around. The Empress captured his attention again, and he didn't let go of her hand. She assured him that the sea of her empire was vaster and that she was pained by her absence from it. She looked away in discontent, and Timon looked on with sadness. He concluded that she had finally confessed this to him. Their hands separated as they each processed the previous words on their own. To Erin Rosie's surprise, Timon did not yield so easily, and she suddenly found herself back in his arms. Lifted against her will, she demanded to know why, even as her face burned with embarrassment. Satisfied with her reaction, he didn't answer where he was taking her. He only commented that he liked the way she said his name. Erin Rosie's face flushed at his brazen attitude. As a final retort, she snapped that she hated him. Timon wasn't offended, and smiling, he repeated that one day she would scream out in love and it would leave her breathless. At last, they reached the door of her new room, and seeing what was inside took the woman's breath away. He had prepared a large room for her with a window. A panoramic window that overlooked the restless sea for her to watch. He held her in his arms for a few more minutes, before laying her on the bed to enjoy the scenery. As she was mesmerized by the fascinating spectacle of the sea, Timon carefully placed her on the bed. He covered her with a blanket, his face lighting up with a satisfied smile as he embraced her and lay down beside her. Holding her tightly from behind, he whispered in her ear that she could keep watching the ocean before her. He then added that while she watched, he would hold her tighter and she could take him in her hands. After a while, he fell into a peaceful sleep, surprising the girl with how silently he slept, which didn't match her expectations at all. Fragmented memories of his words from their last difficult conversation surfaced in her mind. She was still thinking about it when she gently turned to look at the face of the man who would radically change her life and her perspectives. Trying not to wake him, she gently caressed his face and tucked a stray lock of hair behind his ear upon seeing him sleep so peacefully. She herself fell asleep beside him with a secret thought on her mind: she didn't want to die. Erin Rosie slept like that until nightfall, when strange, unexpected sounds interrupted her sleep and made her uneasy. She opened her eyes and saw the man in front of her groaning in pain, suffering from a strong burning sensation in his body. She sat up to watch him closely and saw him trembling as he clutched the collar of his cloak. Erin Rosie tried to call out his name, but he didn't react as she expected. He just gritted his teeth, tightly clutching his chest in pain. He turned his back to her and continued to groan from the fever racking his body. Seeing him struggle to breathe, the woman touched him. She noted with concern that his entire body was burning with heat. She had never faced anything like this before, so she had no idea how to help the poor man. Erin Rosillo screamed in a panic when she saw him fall to his knees and desperately cling to the wall tapestry. She tried to stop him, but he with all his might held out his hand in protest and ordered her not to get any closer. Looking at her with clouded eyes, she knew that being near him was dangerous. The battered wall was proof of that. Feeling a new surge of pain and heat, he slammed his forehead against the wall once more, cursing out loud and losing control. Seeing him clutch his chest, she began to think it might be his illness. She knew that every generation of the Crossies had a carrier of a blood disease. She finally understood the reason for his strange behavior and stood paralyzed, not knowing how to ease his suffering. Trembling, Timon kept repeating to himself that he had to control himself or he would lose his sanity. He remembered the notes in the books warning that transferring his power to someone with whom he wasn't bonded was dangerous. This was clearly the result of the lack of a physical release for his energy. Timon bargained with his conscience, thinking that if she just came closer one time, it would be enough to help him. She touched his shoulder to get his attention, thinking that calling the servants was a good idea. The man shook his head silently, telling her that the option she had proposed was not a good one. She said it out loud, understanding that if he didn't want to call for anyone, it was because he was still keeping his secret. Erin Rosilla stood motionless, confused, until she uttered the words that deeply surprised Timon. He turned back, asking her again what she'd said when she offered to help. Fix the situation. Timon held his breath when he heard her confirm her words, saying that she never lets her words get lost in the wind. Without breaking the silence between them, he gently caressed her face, slightly parting her lips. As he moved closer to the motionless woman, he stopped just inches from her lips, gazing intensely into her eyes. Finally, without taking his eyes off her face, he said he wouldn't refuse her offer of help. Erin Rosilla didn't even have time to say anything before he lunged forward to kiss her passionately, wrapping his arms around her waist. The night that witnessed their passionate embraces quickly turned into a bright day that flooded her room. She couldn't stand his advances any longer. The Empress firmly pushed the naked man away, saying she wanted to sleep. Evidently Timon, after such a passionate night, had no intention of listening to her, so he went back to kissing her flushed neck. As she saw his satisfied smile, she thought that even though she had agreed to help, She hadn't expected him to be so insatiable. Despite how demanding and persistent he, leaning on the bed with one hand as she felt relief wash over her body, Damon remained seated beside her on the bed. Covering her feverish body with the blanket after she began to doze off, the man gently tucked her hair behind her ear. Thinking that even though she seemed cold, Aaron Rossi hadn't forgotten how to flirt, unable to resist the unexpected wave of tenderness. He lay down beside her, wrapping the attractive woman in his arms, and calmly concluded that he didn't even need paradise with her by his side. The man awoke after a few hours of sweet sleep, still holding her so pleasantly in his arms. Finally, from the unpleasant screams that echoed through the wide hallways meanwhile, his servant was already facing the onslaught of the queen, who wished to personally meet the one he had been hiding for so long. With her arms crossed over her chest in annoyance surrounded by her maids, she deduced that he wasn't a fool, and must have known it himself. She finally gave a mischievous smile upon seeing that Timon's room door opened slightly. The owner of the room came out bewildered, asking her why she had come while theatrically adjusting his robe. She brought her fist to her mouth and reminded him that 3 in the afternoon was not as early as he claimed. Surprised by the time, he simply replied modestly that he had lost track of time. Beginning their expected confrontation, she calmly asked if they could talk inside the bedroom, alluding to his illness. After receiving a refusal, she wearily rubbed her forehead and expressed her disappointment. She said she didn't expect him to dare disobey his queen, to which he calmly replied that he now understood the reason for her visit, and that he was actually planning to go to the palace today. In turn, she replied that she had been planning to come that very night, and then asked if he wished to become hers. Slamming the door behind him, he responded with clear shock that he did not think so, giving her a fierce look. She told him that his answer caused her unbearable pain, and that he seemed suspicious, hiding everything. Then her attitude suddenly changed, and she again affirmed that she didn't come to joke, but to find out what exactly he took from Thanatos, and she continued speaking, saying that all this time she had been thinking about when he would come to account for everything, but he simply didn't show up and continued to hide everything, Damon. He sighed tiredly when she asked what exactly was in that room, then replied that an undressed woman was lying in there. Teo didn't stop pressuring him, stating that was no explanation, and that he wouldn't have rushed like that to the door if there had only been a common woman in there. To test him, she tells him that he must marry her, and that they would look good together considering that there was only a woman in there. As he bowed before her, he replied that it was an absurd proposal and that he flatly refused to accept it, not wanting to hear any more of his refusals. She quickly entered the room, pushed him, and shouted for him to get out of her way. Damon became enraged, realizing that his secret was about to be revealed by the queen's audacity and stubbornness in bursting into the room. She was already saying that she would finally see the girl he was hiding so carefully. She approached the bed and saw that it was completely covered by a blanket, so she immediately pulled it off. Teo did not expect to see the young woman who appeared before her. Her face instantly filled with surprise. Aaron Rocha sat up in bed, confused, not understanding what had happened while she was sleeping. The queen observed the appearance of the woman before her, more closely, painfully recognizing the familiar features. Standing silently for a moment, she was surprised to see a woman in Timon's bed. He just wearily rubbed his forehead, frantically thinking of how to get out of the situation. The queen's sharp gaze fixed on the cold stare of the Empress of Thanatos, who was hiding her identity. Trying to regain control, the man arrogantly proclaimed that she was overstepping and behaving inappropriately, ignoring his comment. The queen began to list aloud the features of the woman's appearance that were very familiar to her. Damon tried to figure out who had informed her, since he hadn't left the girl's side for a single second, and hadn't mentioned whether he'd brought an object or someone. He continued by stating that he intended to demand punishment for the crime of spreading false information. Hearing his threats, the queen fell into deep thought about her plan, crossing her arms over her chest. She turned sharply towards him and looked at him sternly, saying if he was so confident he could complain, but he still had to tell her what he had brought. After delaying his response, he surprised the two women by revealing that he had brought the pelt of a deer, a rare silver-horned one. Seeing her astonished expression, he repeated the animal's name, one that lives in the cold lands of Thanatos. Upon hearing the news, the queen clearly brightened up at obtaining the coveted trophy, which serves as armor and a durable material. Observing her reaction, he immediately questioned why she would even expect a trophy that had cost him so much to acquire, not wanting to lose such a prize. She ordered him to ask for whatever he desired, until she noticed a detail after he revealed that the young woman was not precisely that unknown object. Her origin became even more intriguing to her. Aaron Rocha flinched when he mentioned that she was bought from a slave trader from Nurux for a special price. Surprised, she asked him again, as until now he had given her the impression of lacking any sexual desire. Damon refuted her words, assuring her that he did have sexual preferences and that the girl had been worth it. Seeing that the queen was still doubtful, he rushed over and brushed her chin with his fingers, then looked threateningly at Teo, saying that the woman reminded him of someone, implying it was the Empress. Observing them, the queen deduced that it made sense, since she looked a lot like the Empress of Thanatos. Aaron Rocha, who had been silent until now, tensed up when the queen asked where she was from. To her surprise, she just enthusiastically pulled Timon towards her, taking his hand and using another language. She began to ask him if Teo was his wife, worried that she would be thrown out. Her mouth fell open in surprise when she realized that the girl was speaking the language of Iris, a language for which she felt a fondness. After reflecting on how a girl from Eros ended up a slave and wound up there, she decided to ask for her name. Aaron Rosia replied that she didn't speak the official language well, so she asked her to repeat the question. Upon hearing it again, the girl seemed to perk up and began to say her name. Placing a hand on her chest, Damon tensed up as he listened, since he still didn't know if she knew the meaning of her new name. Meanwhile, the girl's face shone with joy and excitement. As she pronounced her name, not forgetting to mention its meaning, the man was left surprised. When she said that in the translation of an ancient forgotten language, it meant that she had become the sea for love. The name Aaron Rosia fit perfectly with that natural element he so enjoyed contemplating. Finally, after hours of unbearable conversation, the sleepy young woman was left alone in her room. Her mind was still tormented by certain thoughts about the phrases she heard in the conversation between Timon and the queen. She was struck by the phrase he had said about having deprived her of his masculine strength, since in her eyes he clearly came off as a pervert. His words about his lack of sexual attraction went against what she herself had experienced. She didn't understand how he could still live with the reputation of being asexual, nor what that had to do with her. Aaron Rosia also recalled how yesterday she had been aware that she reluctantly helped him to change his condition. Closing her eyes, she concluded it had only been that one time, that she had given herself to him after he had saved her life. The woman was stunned as she thought about the rare silver beasts, whose breeding was extremely difficult due to their aggression and isolation. The former emperor found a breeding method by introducing small children into their packs. Thanks to this cohabitation, those who survived ended up taming those wild beasts. Over time, these exceptional children were called the Goresi, and today only 2 of their representatives remain. She remembered how one day these children arrived at her residence and tearfully begged her for mercy, crying bitterly as they insisted the cruel and indiscriminate imperial hunt for those rare animals cease. Looking sadly at the poor children, she still promised to help improve their situation. The Empress swore to them that as long as she lived, she would make sure they were protected. At that moment, the woman realized that after her overthrow, their situation had deteriorated significantly, and she had to do something for them. Timon entered the room, interrupting her thoughts, and immediately noticed her melancholic and pensive expression. With a smile, he asked if his little silver fox had been so lost in thought that she didn't notice when he came in. The man sat beside her, asking if she was scared of being thrown out, and in response, he heard her say she didn't want to be treated like a slave. Timon shamelessly lay down in her lap, mockingly asking if being treated as a lover would be enough for her. Ignoring his mockery, she simply pushed him away with her hand, clearly showing her displeasure. Aaron Rosia pushed him off her lap and repeated what she had told him yesterday, that she hated him. In response, he wondered if she could entwine their bodies with unbridled passion with someone she hated so much. Timon kept staring at her, clearly waiting for an answer to his last question. He scoffed when, after a few minutes of silence, she finally decided to answer him. With a pensive gaze fixed on the window before her, Aaron Rosia asked what he really wanted. The man answered immediately, reminding her that he had already explained that before, while also asking if she considered his answer insufficient. In her mind, a memory surfaced of a naked Timon condescendingly listing his own virtues and his desire to possess her. She awkwardly propped herself up on her elbows and asked him directly if he desired her Aaron Rosia. She heard his affirmative answer and immediately asked what the catch was. The man tried to convince her with complete seriousness that he wasn't playing with her and that she shouldn't doubt him. Immediately, Timon leaned over her, planting his hand on the bed right next to her head. Lifting her chin with one finger, he asserted that she was already in his hands and that no matter how much she rejected him, she would not be able to escape. Meanwhile, night fell, and drawn by hunger, they decided to have dinner together on the terrace. Dressed in blue, Aaron Rosia remained silent at the table, shooting him glances from time to time. Without wasting any time, he started eating until she interrupted him with a question about their last night. While chewing calmly, Timon closed his eyes, reflecting on her interest. About whether their connection would happen again without blushing at all, he answered directly that it was possible. After which, she immediately asked for the reason he ignored her question, and continued eating his soup, hoping she would come to the conclusion on her own. Aaron Rosia is not a fool, so she quickly connected it to his peculiar ability, receiving a vague answer, she guessed reasonably that his power might have gone out of control after saving her. Upon hearing she was partly right, she decided to find out where she was wrong. Placing his hand on his chest, the man said that it was also related to the fact of having injected energy into someone who had not sealed it. This makes Aaron Rosia immediately feel certain suspicions, since she believed that her strength was a divine gift, and after hearing him, she asks if the hereditary disease passed down from generation to generation could be his ability. Timon praises her cleverness when she asks if a second act of fusion will occur after sealing it to a certain extent. He himself didn't fully know, since he had never felt such deep emotions before. Her eyes widen immensely in surprise. When he mentions that if it's not her, he won't live for long, she dramatically turns around and states that it's not that simple. Even though she insisted on hurrying, Timon explains that he must maintain a close and constant relationship with the sealed person. Since his power is transmitted through close contact, Aaron Rosia tiredly closes her eyes and tells him directly that his power is as shameless as he is. He responds only with a playful smile firmly covering her delicate palm. The girl is surprised by the sudden physical contact. So she looks at him, surprised immediately. The man looks at her, affectionately pressing her palm against his cheek. Before a highly unusual dialogue, he stated that despite being so passionate and full of power, he can't cultivate relationships with just anyone. Due to his illness, Aaron Rossi reflects on his words, remembering that when he saved her, he had to transmit his power by fusing their bodies without letting go of her palm. He adds that his power would go out of control more frequently if he had casual relationships. The cunning Timon decides to pressure her, mentioning that their act from yesterday won't be enough for long to maintain his condition. Upon reflecting on her companion's convincing words, she blushed deeply upon understanding where he was getting at. Seeing her reaction, the man smirked and found her attitude interesting, since just a few moments ago she had furiously expressed that she hated him. He also commented that he had saved her of his own free will, and that she seemed to feel guilty about it. The woman simply replied in a low voice that it wasn't like that, after which Timon told her not to worry, using the old form of her name. Knowing that she no longer belonged to him, he called her Aaron Rossi again, and added that he didn't want to see her self-destruct. Burning with anger, she accepted his words, saying it was because he had saved her of his own will, even though she hadn't asked for it. Timon expressed doubt in her words, asking why he now saw regret on her face. However, she was caught off guard when he confirmed he still felt guilty about that matter, propping his chin on his fist thoughtfully. He tried to change her mind, stating that he alone was responsible for his actions, steering away from the sadness of their last conversation. She turns around when he asks for permission to photograph her. Meanwhile, the very same boy, the Empress, had been so anxious about his safety, turned out to be in trouble up to his neck, finally regaining consciousness after the kidnapping. He realized he had fallen into a real cage. Arson anxiously gripped the bars as he saw an endless ocean horizon in front of him, and the deck of a ship. A primal fear washed over him after realizing that it was actually slave traffickers who had kidnapped him. Upon hearing the voices of his captors nearby, he began to scream furiously at them, demanding his freedom. Armin's shout immediately enraged the criminals transporting him, who promptly ordered him to shut up. The boy threatened them, saying he was a real student from the Imperial Academy. He thought this would somehow save him, but in response, a smoke bomb rolled directly into his cage. With the instruction to be a good boy, as he smelled the acrid smoke, Armin tried to cover his nose and mouth with his hands. Falling to the floor, he realized he had to get out of there at all costs, even though at that moment he couldn't even hear his own voice. Armin's attention was drawn to the Empress's glowing bracelet. Designed to protect its wearer, at that moment Aaron Rossi was busy insisting that Timon give her an answer as to why she had to do all this. The man replied briefly that after their alliance, her power would stabilize and she could share it with him. He tried to convince her to accept, stating that he would free her from pain and suffering and do whatever she desired. She pressed her hands thoughtfully on the table. Aaron Rossi interrupted him, saying she didn't need anything. Seeing her hesitation, he asked, "What about an animal that would always be loyal to her?" Referring to himself, Timon swore that he would never betray her. This sparked a new wave of distrust in the young woman. Staring him straight in the eyes, she almost ordered him not to judge her for the other men who had previously sworn loyalty to her, only to betray her. Hearing his words that she hadn't shown so much distrust before, Timon said hurt that this meant she couldn't trust him. Lastly, the man asked her to let him know if she changed her mind in the end. Aaron Rossi stared thoughtfully at a fixed point, as he added that he hoped it would happen before her crisis returned. Dinner was coming to its logical conclusion, so she admired the sunset again before night fell. A few hours later, the girl was in her bed, surrounded by her smiling twin maids. One of them cheerfully announced to her lady that her presence had inspired them to write a novel. Not expecting this, a surprised Aaron Rossi asked them about it. They told her it was a novel, romantic and full of passion, about a beautiful prisoner and the general of the Desert Kingdom. The girls were very proud of their idea and the chemistry depicted in the novel, so they shared it with her enthusiastically. At first, Aaron Rossi was stunned by the news. Realizing that the characters were based entirely on her and Timon, they continued to describe in detail how the obsessive general couldn't let go of the beautiful woman, making her fall in love in the end. Hugging each other happily, the twins said they had written half the novel and that readers were loving it. Without saying a word, the Empress couldn't help but smile, watching the mischievous girls. Finally, Aaron Rosilla thanked them and asked them to show it to her when they finished. Their celebration was interrupted by Asriel, who entered the room and tried to convince her lady not to read it. The strict woman warned that they hadn't hesitated to include many steamy scenes in the novel. In response, the girls began to make several arguments, insisting that the romantic scenes couldn't be left out. They laughed at the mature woman's expense and said she couldn't ignore it since she herself had 3 children. This enraged Akron so much that she instinctively dropped the basket and cursed out loud for mentioning her children. The mischievous girls laughed, seeing how the maid had blushed at the thought of herself. Everything that happened brought a warm smile to Aaron Rosilla, who had been watching them in silence all that time. Finally, with the arrival of night, all the maids left their lady's room, preparing to sleep on that dark night. Timon welcomed her back into his strong arms, sleeping peacefully in the same bed before she fell fast asleep. She noticed that she felt calmer here than in Thanatos, although she was already getting bored with the inactivity. A few days later, the mischievous twins approached their lady Aisha with the proposal of taking a walk after she finished getting ready. She looked at the girls with interest. Remembering the escort placed around the mansion when the young woman was ready for her walk, the room filled with a crowd of guards. Worried that their lady might injure her leg again, everyone walked behind her, escorting her on her way. Seeing their worried expressions, Rosalyn tried to reassure the girls, saying that she could perfectly well walk on her own. So many servants was clearly contrary to the young woman's plans, who intended to walk in peace and quiet. Upon reaching the foot of the stairs, she turned to the escort and told them it would be better if they stayed at the mansion. She frowned upon hearing they had prepared a carriage for her, aware that new rumors could arise. Rosalyn, lost in her thoughts, didn't even notice how Timon appeared in front of her. Having noticed his doubts, she approached him and indicated in a low voice that the number of people surrounding her was bothering her. Observing the whole crowd, he asked if perhaps 10 people was such a large number for her in response. She told him that even when she was empress, she had never taken so many with her, to which he replied that now she was his perfect love slave. Clearly annoyed with such treatment, she assured him that she would rather die than be his slave. Timon immediately sensed the girl's negative tone and bowed before her, stating that she knew what she could threaten him with. His joke only angered Rosalyn more, so she walked past him as if he wasn't even there, determined not to give up. The man grabbed the hand of the woman who was walking away and squeezed her palm firmly. Upon feeling that gesture, the proud Rosalyn immediately ordered him to let her go, trying to strike a deal. Timon calmly asked her not to be angry. Promising he would stop teasing, he caressed her with his masculine charm and warned that she would only hurt him if she left. His trick managed to placate the angry woman, so she compromised, asking him to let her go once more. The man was attentive and asked if she would prefer to travel by carriage. She was clearly pleased by his proposal to take a walk along the seashore instead of the stuffy carriage. Timon immediately fulfilled her wish. He took her to the spectacular edge of the shimmering sea. Lost in contemplation of the waves, she asked for his opinion and received a delighted response. He said he could look at her all day. Rosalyn was so impressed by the scenery that for a long time, she couldn't look away. She broke the ensuing silence and called her companion by his name. With a cold gaze, she suddenly asked why he hadn't sealed her. The young woman surprised him by saying she was no longer the same person. Not the same as when she wanted to die, nor the same as when she wanted to live. Rosalyn stated firmly that he had saved her, and therefore, he had to face the consequences. Delighted by her audacity, he replied that he was happy to see her old self again. He agreed to what she called the sealing, but in return he would have to do whatever she wished. Timon, smiling mischievously, said that it sounded like a deal, which the former empress immediately accepted with a fierce smile. She offered her hand and reminded him that they each had to state their terms, looking at him with disinterest. When he stated he would grant 3 of her wishes in exchange for the seal, he had obviously forgotten who he was dealing with. So the former empress demanded 5 wishes instead of 3. He patiently accepted, thinking out loud that she should be even more shameless. The woman's final condition was that he never fall in love with her. That instantly ruined his mood, as he had never felt such emotions for anyone before. She turned haughtily and stated that she knew he desired her. That's why she hoped it would all end there. The man thought he understood her aversion to love, but he still felt a pang of sadness. He decided to hide his feelings behind a mask of arrogance and feigned surprise that she would believe he could ever fall in love with her. His response pleased her greatly, and she smiled, replying that she was happy. Timon then asked what would happen if he rejected her conditions. She immediately proposed they pretend none of this happened. Still, he didn't back down and asked her honestly what would happen if he were to fall in love with her by accident. Rosalyn calmly replied that she would break their bond by her own will, regardless of any divine ties. The woman warns him that she possesses a superior vow, one kept in the temple under a different name. Timon tenses up hearing her speak so easily about breaking ties in the future, but he holds back. He confidently caressed her mouth with his finger and asks what will happen if she falls in love with him. After thinking for a moment, Rosalyn calmly answers that it won't happen, though she does mention a scenario. Pressing his hand to her cheek, she says he can do whatever he wants with her if she truly falls in love. He smiles like a satisfied cat, making it clear he was extremely pleased to hear her. She rejects his hand and suggests they formalize their deal, but to her surprise, he interrupts her, saying that, unlike her, he still hasn't stated his demands. Rosalyn tensed up, expecting to hear absurd requirements, but she agreed to listen to him anyway. His eyes glinted slyly, his gaze sweeping over her body as he prepared to announce his desire. The man deeply surprised her when he said he wanted her right leg, precisely the one that had suffered an injury. Rosalyn stood motionless in a state of shock, her leg having been the cause of so many hardships and humiliations for her. Timon watched her thoughtfully, waiting to hear the young woman's reaction. Misunderstanding him, she thought he wanted to acquire her leg through amputation after such a declaration. The man blushed just as much as she did, clearly not understanding how such an idea had ever crossed her mind. Seeing how the young woman clutched her dress, he immediately affirmed that it was better to keep both limbs. Then he declared that he wanted both, so he asked her to just say she would give them to him. Without clearly understanding why he needed them, she agreed, telling him she would hand them over to Rosalyn's surprise. To her own surprise, he suddenly knelt on one knee, getting closer to her legs as he wrapped his hand around her bandaged one. He looked devotedly into her eyes, pleased with the agreement, deliberately bringing his lips closer. The man expressed with satisfaction that it was his leg now. Aaron Rosilla blushed, clearly unsure how she should interpret the man's perverted behavior. Meanwhile, as the Empress's matters were returning to normal, the Emperor was getting worse and worse. He once again jumped out of bed in a fit of rage, demanding another medicine. Even though he knew it only made his symptoms worse, Gilotti furiously shouted that he couldn't stand his heart feeling like it was being ripped apart anymore, as if he were about to die that very instant. Not watching his words, he turned to his servant, and he accused him of working for the Empress. The servant Johann tried to calm him, reminding him that he had served him since he turned 10 years old and had never had the courage to lie to him. The Emperor, burning with fever and dizzy, insisted that she was the one who had cursed him with her imperial spell. Johann trembled with fear upon hearing Gilotti order him to burn the Sansit family home to the ground. He added that they must also dig up and throw the former duke's graves into the fire. Lowering his head before the desperate emperor, he agreed to do everything after being threatened with his own head. Gilotti, beaming over his final decision, yelled as if speaking to a woman that now they would see who was truly in charge. Meanwhile, Aaron Rosilla didn't even suspect what her ex-husband was doing at that very moment. Damon commented that while the queen was naive, she had good intuition and tended to follow it. He added that he had managed to distract her with the deerskin, but it failed to dispel her doubts, which prompted a question from the young woman. In response, the man rested his head on his hand. He then pointed downward with his fork for her to see for herself, concluding that lately many observers had appeared around them and it was no coincidence. Aaron Russia didn't understand why they were being followed since they were still on good terms. In response, he simply relied on his intuition once more. He noted that the queen had likely noticed something seeing them together, and since she had no proof against them, she decided to set up surveillance to find something incriminating. The woman became lost in deep thought upon hearing his assumptions. Finally, without a word, she set her fork aside, and when he asked his next question, she claimed she had eaten enough. Damon, holding a juicy chicken leg, commented that she surely couldn't wait any longer. Aaron Russia blushed instantly when he clarified that she couldn't wait for the precious seal they would share together. Realizing where the conversation was going, she asked him again if that was truly the only way to seal their connection. She leaned wearily over the table, clenching the tablecloth, as she realized she had fallen into his trap once again. Satisfied with her reaction, he asked what was wrong, but the young woman just replied that it was nonsense as their conversation came to a halt. A servant presented them with a new dish, placing it on the table. Damon suggested that the young woman try the rare seafood, known as surfish oysters. Aaron Russia nonetheless followed his lead and tried the strange food, experiencing a true burst of flavor in her mouth. Seeing that she clearly enjoyed it, Damon offered to tell her its interesting name, leaving the young woman speechless. He explained it was called the bride's scream, because if eaten on the wedding night, the bride would cry out in pleasure. Smiling to himself, he took another bite, adding that at least that was what he had heard. She grew angry and indignant. She ignored his verbal provocations when he said they would verify the name's authenticity that very night. She stood up menacingly and approached him. Damon kept watching the girl with interest, resting his head on his fist. He clearly wasn't expecting her to kick him hard in the ankle, a clear expression of her displeasure. Rubbing his aching leg, he said he couldn't believe she had just assaulted a government official. As night fell, a new mission came up for Ronazzo. He decided to carry it out quickly, finally arriving at Damon's mansion with the intention of delivering some surprising news. The butler informed Ronazzo that his master had gone to the bath, but Ronazzo agreed to wait. After waiting for a few short minutes, the man smiled and exhaled wearily. His patience was wearing thin, and he started to complain that the man was taking so long it was as if he were getting ready for his wedding night. Hearing Damon's voice, he turned toward him disdainfully, giving up on the hope that he had died. Ronazzo was surprised by his scent, noting that not long ago, Damon hated to smell like anything at all. After hearing Damon's explanation that people change, he moved on to ask why so many spies had been assigned to his house. Damon turned away, waving his hands dismissively. He said he was caught sitting across from Ronazzo and explained that the queen had invaded his house and entered the room without permission where she saw the girl. So he also had to improvise by saying that he had brought a slave girl who resembled an empress. Ronazzo asked if Teo believed him, but Timon replied that if she hadn't, there wouldn't be so many spies around them. He finally asked what he would do about it, since if Teo discovered the truth, she wouldn't let it go. Placing his cup on the table, Timon asked what was to be done since it wasn't certain if the queen would try to snatch Aranrotia from him. Ronazzo agreed, saying he would take care of it himself. And then he decided to get straight to the point. He handed the man the package found at the auction, inviting him to examine its contents. It indicated they must be sealed before the 6th moon set and the 5th night ended, and also that they must locate the Iron Child crossing the sea. Timon immediately reflected seriously on the prophecy about divine power written in the Iraskan language. It occurred to him that someone might have discovered his plans, so he asked if he had shown it to anyone else. Ronazzo assured him that he had only shown it to him, and that he attended the auction to find a gift for his brother Timon. He took a moment to analyze all the information he had received, then ordered for it to be kept a secret. Meanwhile, Aranrotia was thoroughly enjoying the warm bath, preparing for the imminent sealing. As the twin attendants finished their work, she tried to convince herself that this was just a deal. They dressed her in a beautiful silk kimono and helped calm the nervousness that arose after the long preparations. Rotia finally found herself before the door of the fateful room. Mustering all her courage, she took a deep breath of air before turning the mysterious doorknob and entering. The girl finally found herself alone in a spacious room that held a luxurious bed covered in red sheets. Realizing she was completely alone, the girl walked over to the bed. Lost in thought about what she should do, she lowered her gaze as her mind began to fill with memories of a sad past. The girl remembered how her first wedding night began with a drunk and unpleasant Gil. That night, he had brazenly entered her bedroom without any restraint, holding a half-empty bottle of alcohol. Looking at his bride, he immediately asked if she was a corpse, since her skin looked whiter than snow. He became furious when she just looked at him calmly without saying a word, not interrupting his tirade of insults. He asked if she knew how many men had been driven to madness by eyes like hers. Gilotti pointed a finger at her, demanding she not look at him, as she apparently had no feelings or emotions. Now she sat on the bed in the same way waiting. Although under completely different circumstances, Rotia noted sadly that since that time the Emperor's behavior had become something she was used to. In the end, her thoughts were interrupted by a man, who entered the room and bluntly told her he was overwhelmed by her splendor without waiting for a reply. He approached her and knelt on one knee, getting her attention. Timon sincerely told her that to him, she was like a gift he had been waiting a long time for. Rotia clearly blushed, seeing how the man welcomed her with such gratitude and joy. Admiring her rare beauty while sitting next to her, Timon decided to share his feelings for her. And everything that was happening between them, she was clearly surprised when he honestly stated that from the moment he took her with him, his life became somewhat unreal. Rotia was not used to such confessions, so she did her best to stay strong and not fall into his traps. He smiled and said that was all part of his charm. When she asked how he could say something like that so easily, the woman blushed and looked away. Without realizing the glass being offered to her, she finally paid attention to the familiar object that the man proposed. Timon suggested relaxing by having some wine, so they immediately toasted to the success of the deal. They continued sitting together on the bed, raising their glasses, trying to dispel the discomfort. The man excitedly interrupted her, asking if that was considered a traditional wedding rite. When the couple toasts, Rotia did not share his enthusiasm and shook her head. But he immediately responded that it was also done before the night shared by a man and a woman. She didn't even know how to respond to such a bold comment from the man. Still, she approached him and told him he was right, although she expressed doubts about whether it was really a romantic moment. Timon replied that his heart was beating strongly, but Rotia told him she would only believe it when the girl scolded him, saying he was saying embarrassing things and felt neither blush nor shame. The man asked her with a smile why she was searching so eagerly in him for qualities he did not possess. His question caught Rotia off guard, so she didn't even know how to respond to Timon. He was surprised to see how the girl again drank the contents in one gulp, and decided to stop her by holding her hand. When she was trying to pour more drink into her glass, seeing Rotio's hand extended, he told her she shouldn't drink anymore, and he promised not to joke again, caressing her face, and at the same time, he gently brushed her cheek. Rotia immediately reacted to this gesture, looking at him with her sweet violet eyes, and smiled. Seeing how her cheeks slightly flushed from his touch, Damon decided to move to the next stage. Laying her back on the bed to provoke a new surge of sensations, the beautiful girl looked at him with her eyelashes lowered and asked who among them felt nervous. Holding her above, he calmly replied that it was he who felt that way. He tangled his fingers, and while squeezing her hand, he told her he had been restless, but now felt serene being with her finally. Timon leaned in, almost brushing his lips against hers, noticing how they parted slightly at the feel of his breath. He embraced her waist. Holding her head with one hand, he passionately kissed her lips. Meanwhile, the queen was already conversing with the spies sent to watch Timon. She found it strange that throughout all this time, the man had never left her property. She looked thoughtfully at the landscape from the window, wondering what he was still doing inside. The queen recalled the details of their last conversation when he spoke of where he had brought the newly arrived slave. Teo still sensed that the slave brought from New York had a connection with Empress Thanatos. He doubted that Timon was lying to him, but he still perceived something strange in his passionate account. Comparing her appearance with that of Empress Thanatos, he thought the slave would be discovered sooner or later. The sealing process was a complete success, so the former empress greeted the morning in the arms of a passionate man. Rotia woke up, shielding her eyes from the bright sun that was slowly streaming in through the panoramic window. Clutching the blanket to her chest, she sat up, realizing after a few minutes that it was already morning. She turned curiously toward her companion sleeping peacefully beside her, watching Timon sleeping soundly in the bed. She delighted in his naked form. Meanwhile, the Emperor of Thanatos was also in bed. But unlike the general from the warm lands, the shadows over his head grew darker as Natasha watched over his bed. She promised herself she would pray for his recovery at the temple, as he seemed to get worse every day. He flinched when she touched his forehead. Checking his temperature, she found him burning with fever. The man roughly grabbed her wrist, demanding she stop her annoying fidgeting. Natasha moved closer, concerned, trying to understand why he had rejected her affection. as she placed her hand against his cheek. Feigning sadness over how thin he had become, she watched as the emperor looked at her wearily. He listened as she explained that 12 hours had passed since he lost his name, realizing she had been by his side the entire time. After that, he coughed violently. Natasha leaned in closer and said it was only natural for her to be with him. She told him to just sleep and not worry. Gilotti called her his beloved and promised to make her empress, to which she replied that she wanted to be with him forever. The man looked at her lovingly as she snuggled against his chest, thinking about how sincerely she cared for him. Through sorrow and joy, she laid him back down on the bed, telling him to rest. He should rest peacefully and not worry about anything. He asked her to wait until she became empress, and then he fell asleep. Natasha smiled gently at the sight of him, but her tenderness instantly turned to indifference. Once he was asleep, she raised her hand to her face, took out a handkerchief, and disdainfully wiped the sweat from her palm. The calculating woman sighed in relief, thinking that she had only been in his room for 5 minutes and had hardly been in any danger. As she rose from the chair, she mentally begged the emperor to hold on until their child was born. As she left his room, she glanced one last time at Gilotti, weakened by his illness, disappointed by how feeble his power had become. Finding herself in the middle of an empty hallway, she wondered how many people he must have killed to have fallen so low. She looked at his portrait from the time when his strength and power were at their peak, and mentioned with disdain that in his prime he was a man of extraordinary abilities, waking after the embraces of a sweet night. The captive doves greeted the morning once again on the terrace under the bright sun. Timon decided to show her the letter Ronazo had sent, wanting to know her opinion on the matter. Upon reading its contents, she looked away thoughtfully, pondering the mystery of the phrase about the treasure. Transported by the Iron Child. She immediately thought of Arson, who was in trouble, and stated firmly that they had to find the Iron Child. Realizing the importance of the situation, Timon was surprised when she told him that this child was the same boy to whom he had entrusted his family's relic. The young woman confirmed his suspicion, adding that they needed to hurry and find him. Before crossing the sea, she brilliantly deduced that Arson had fallen into a trap on his way to the weir and ended up on an unknown ship. After hearing her assumptions, Timon didn't remain on the sidelines and shared his own theory with her as well. He said the boy had probably already left Thanatos, and that from the ship they could only reach 3 neighboring countries. Timon immediately dismissed the possibility of sending him to Amore, since it would be too problematic due to the country's complex entry procedures. The next assumption was that it was unlikely they were headed to Majan, as it's too far away. In the end, out of the 3 countries, only Neelix was left, where the slave trade is thriving. Rosalyn asked him a troubling question, wondering if he could save the boy. Timon smiled, and like a true general assured her he would bring the boy to her within 1 month. The queen stared thoughtfully out the window. Recalling a sad chapter of her life, she clearly remembered how after losing the war, her father had to kneel before the Emperor of Thanatos. In front of his people, the Emperor forced everyone to witness the King of Amore kissing the soles of his boots. This public humiliation, which saved thousands of lives in Amore, cost her family their honor and her younger sister in exchange for an alliance. Theo still doesn't know what happened to her younger sister, since there has been no news of her ever since. She remembers crying on her knees when, thanks to that humiliating pact, her country was promised 100 years of peace. Trying to contain the anger and resentment boiling inside her, she slammed her fist against the glass, vowing to find her sister. As she reflected on the possibilities, she coldly realized that the imperial family had fallen just as she had. According to Theo, with such a foolish emperor, it was only a matter of time before the Thanatos Empire fell completely. The slave girl Timon brought back still continued to trouble her, since she bore a striking resemblance to the fallen empress. Turning to her spies, she ordered them to continue keeping an eye on the estate and to wait for the woman to come out. The queen ordered that if the woman showed herself, she was to be brought to her at all costs. Glaring harshly at her servants, she ordered them to complete the task no matter what, and to kidnap her. Natalia walked through the cold palace halls clutching her swollen belly. She knew she had no idea when His Majesty would die, so she had to leave for another country and seek political asylum. At dinner, she recalled hearing that the people of Amore were licentious savages. Natalia stared intently at Timon, who was about 1 meter away, and she clearly found him to be an attractive man. The distant man immediately caught her eye, as he was the only one who didn't even glance her way. She smiled as she looked at her nails, thinking she should focus on seducing him. Suddenly, the door burst open and a man in service to the Empire ran out towards Natalia. He immediately threw himself into her arms, just as she had once done with him. With a look full of love, he apologized for taking so long. In the imperial chambers, Natalia ordered him to shut up, as he began to grumble and curse the emperor. In the end, the woman quickly pulled him inside and pushed him against the table. She made her move, calling him Roxanne and telling him to shut up, and not to forget they were in the imperial palace. Squeezing Natalia's hand, he asked uncertainly who would dare to harm a state official. After the emperor's fall, the woman smiled, giving Roxanne a feigned nod. While thinking how arrogant he was, he timidly watches his beloved who carries another's child because she was unable to conceive with Gilotti. Natalia smiles, pointedly stroking her belly in front of the man. Pressing herself against him, she asked him directly if he would help her son become emperor. As if hypnotized, He looked into her eyes and assured her that everything would be fine. Upon hearing those words, Natalia smiled in satisfaction, internally rejoicing that everything was going according to her plan. Meanwhile, in Amore, an unusual rain for that continent raged, causing a torrent of turbulent waters. Timon was on the terrace watching the gray, ominous clouds, lost in his thoughts. Memories surfaced of a day in Thanatos, when while hiding from the stormy weather, he heard a beautiful song. That same day, he had unconsciously stepped out onto the terrace, where he happened upon Empress Rosalyn singing. Not wanting to give himself away, he hid behind the wall again and continued to watch the woman intently until he heard her stop. He disappeared, completely not understanding why he did so. He began to recall their previous encounters under unpleasant circumstances. Encounters which he always ended up losing. He remembered how dangerous she was when defending her country's interests, fearing not even the emperor. Timon never imagined that such a strong and fearsome woman could have such a sweet voice. He kept watching as with a smile. She caught snowflakes in her hand. Accompanied by her handmaiden Charlotte, she firmly believed that on that night, on her grandfather's birthday, a sign would appear, and his spirit would descend from the heavens. Clearly engraved in his memory was her radiant appearance as she continued to gaze at the sky with a warm smile. Ah, Timon. He had been sure she was made of poison, but her expression made him doubt his own thoughts. Since then, every time he saw her, he always perceived something that went beyond simple male interest in a woman. Finally, a pile of memories gave way to a new feeling that was corroding him from the inside. From within, Timon felt with his entire being the desire to embrace her with all his might. A desire so strong he had to restrain himself at all costs. He knew he couldn't just approach her since she no longer needed his life force, and she probably wouldn't allow any contact. His desire for affection was so intense that immediately, a crazy idea came to him, compelling him to grab a blade. The result was not long in coming, and so that night Rosia was not fated to finish her book. She immediately noticed Timon bursting into the room at full speed. Clutching his bloody hand and groaning in pain, he moved closer to the young woman, so she could get a better look at his wound. Alarmed, Rosia instantly ran to the man, ready to find out what happened. Feigning pain, he muttered through clenched teeth that he'd been attacked suddenly. To avoid further questions, he knelt before her, asking her to heal him since he had lost so much blood. She looked at him in shock, stopping in her tracks. She paused for a moment upon hearing he'd lost so much blood. The man kept grimacing in pain, urging her to help him as soon as possible. He squeezed her snow-white palm with his blood-stained hand, finally urging her to act. He managed to ask if anything besides his hand was hurt when he received no answer. She ran to him, ordered him to hold still while holding his hand, and told him to wait for her to take care of him. Mesmerized, he hugged her tightly, realizing that he was slowly going insane from his feelings for her. Meanwhile, Rosia had no idea what fate had befallen her loyal servant Anna, a young woman beaten down by life. She sat sadly on the edge of the cliff at the home the Empress had assigned her, remembering their final conversation before they parted ways. She recalled when the Empress asked her without hesitation to go to the Noam house on the beach. Then another memory tormented her. How she tried to return to her previous home, but was cast out, the furious man turning her away with contempt, saying that after the fall of the Empress, she was a danger to his family. Anna looked pleadingly at her beloved, who had thrown her out as if she were a dog in the street. At that moment, she sank into complete darkness, realizing that everything had turned against her, and she would have to abandon her wealth and rank of Countess of Puli. Anna's heart was torn by countless scars, but the loss of her beloved Empress tortured her to her very core. She remembered how they had planned to travel there together, but in the end, she ended up completely alone. The next painful memory was her meeting with Rosalyn's brother, whom she loved passionately. While on that same cliff at Noam Beach, she looked at the man with love, still unable to imagine the news he was about to give her. Hiding his heavy gaze, he broke eye contact when he mentioned that he had been chosen as an envoy to Leghelm, and Anna felt a deep pain. Hearing that it was His Majesty's order, she understood they were sending him to certain death. She still vividly remembers how he said his farewell, telling her not to wait for him, and to find a good man and marry. She had no idea how much it had cost him to say that. That's why she could only watch him slowly walk away. She understands that even if she had stopped him, he would have fallen into the same trap as his sister. The thoughts of their tragic lives brought her pain to its peak, so as she stood up, she contemplated suicide. She dropped her cloak and continued to think that she had no one left as she walked crying toward the edge of the cliff. She kept repeating the innocent Rosalyn's name. Convinced that Rosalyn should have protected herself instead of leaving her all her savings, she stepped over the edge and threw herself into the void, thinking, for the last time, that she had no reason to live without her. Fortunately, her nanny rushed to her aid, trying to save her from certain death. At the last moment, Anna turned, hearing her servant beg her to stop as if she were waking from a dream. She heard the words she had longed to hear. A letter had arrived. Anna managed to grab hold of the cliff's edge, and hung there desperately clinging to life and her nanny's hands with all her might. The nanny pulled her back. Knowing that every second counted, she finally managed to save the desperate young woman, after which she started to check her over. She took the precious letter from her pocket and solemnly handed it to Anna, giving her a reason to go on living. Her face immediately filled with tears when she read that the letter was addressed to the beautiful lady of the rose forest. Not long before, Rosha was sitting and carefully writing a letter, intending to send it to her faithful assistant. The only thing that could distract her that night was the bright moon which bathed everything around her in its intense light. She watched it anxiously, wondering if Anna would understand everything she wrote. Erin Rocha remembers how as children her brother Kainley and Anna played a game where each had their own role. She didn't know how they had come up with something like that, but she was very happy that the three of them were so close. That's why the girl decided to address Anna in the letter, appealing to cherished childhood memories. As she began writing, she understood that she needed to craft a comprehensive plan against the Empress. There were 3 pillars supporting the power, one of which was the destroyed Sunset family. One of the remaining ones was Marcus Permelio. He was the ruler of the northern lands. The second turned out to be the red-haired Duke Gertium, nicknamed the Royal Dog. The last one was so loyal to the Emperor that as a sign he would listen only to him, he cut off and gave him his ear. She knew that to win the loyalty of the family's head, some leverage was necessary, so she immediately remembered. Her fencing instructor. Duke Gertium was the sole survivor of his entire fallen family destroyed by the Emperor's tyranny. Her master gave him the safe haven, but just 3 years ago he was almost sentenced to prison for tax issues. At that moment, Duke Gertium supported him by paying 10 times his debt and opposing the imperial decision. Erin Rocha carefully analyzes the available information, knowing he is hiding a man who is his weak point upon reading her lady's letter. Anna beamed with joy as she enthusiastically embraced its objectives and planned her actions. The next step in Erin Rocha's investigation was to analyze all the relics, both available and inaccessible, of special interest. This brought up 3 relics whose location was completely unknown. The young woman knew they were in inaccessible places. Therefore, they had to employ additional forces. She knew that to find them, it was necessary to possess the power of the Heart Seer of Keaton. Its wielder had yet to be discovered. Her reflections were interrupted when she felt a sudden burning sensation right in her chest area. In an attempt to identify the source of these uncomfortable sensations, she approached the mirror on her desk. Finally, pulling aside the edge of her dress, she saw the mark. The name of a man was under her collarbone. Hiding that inscription, she tried to calm herself, telling herself that this ability was necessary, although it was very annoying. Meanwhile, Timon was already instructing his aides. At the meeting of the Platano order, he ordered them to find the boy. Pointing to the map, he added that speed and cunning would be the most important things for pursuing the smugglers. Since the trading month was coming to an end, they had to hurry, because it would be harder to find them later. The man sitting next to Timon expressed his suspicion that the slave traders were probably from Nelux. The general asked him a direct question about why he thought they weren't pirates, but slave traders. He replied that 2 days earlier a ship had passed near Amora. This confirmed Timon's recent suspicions. After listening to the man, he announced that they would depart at dawn. Under the pretext of recovering stolen family relics, Timon turned, upon hearing the others present, asked if they would be traveling with them. Realizing they looked more like mercenaries, he wearily rubbed the back of his neck, covering his eyes. Another man became agitated. He remembered that it wasn't a simple treasure hunt, but a truly dangerous mission. After making sure there was no reason to worry, Timon ordered them to prepare for the next day's departure. The man's thoughts were interrupted by the butler's voice trying to give him important news as he noticed the confusion on the older man's face. He asked him directly what he meant. Timon's heart sank upon hearing that the day his brother would arrive was drawing near. He made the butler even more nervous by asking how soon before the deadline his brother would arrive. He just averted his gaze as he had to announce that he would arrive in 1 week. Meanwhile, a young man, reserved, was already moving through the streets of the southern city under the cover of night at that moment. Erin Rocha was sleeping peacefully in her new room, covered with a light blanket, when she was forced to wake up upon hearing the man knocking on her door. When she opened it, Timon confidently strode to the center of her room. Greeting her with a wave, the woman received him with a look of displeasure, obviously unhappy about being woken up at such an hour. She immediately assumed he was injured again, which made her ask why they only had to see each other for that reason. Without a word, Erin Rocha gave his body a quick scan as she approached the bed. The girl was surprised. She was surprised again by his regenerative ability, upon seeing that his hand was completely healed as he sat next to her with one leg on the bed. He told her he planned to leave early in the morning. Erin Rocha was immediately surprised, not understanding where he could possibly be going at that hour. The man looked at her with interest and asked if she really cared about him. Upon hearing this, she shot him a look as if he were crazy, until she finally understood his intention. Erin Rocha averted her gaze. Without replying to his bold comment, the girl's reaction brought a warm smile to his face, which he accompanied with a squeeze of her hand. Noticing her discomfort, he told her openly that her expression was worth more than any gratitude. She turned, asking what expression he had in mind. As he told her to show it only to him, Timon moved closer, explaining that such an expression could touch the soul and make people perform great feats. Blushing even more, she shouted that she had never made a face like that. This wasn't the man's last mischievous act, which surprised her even more. This time the man swept her into his arms. He looked mischievously into her eyes. When she asked what he was doing, he simply stated that he planned to show her her own face. He then placed her in front of the mirror, drawing her attention to her own reflection. At first, she didn't understand his idea. Not understanding what he was trying to show her, he turned her and told her that her face now looked charming and vibrant, unlike when she was in the snowy woods. Blushing, she finally understood the message he was trying to convey, and noticed how much she had changed in that time. Arin Rosha asked him to stop as he moved closer and began talking about why she was so beautiful. Timon continued to torture himself, wondering why he was born in Thanatos, and not in Amor, where he could have met her first and made her happy. He turned her to face him and said that he wished she would smile, since he had not yet seen her smile. Arin Rosha looked down sadly as he removed his hand from her face, and he ordered her not to leave the house while he was away. This precaution was because rumors of her appearance had spread everywhere, and he didn't know what might happen. Timon also mentioned in passing that in a few days his younger brother would be here. Noticing her surprise, he explained that his brother came to Amor for medicine 1 or 2 times a year. Realizing he would probably arrive when he was away, he insisted that she ignore him. Meanwhile, his brother enthusiastically gripped the horse's reins, forcing it to speed up. He drew ever closer to the city, surrounded by golden sand. Relieved by his arrival, he exclaimed with energy that he was finally there. As if heading to the very heart of the city, the man was already fully preparing for the imminent journey, enjoying the last moments of calm. He slowly caressed his hair, delighting in the warm water that enveloped his muscular body as Timon remembered. His last request was for Arin Rossi to ignore her brother. He assured her that the butler Satan would notify her of his arrival, and if she had problems, she could go to Azrael. The last thing he asked of her was not to do anything foolish. Bowing before the woman, he gently took her foot. Demanding that she not get hurt or disappear, Timon delicately caressed her foot, reminding her that she now belonged to him. While looking playfully into her eyes, he told her never to forget him from that moment on. He was shocked, as if by an electric jolt, upon seeing the young woman's sudden change in mood as she blushed furiously. Her reaction was the most pleasant source of mental delight during the cleansing ritual. Sensing it was time to leave, he stood up and walked over to the mirror, drying his wet hair while looking at his reflection. He immediately noticed a small inscription left on his chest from the seal. He gently caressed the name Arin Rossi engraved on his chest, feeling a pleasant sensation. Meanwhile, Tasha and Luis were rushing toward the store, hoping for news. Finally, upon recognizing the correct sign, they mustered all their strength with determination. Inside the store, a kind man greeted them. Happy to see the familiar twins, the girls surrounded Uncle Bookman, immediately asking if their book was out yet. With a smile, he handed the girls the first printed edition of their book, instantly filling them with joy. The twins were so happy that at first they couldn't even believe their eyes. Uncle Bookman proudly assured them that among all the books published in the capital this year, theirs was the most luxurious and refined. Hearing this, Tasha and Luis were on cloud 9. Clearly surprised by such success, they jumped with excitement and immediately hugged each other, sharing their mutual victory. Bookman proudly wiped away his tears, knowing that after 10 years, they had finally fulfilled their dream. The man tried to hide his tears of pride as the surprised girls noticed his emotional expression. They listened attentively to his recommendations as he again advised them to review the book and make any necessary adjustments. He also told them he had prepared several copies and offered for them to take 1 or 2. Tasha and Luis said that 1 would be enough, and they already knew who deserved it. The man immediately asked if they were referring to that girl they worry about. The girls explained that the woman had greatly inspired them, sharing that she had lost her family in an accident just as they had. They looked at each other and confirmed that this was one of the reasons they felt more and more inspired when they thought of her. One of the girls pointed out that back then they had each other, but that woman was left all alone. That's why they strived to be kinder to her. The man was so proud of their kind act that he couldn't hold back his tears. Realizing that he had taught them something good in the end, he exclaimed at the top of his lungs that he was very proud of them, and of how much they had grown during that time. The uncle hugged them firmly, seeing what they were trying to do. Butchman exclaimed that one day they would be magnificent writers. The girls smiled as they patted the back of the man who had become a loved one. As he said, he was very proud, 6 days after Timon left. Arin Rossi's thoughts were still filled with whether the man had found arson. She also didn't forget that besides her pendant, there are 5 other sacred objects. According to legend, one of them was a watch that could reverse time. The young woman began to think that the relic could be destroyed, and that interacting with it could provoke divine intervention. According to ancient records, the sacred objects have a special power when they are all brought together. Arin Rossi didn't know if gods existed, but she had a clear feeling that she had to find the other relics first. Her gaze was suddenly drawn to the letters left on the table, overflowing with information. In them it was mentioned that the Emperor of Thanatos would fall due to the Empress's curse. Reading this, Arin Rossi was so shocked that for a few seconds, she couldn't look away from the text. As she let go of the page, she couldn't believe something like that was possible, since the curse had not been cast. She left the letters on the table and returned to her room, oblivious to everything. Azrael was waiting for her there, wanting to share some good news. Holding a bag of coins, she confirmed that the letter was delivered anonymously via the shortest route, just as she had arranged. Smiling, the young woman squeezed the woman's hands and told her to keep the rest of the money. Azrael wasn't prepared to receive such a large amount, but Arin Rossi assured her it was a reward for her effort and trust. She sincerely begged her to accept the gift without hesitation. as it was the only way she could think of to thank her. The woman looked at her in surprise, trying to understand where such funds came from. She finally accepted Aisha's gift, assuring her that she would spend it as her lady wished. Her willingness to help brought a smile to Erin Rossi's face, as she asked her to continue coming to her with any errands. The women's quiet atmosphere was interrupted by the twins bursting in to the room. They enthusiastically presented the book to their main inspiration, who became the prototype for the protagonist. Azrael clutched her head wearily, understanding the embarrassment and humiliation they had caused. Natasha and Luis proudly held out the very book they had been writing for so long. The woman looked in surprise at the copy they offered, examining its cover and title. Taking the promising book, she thanked the girls for the gift, and said she would be sure to read it. They were over the moon to learn that Erin Rossi had happily accepted their new literary magnum opus. The novel's title perfectly matched its content, which was composed of numerous steamy scenes. In one of them, General Timon grabbed the girl by the hand, asking how she dared to escape from him. Shouting that she would never surrender to him, Kimon's lover nonetheless noticed a flash of melancholy and sadness on his face. Erin Rossi stood frozen, blushing as she read how the general's tongue insistently brushed against Leela's tightly pressed lips. After finishing the novel, the girl tried to sort through her thoughts and understand what she had just read. She placed her palm over her heart, completely bewildered as to why it was beating so fast. The book's plot reminded her of her own life, since the protagonist was also brought to the desert as a prisoner, where the commander fell in love with her. Because of the protagonist's selfishness, the girl runs away, but he brings her back, shedding bitter tears of blood. Erin Rosha couldn't help but put herself in the female protagonist's shoes. Wondering whether or not she could forgive him, the girl felt it was difficult to read this story, although there was something philosophical about it. Upon hearing a knock on the door, she briefly ordered the unexpected guests to come in. They were twin sisters who were clearly trying every way possible to know her opinion on their novel. Tasha and Luis almost jumped for joy upon finding their book on the table. Erin Rosha tried to hide her blushing face, commenting that their book wasn't very long. That's why she read it quickly. The mischievous twins stood motionless, impatient to know if she had liked their book. Smiling sincerely, the woman answered them honestly that the novel turned out to be interesting. This caused exclamations of joy, and upon hearing Bookstore Street mentioned, Erin Rosia asked with curiosity what that place was. The girls pointed out excitedly that she hadn't been out yet, hinting at a visit to the flower festival. The following month, Erin Rosia didn't respond to the flood of information about the festival. Watching Tasha and Luis with a gentle smile, she finally replied that she really wanted to attend, and decided to ask a question. The girls froze when they heard her ask without finishing how they had managed to write such a novel, feeling a mix of joy and surprise. When the tall, blushing Aisha pointed out the crudeness of the content, the mischievous twins understood right away that she hadn't read novels like that, and promised to bring her a couple more of that type. She reflected deeply when they also asked if anything had bothered her while reading. Finally, Erin Rosia thanked them for their trust and asked them to modify a scene. Upon hearing this, they looked mischievous, eagerly awaiting the observation from their main inspiration. The girls pounced on her, examining the chapter of the novel that she kindly presented to them. Upon pointing out the scene that needed changes, they smiled and confirmed that it also seemed strange to them and they would correct it. While they were absorbed in the lively discussion, a strange voice suddenly interrupted them, shouting orders to open something immediately. They went to the balcony, scanning for the source of the annoying noise. Azrael also approached them, determined to inform her lady about the completed task. The girls immediately decided to ask her why there was so much commotion outside. Azrael sighed wearily, informing them that Lord Cashin had arrived. The infamous brother of Timon, meanwhile, he was shouting at the guards why he couldn't use the east wing, which was temporarily closed for occupancy. Upon hearing the explanation about the fire that had affected the house, he indignantly tried to find at least one sign of damage to the structure, and tried again to convince them, claiming he would use the third floor, which seemed perfectly suitable for living. The butler exchanged a tired look with the guard, implying that he should take clearer measures before Cashin could take a step forward. They immediately crossed their weapons in front of him, blocking his desired path. The young man clearly got angry, since until then he didn't know the real reason for the visiting ban. The older man again referred to the fire, stating that the internal damage was quite severe. Cashin accused him of lying when he claimed that it could have harmful effects and trigger bronchial asthma. His face filled with surprise when the butler exclaimed that it was Timon's order not to let anyone into the south wing, which was the main reason for his anger, was that he had come from the very beginning for the spectacular view from the main hall. Realizing he didn't want to give up, Satin tries to find a compromise, asking him to occupy the west wing instead of the east, as he was unwilling to obey. He pointed out that he had the right to use the house in the same way as his brother Timon. As Cashin brazenly ordered him to obey his master, he pulled out the letter Timon had left for this situation, and the young man snatched it from his hands expressively. Glancing through it with discontent to the very end, he refused to believe his brother would act that way and left in a fury, accepting that he wouldn't go there. Erin Rosia watched him without blinking, taking in the show put on by the expressive young man. She was surprised by his audacity, slowly understanding why Timon had asked her not to confront him. Sitting down at the table, the woman decided to ask the maid Cassion's age, and discovered that he had recently turned 20. She decided to tell her about it, mentioning that he had been sick since birth, and was predicted to die before he turned 10. Asriel smiled and said she remembered it perfectly, as her family had been serving the Crisis family for a long time. She recalled how after several incidents where he nearly died, his mother stopped seeking doctors and began consulting fortune tellers. The fortune teller they found advised them to keep Cassian away from his older brother, which was supposed to help with his treatment. After that, the lady took her youngest son and immediately left with him for the outskirts. And his condition improved, leaving Timon as the master of the mansion, who since childhood stood out for his special abilities, being intelligent and brave. Acrisel proudly shared. She told of how he studied at the royal school in the capital and then grew up to become a great master. Listening to this story, Aaron Rocha responded calmly, finishing her tea, as the maid added that Timon listens to all of his brother's requests, since he believes he was sent to the city on his account. Acrisel timidly covered her mouth with her hand, realizing that the master would probably not be pleased that she had related that story. Smiling, she affirms that he won't kill her for it anyway, because he still needs her. At first, Aaron Rocha is surprised by her assertion, but in the end she ends up sharing the amused attitude and also begins to laugh. Meanwhile, Cassian could not let the situation go, which gave rise to much intriguing speculation. During all those days, he carefully observed the East Wing, trying to discover any sign of construction work. Thoughtfully resting his chin on his hand, he realized it was becoming increasingly difficult to contain the curiosity that was flooding him. Finally, a flash of inspiration struck him, driven by the need to get answers as soon as possible. While Cassian pondered whether his brother would kill him for this mischief, Timon was already fighting a danger that had emerged. He stood proudly onto the deck facing the storm, but his thoughts were still occupied with family matters. Timon knew that both Satin and Acrisel would be kind to him, but the fact that he himself wasn't there worried him. His attention was immediately captured by a crewmate who noticed an unusual movement ahead. At last, two main sources of danger appeared before them, resembling two monstrous sea dragons. Timon fiercely drew his sword and ordered an attack on the monster to the left. While planning to personally take down the one on the right, the brave general fixed his gaze directly on the creature. Pointing his sword at it, he shouted loudly, ordering them to raise their bows and grappling hooks to be used in the hunt for the monster. Meanwhile, Cassian couldn't shake his obsessive idea, so he greeted the night in the arms of the sea. Heading towards that forbidden place, he traveled a considerable distance with the intention of discovering the secret that interested him. The boy wasn't the only one admiring the sunset, as Aisha was already on the balcony watching the sea. Initially, she gazed ahead without thinking, getting lost in a stream of thoughts until an unknown figure caught her attention. She was surprised to see that the stubborn young man had managed to reach the ocean, overcoming all obstacles. His eyes widened as he focused on the elegant woman with an unusual appearance standing on the balcony. He couldn't believe what he was seeing and exclaimed excitedly that it was indeed a woman, something he had never been able to imagine or believe. Until that moment, that his emotionally withdrawn brother had hidden someone there. His arrogance vanished instantly under the stern gaze of the imposing Aaron Rossi, his cheeks blushing. With his hands on his hips, he addressed her, contemptuously demanding she tell him her name, but he barely had time to wait for an answer. He immediately heard the murmur of voices calling for him, and realizing what he was up to, the guards grabbed him by the elbows, with the intention of stopping his advances. Meanwhile, the owner of the room remained standing, watching as they dragged Cassian away. He shouted with all his might to at least get her name, but ignoring his shouts, she turned around and frowned wearily. Oblivious to his clamor, her indifference infuriated him even more, so he kept trying to get her attention. Finally, the young woman managed to fall asleep peacefully in her bed, tucked under the covers. Unfortunately for her, Cassian returned, this time climbing onto the balcony and banging on the window, intending to interrupt her quiet time. Aaron Rossi desperately tried to fall asleep, aware that he would continue to bother her. She still kept her back to him, pretending to be a sleeping girl. Feeling a wave of empathy for the young man, considering he might catch a cold, she opened her eyes, wondering what to do. Cassian's eyes lit up with astonishment when he realized he had managed to capture the mysterious young woman's attention. She finally walked to the railing, appearing before the persistent young man, just as she had at the start of his advance. She looked at him coldly without saying a word. The boy looked back at her, surprised, not understanding why she remained silent. Expecting a different reaction, the last thing he saw was her contemptuous face, after which she immediately drew the curtain. The young man's face contorted with anger when he realized the girl had no intention of yielding to his demand to open the door. Aaron Rossi thought she should call Asriel urgently, since at this rate he would undoubtedly break the glass. As soon as the woman opened the door, a guard, assigned for her security, greeted her immediately. He briefly interrupted her nighttime walk, explaining that strolls in the dark could be dangerous. Aaron Rossi understood where all this was leading, so she decided to directly ask for Asriel to bring her tea. The guard complied with her request, first asking her to please wait inside the room. As soon as she entered, the door behind her slammed shut. Asriel appeared instantly in the young woman's room. Holding a tray with hot ginger tea, the maid still didn't know which hero her lady had prepared it for, so she answered calmly when the girl addressed her. The woman was left petrified when Aisha pointed a finger at the window. At first, she didn't grasp what was happening and thought the problem was the curtain, until she saw what was behind it. Asriel's mouth fell open in shock, finally understanding why at such an hour. Aisha had summoned her. The first face she saw on the balcony was Cashin's, shivering from the cold. A few minutes later, he was inside the room, glad that they had finally met. Erin Rosilla was definitely not willing to talk to a shameless man who had broken into her house. Adopting a cold attitude, the boy tried to put on the most defiant expression possible, as if she were the guest and not him. The girl kept her gaze fixed on him while Ashral remained behind. Blushing with embarrassment, Cashin was surprised to see the woman suddenly get up and walk towards the closet. His gaze immediately focused on Aisha's bandaged leg, which made him think she was injured. Feeling the weight of his gaze, Erin Rosilla turned and observed him in response. The hostess's gesture of attention was even more unexpected when she calmly handed him a blanket. He wrapped himself in the warm object. He looked at her shyly and thanked her for her kindness. The girl fixed her gaze on the curious boy when he asked what had happened to her leg. She did not respond directly to his inappropriate question and simply averted her gaze, returning to her place. The awkward silence between them grew even more as Erin Rosilla settled into her chair, ignoring Cashin. The young man adopted a thoughtful air, asking if she was really his lover considering Timon's character. She decided to maintain her story that she was a foreign slave, so she answered affirmatively in the language of Jerusa. Cashin did not know that language, so he didn't immediately understand what the young woman was saying. Aisha insisted, asking him why he had hidden in the room of someone he considered his brother's woman. His eyes widened when he realized that she was not going to speak to him in the official language of his kingdom. With a strange surprise, the boy decided to approach the woman of rare beauty, claiming she was the most beautiful he had ever seen. Unwilling to listen to his arrogant compliments, she pointed a finger at the door, wanting him to leave the room. Cashin felt confused but still asked her again if she really wanted him to leave. He looked at her with silent resentment, clearly unwilling to accept that he had been thrown out so coldly. Without moving away from the woman, he decided to tell her his name, wanting to start over from scratch, sincerely pressing a hand to his chest. The boy declared that he didn't want to hurt her, and apologized if he did something wrong. Erin Rosilla remained motionless in anticipation, as he promised to leave, finally asking her for a promise. Experiencing an obvious blush, he proposed they have lunch together the next day. At first, the girl was silent, considering the proposal from a man she didn't particularly like. Finally, she cracked a smile and accepted his proposal, something he decided to ask about again. Using all her charm, she enthusiastically repeated his words in the official language to Cashin. He was overjoyed to get the girl's agreement for a future meeting, like a child getting a much-wanted piece of candy. He rested his hands on the table and joyfully exclaimed, but unfortunately for him, the beginning of their encounter was a disaster. It took a different turn than the young man had expected. He clearly wanted to speak in a more peaceful setting, but was shut down when he saw a ton of guards around. Meanwhile, Erin Rossi continued to drink her tea as if nothing was wrong. Seeing a young man their age, the twin girls were clearly happy to meet him and introduced themselves, and the servants followed their lead. And they greeted the young master similarly, leading him to the table. Satin appeared calm before the young man when he asked. He asked if so many people would draw unnecessary attention. In response, he just briefly replied that he had to be there regardless. Considering his indecent intrusion into a lady's room at dawn, Cashin was unhappily surprised when at last he was informed that due to this incident, they had to reinforce security. He then turned to the young lady, pointing out that it wasn't very reasonable to use 30 people to watch a single slave all because of him. The butler countered his remark, stating that he had found a flaw in security and decided to correct it. Cassian decided to press the issue. Thinking that Satin should serve him as master while his brother was away, Satin did not yield, and replied that under any circumstances. He only served Timon and followed his orders, which angered the young man. He was inwardly envious, thinking that Timon had it all, including a healthy body and a good reputation. Now his negative feelings grew even stronger when he discovered that Timon also had a woman. Getting back to the matter at hand, he pointed to the man behind him and said he had brought an interpreter. The butler tried to rebuke him, saying strangers weren't allowed in the house, but Cashin just ignored him. He then sat at the table with a triumphant smile, offering the girl some food. Erin Rossi stared at the young man with a defiant look. Ignoring her provocative tone, Cashin turned to the translator, demanding to be introduced to the girl and to learn her name. The specialist immediately complied with his request, asking the woman the question he wanted. At first, she smiled disdainfully. Burning with the desire to toy with him, she then answered, unleashing a new wave of excitement. After understanding what the woman said, the translator felt awkward, not knowing how to relay the information to Cashin. Sensing the translator's unease, Cassian impatiently asked what happened. He sighed with regret and explained why she should have to introduce herself to an ignorant person. After a moment of reflection, Cassian surprised the girl by passionately telling her he wanted to get closer to her, after which she visibly blushed. His declaration had an unexpected effect on the nearby servants, which was especially noticeable on the blushing twins Ariel and Satin. They didn't share the euphoria of the smitten girls. They just stared wearily ahead, feeling embarrassed by the lack of response from the cold Aishi. Cashin pointed at her, confidently stating that he would ask his brother for her, so it would be best if he knew her name. Erin Rossi sighed wearily, as if she were listening to the buzzing of an annoying fly. She then immediately replied that he was being very disrespectful to his brother, the head of the family. He stands up furiously, clearly not expecting such a harsh response, when the translator repeated the girl's words to him. He shot a dangerous glare and stated that he's only claiming what is his, and that his brother stole from him. She immediately asked him why he thought that way. When he said that everything Timon enjoyed should have been his, Cashin's heart lurched. His heart sank upon hearing her assert that he could have hardly elevated his family to that level as its chief. Seeing his shock, she smiled and pointed out that she deeply doubted it. The young man flew into a rage and, slamming his fist on the table, yelled that she knew nothing since he was the one who deserved it. Ignoring his aggression, she stated that unlike him, his brother would not swim at night to call at a woman's window. Satin watched him cautiously as she heard her say that he could never be Timon. Realizing she was no ordinary maid, Aran Rosha finally proclaimed that she had said everything and did not wish to see him anymore. In the end, the woman rejected him with disdain, asserting that she didn't want to deal with creatures who knew nothing of respect and courtesy. Cashin, indignant, tried to stop her, calling out to her. Seeing how quickly she was walking away, he watched her leave, stunned. He understood that she had skillfully rejected him while also pointing out his childish attitude. Meanwhile, the notorious slave owners were already trying to contain the fog that enveloped everything around them. Arson, who had been injured by them, also experienced the torment of the hurricane at sea after waking from a long sleep. He was still trying to understand what the hell was happening. Arson lay exhausted on the floor, feeling a deep hunger and an urgent need to escape. At that moment, a blonde girl also kidnapped by the slavers appeared in front of him. She noticed how exhausted the boy was. She offered him a piece of fresh bread so he could eat a little. She leaned over him and, smiling kindly, continued to offer him the bread, urging him to eat. The kind face of the girl, who was in a similar situation, affected his perception, making him trust her. He hesitated, wondering how she had gotten there, but thanked her anyway and began to eat. The two of them were alerted by a scream that announced the arrival of a creature. From the frightened Arson's hands, a piece of bread went flying when he realized that there was a real monster in front of them. His mind filled with bleak premonitions, invaded by the thought that they would not survive. He immediately began to repent to the Empress. Begging for forgiveness for failing his mission, Arson looked in surprise at the teary-eyed girl when she mentioned the grate. Then he watched as the girl gripped the grate tightly and told him to do the same. The monster struck the water again with its tail, and the girl warned him that the ship would capsize soon. She looked firmly ahead, remaining calm. She ordered him not to let go of the grate under any circumstances, just as she predicted. A giant wave flooded the ship, rendering it useless. The ship disintegrated, and the characters were left in the middle of the deep ocean. Pressed against the grate, Arson came to his senses, and with amazement noticed the shining relic, realizing he was still breathing. After the collapse, salvation arrived, brought by a man who had just swum up to them. He couldn't make out the man's face. He understood that someone wanted to save them, and he reached out his hand. Aranosis also felt the moment of the battle against the monster. Her body was pierced by an unbearable pain. Her hand hurt so much that the young woman staggered, causing a wave of concern from her maid. When asked what hurt him, he immediately mentioned his hand without even seeing what was wrong with Azrael. He looked closely at his shoulder and noticed a huge scar left by the monster. He watched him cautiously. He instantly thought that something might have happened to Timon. Meanwhile, the man was already fighting the terrifying monster. Gripping its fangs with his wounded hands, Timon bravely fought the creature that towered over him. Prying its mouth open, he applied more force, finally snapping the monster's sharp fang. Before it could react, the man was already lunging at it, attacking it with a piece of its own fang. The blonde girl carefully watched over the unconscious Arson. He opened his eyes and saw standing before him the man who had protected them from the monster like a true hero. Timon turned to them and addressed the boy. Noticing the boy had finally regained consciousness, Timon unexpectedly staggered, feeling a pain that immediately alerted the rest of the crew. The man cautiously clutched his chest, feeling an intense burning that emanated from the mark. Even so, he took a step onto the deck, assuring his gathered crewmates that he was fine. He pushed aside the mane of hair covering his eyes and stated that his injury was ridiculous, so it wasn't worth worrying about. His thoughts were occupied by the sensation of the girl's heartbeat, accompanied by the realization that she felt it too. Timon's face lit up with a satisfied smile, realizing that Aisha was worried about him. They finally left the monster, defeated, and returned home with a shout of victory. That same night, recovering from the pain in her shoulder, Erin Russia was already in her cabin, determined to send a letter. She was still distracted by how strongly her heart was pounding, making it difficult to write the message. She tried to push away the negative thoughts, insisting that she had to trust him and focus on her own affairs. In her mind, an image appeared of the man with the gift of vision heart, the sole survivor of the royal family of Katona. She began to formulate a plan, intending to find the prophet as soon as possible. Cashin, however, still couldn't process the latest events. So as morning arrived, he remained lost in thought on the balcony, remembering those words. Words filled with certainty, claiming he would never surpass his brother as a ruler. The boy still couldn't believe how much Timon's lover's words had affected him. He looked up at the sky in confusion, asking himself a rhetorical question about where that woman had come from. Cashin tried to push those thoughts away, but over and over he tried to figure out if she was a noble. He was finally pulled from his endless thoughts when he noticed someone on the shore. By chance, the cheerful Empress appeared before him surrounded by her chattering maids. The young woman's good mood soured when the boy on the balcony decided to get her attention. He hurried down to the shore, calling out for Aaron Russia to wait. Tasha and Luis immediately blocked his path. Sensing that his presence didn't bode well, Aaron Russia turned around when he insisted that their conversation would only last 1 minute and that he just wanted to say something. Upon hearing his last sentence, the girls looked at him doubtfully, not understanding exactly what he meant. Cashin awkwardly scratched the back of his neck and said he wanted to apologize for what happened recently, shrinking back in embarrassment as he apologized for entering her room, understanding it was wrong. Aaron Rosia continued to glare at him. Without responding to his apology, she finally told him coldly that she was glad he understood. Hearing an unknown language again, Cashin exclaimed, angrily, that he didn't understand the meaning of her words. Azrael abruptly interrupted the awkward situation, calling out to her lady with concern. Trying to catch her breath, she loudly announced the return of the injured Lord Timon. Aaron Rosia looked at the woman in terror. Upon hearing that the man had been injured, she glanced at her own scarred shoulder, more or less understanding the pain Timon was now suffering. An instant later, without a word, she immediately headed for the palace, eager to see the man as soon as possible. At first, Cashin tried to stop the young woman, until his attention was drawn to a detail. The boy noticed her bandaged leg, surprised at how quickly she had run away. Meanwhile, Timon's terrified companion begged the butler to save the man, distraught for his life. Satin raised his hands in a reassuring gesture, trying to convince him that he would examine his wounds first. The older man stopped about 3 feet from the room's door, asking for permission to enter. His face tensed in surprise when his master briefly ordered them to bring Aisha. He finally bowed, promising to fulfill his request, as he insisted he shouldn't have to repeat it twice. Following Timon's order, the butler went ahead, determined to find the young woman as soon as possible. Before Satin could even leave the house, he ran into Aaron Rosia, who was running straight toward Timon's room. Wiping the sweat from her hurried journey, he told her not to worry. At first, the old butler remained silent, convinced that healing his master would be anything but simple. Seeing that the girl had stopped, he added that Timon was in the central room, and that they were now counting on her. Aaron Rosia immediately went to the indicated place, feeling a slight but intense nervousness along the way. Upon reaching the familiar door, she called out to the man to announce her presence. The room was the same one where Timon had saved her once, but now he himself was seriously injured and needed help. She approached, thoughtfully analyzing the wounds to assess his condition. Despite his horrible injuries and blood loss, he still greeted her with pride, knowing he had done it all for her. Aaron Rosia quickly saw that his wounds were worse than she had imagined. Hearing her say that he looked bad, he smiled and replied that he looked even better than she did that day. Timon recalled the moment she had impulsively taken a blade and hurt her own neck in this very room. The man's words confused Aaron Rosia, so she didn't answer. While clutching his painful wound, Timon asked her how much longer she planned to make him wait. The girl hesitated when he repeated that he needed her to relieve his pain somehow. Then, to his surprise, Aaron Rosia quickly submerged herself in the water, without even taking off her shoes. She called him by his name, mentally remembering how he had asked her to smile for him before he left. She finally fulfilled the man's dream, smiling at him sincerely and congratulating him on his return. Timon clearly didn't expect her to indulge him so quickly, so for the first few moments, he just sat there as if mesmerized. Immediately after the greeting, Aaron Rosia moved closer to him and congratulated him again on his homecoming. Thanking him for the gift he received, he said he was finally home, gently hugging the young woman. 3 days had passed since they arrived in Amor, and everyone was still worried about Timon's condition. Azrael assured the man in front of her that she had observed his good appetite and appearance, but he clearly doubted her words, remembering the serious wound the man had suffered. Arson listened intently to their conversation, understanding that he had been partly injured while protecting him from the monster. The girl sitting beside him noticed his unease and warned that the Empress was on her way. At first, the boy didn't understand what she meant until he saw her with his own eyes and froze in apprehension. In disbelief that he was finally seeing the woman who had been condemned to a cruel death, an emotional Arson wanted to call out, "Your Majesty," but she stopped him short, placing a finger on his lips. The boy knelt down obediently before Timon and Aaron Rosia. Still in disbelief, he kept asking if it was really her. Shedding endless tears, the young woman was genuinely happy to see the loyal boy who had performed such a great feat for the one who once saved his life. Aaron Rosia sat down next to him on the floor and gently caressed his face, expressing her gratitude for him having gone through so many hardships. She looked at him kindly, into his eyes, and continued to thank him for having survived. The boy kept looking loyally at the Empress, not even trying to wipe away the tears streaming down his face. Finally, he removed the relic from his hand and handed it to the girl, demonstrating how it instantly changed its form. Aaron Rosia looked at the offered item with satisfaction, understanding that he was now safe. She wanted to take the pendant for herself, but Timon interrupted them, holding out a hand to ask them to wait. The man stood in front of the girl. Holding the relic, he asked for permission to place it on her. Without waiting for a reply, Timon moved closer to Aran Rosia and carefully fastened the pendant around her neck, looking directly into her eyes. After completing this simple action, he noted with satisfaction that it suited her well. It was clear how pleased he was to have completed such a difficult task for the woman by risking his life. Their idyllic moment was interrupted by Arson, who suddenly claimed that the necklace had saved his life. Aran Rosia looked at him in surprise, ready to ask him to clarify what he meant. He explained how it lit up and gave him the ability to breathe underwater when he fell into the sea. She clutched the necklace tightly, remembering it had the power to protect against unseen forces, even though it didn't affect the wearer's own strength. The girl who had arrived with Arson continued to watch their discussion in silence, preparing to reveal a secret. As if sensing her stare, both Aran Rosia and Timon immediately turned their attention to her. Before them stood a young woman of rare beauty, who was clearly not there by chance. After taking a few steps toward them, she told them she was a young follower of the Prophet Hearts. This definitely surprised everyone because as his follower, she also possessed the ability to see the future of Thanatos. Her declaration deeply impacted the woman who had recently been planning how to find the Prophet. She then handed her an intricate box-like object, adding that the Prophet himself had asked her to bring it. She explained that it was a censer with a very peculiar effect, and pressed the moon in the center, after which a black pearl emerged from the shell, creating a temporary illusion. If it was lit, she handed them the censer, adding that it would allow whoever inhaled the incense to see whatever they desired. Damon and Aisha stared at the object with their mouths agape. Never imagining that a sacred relic would fall into their hands so soon, together in awe, they said it was the censer of Largon. Aisha tried to ask how they could thank her and the Prophet, but she cut her off mid-sentence, revealing the true reason. She said that Lord Hars had asked her to bring it to them, knowing they were searching for sacred relics. The words about the Prophet, who had also revealed the location of the golden chalice of Lumsey, immediately caught their attention. Aisha was pondering if this help foretold the ultimate success of their plan, until she was interrupted by Damon, who was next to her. The young woman, observing their reactions, immediately paid attention to the man who asked her a question. He immediately suspected that those letters about the capture had been sent by the Prophet, which the messenger confirmed. She explained that Hars knew Damon would come to help them, and if he had arrived without that information, he could have suffered greatly. The information she mentioned piqued Aisha's interest, who decided to investigate the reason why the Prophet was helping them. Upon hearing her doubts about the intentions behind the gift, the girl decided to convey Hars's words to them. Aisha asked in surprise what he meant exactly by stating that for a beginning to emerge, they had to meet the end. The girl explained it was an allegory in which the woman's anger would announce the end. She also added that despite the end, her soul would guide them to the beginning, as if she held life and death in her hands. Damon and Aisha looked surprised at the Prophet's follower upon hearing that. Hars was imprisoned in Thanatos. The Prophet himself considered his situation inevitable, but he still asked for their help. Upon learning he would die if they didn't rescue him before July, Aisha immediately understood that he had turned himself in. On purpose to warn them, the girl just smiled silently, confirming the woman's assumption. She looked kindly at Arson, and said she wasn't afraid because she knew he would save her. She took his hand, and addressing him, added thoughtfully that in moments of desperation, hope guides us like a beacon of light. Arson didn't expect the girl to show so much attention to him, so he was surprised when she asked him a question. In his mind, an image of Damon approaching him immediately appeared. Now her savior? The boy looked kindly at his companion and nodded calmly. The man silently watched their conversation. With a hint of ambiguity, Aisha could finally get ready for sleep after delighting in the view of the sea. After that very unusual conversation, Damon interrupted her peace by hiding behind the door and announcing that they had about 3 months to save. Damon looked thoughtfully at the ground beneath his feet, ready to make a new promise to the girl. Aisha was surprised to hear that he would bring the Prophet Hars, if she so desired. Standing by the window, the Prophet remained calm, remembering that cold day that marked his life. Shortly before his arrest, the man was walking down a deserted snow-covered avenue where 2 orphans sat among boxes and trash bags on the verge of freezing. They begged the old man to spare them. Swearing to repay his kindness one day, he watched the needy children with a grim expression, trying to make the right decision. The man helped the orphans. Now that 4 years had passed since he rescued them, he corrected the pink-haired Mana, stating that he was the one who found them, not the other way around as she had said. The girl kept eating her bun with a pensive expression, responding sarcastically that she had the right to think that way. Hearing that, he closed his eyes wearily, getting used to his stepdaughter's difficult temperament. He reminded Mana to never open the door for anyone, and not to let on that she was home alone. She asked with a smile if he had really seen something bad in the future if she were to stay alone. Their emotional conversation was interrupted by Mana's sister, who drew their attention with a question. Understanding that the sad moment would soon arrive, she asked the old man if it was time for them to come. He remained sadly silent. When the second girl agreed with her, knowing that time was running out, her words moved the man as he was surprised by their courage. But regardless, they still believed in him. Unfortunately, their warm atmosphere had to be interrupted. When the second girl noticed the guards arriving, they froze. Listening to the sounds that announced an imminent separation, Prophet Hars addressed the girls sternly, telling them that he trusted them just as the guards gave the command to open the door. He walked fearlessly toward the door, ready to comply with their demand. The sisters exchanged a sad look. Knowing they wouldn't see him for a long time until they rescued him, the man calmly opened the door for the guards, saying that he was expecting them and was ready to leave. Meanwhile, Timon was already in front of the girl, repeating his promise to bring the prophet to her if she wished. Erin Rosilla looked at him with indifference, wondering what all this meant. She looked at him skeptically. When he claimed she didn't need to go to Thanatos, he would handle it. Then he got closer to Aisha, applying pressure. He proclaimed that he had asked to be saved, not for her to come in person. As she reflected on his words, Erin Rosilla silently fixed her eyes on the man, her gaze landing on his deep scar without a word. The girl gently caressed the scar with her hand, remembering that he had risked his life for her. Timon looked at her with a mischievous smile. Ready to ask her a rhetorical question, he roughly grabbed her hand and intertwined their fingers, embracing her tightly. Erin Rosilla didn't have time to react before he wrapped his arms around her, speaking of a misunderstanding. Feeling her cheeks flush, she decided to clarify what misunderstanding he meant. He stared at her with a fierce gaze. He asked if she would move her hand if he decided to touch her. Hearing his insistent question, Erin Rosilla looked away, blushing. Though she didn't completely give in, she pushed him and slapped his hand away, looking at him firmly. Clenching her fist, she said she would go to Thanatos alone. Timon asked if she really wanted to go there alone, but then she admitted she would need his help. He was surprised to hear she would return the favor, and asked exactly how she would do that. The girl stated, calmly, that she still had accounts her grandfather left for unexpected situations. The man was undoubtedly saddened at the thought that she believed he would accept her money. He hadn't expected to have such a negative reaction, so he decided to ask again. He said firmly that when he took her away, he told her he was taking her entire life, so it was only natural for him to be concerned with what was his. The girl responded uncomfortably that they had talked about how he shouldn't fall in love with her, and he had made a promise he wouldn't forget. Clearly not intending to give in, Damon pulled her back to him by the waist, hugged her, and insisted that he remembered. But he insisted that she accept his help from now on. Surprised by the man's reaction, the girl didn't know what to say. Trapped in a hug as strong as a bear's, Erin Rosha finally softened after such a display of emotion. She caressed his back as well. The next day, Anna received a message from her lady and was already planning to leave. Her servant, noticing her good mood, asked where she was going, but she only replied that she needed to see her father, hiding that she needed him to find Henrik. He was the one the Empress had asked her to find. Meanwhile, the morning was not so cheerful for Ronazzo. He was on his knees before the angry queen, who demanded that he reveal Tamon's secret. And warning him that she would not repeat the order, she furiously reminded him it was a command he must obey, not argue with. The man's expression darkened with fear when she said he should reconsider to whom he had sworn his loyalty. Bolting from his office, he quickly appeared at Timon's house, trying to start any kind of conversation with him. He looked at his friend's enraged face and didn't understand why he seemed about to destroy everything there. So finally, Ronazzo decided to get to the point. But even after saying he had been summoned by the queen, he didn't get a serious response and immediately got angry. And threateningly pointing his finger at Timon, he clarified that she wanted him to reveal his secret, but the man just smiled. He said that she was being too soft by forcing his friend to tell everything. However, he paused for a moment. That was when Ronazzo replied that the queen was threatening to send the knights to the Garcia Mountains if he didn't talk. The red-haired man tensed upon hearing this. Mentioning the secret he had tried to hide, he became indignant to see Timon bring up something insignificant, like when he had let him pass the evaluation in the 3rd year of the academy. Ronazzo shouted furiously, asking if Timon wasn't afraid that his secret would destroy them and get them expelled. Inhaling the smoke, he said jokingly that he would tell her how he secretly stole royal goods. Ronazzo's last nerve was about to snap after hearing that. Suddenly, he changed the subject and asked Timon if his wound hurt. At that moment, the man's unexpected curiosity surfaced when he asked why he smoked, since cigarettes are poison. Looking thoughtfully at the floor, Timon was desperately trying to understand why she didn't want him to love her. Closing his eyes wearily, he replied that his mind felt empty when he had the cigarette in his mouth and inhaled the smoke. After hearing him, Ronazzo tensed up when Timon mentioned something more secret than he had imagined. Smiling sardonically, the man reminded Ronazzo how he'd had a soft spot for the queen when they were students at the academy. Hearing this, the young man flared up, clearly unhappy with how Timon had cleverly brought up his secret, and he quickly covered his mouth when he began to speak about something he saw while hiding on the 2nd floor of a chapel. Looking at him with displeasure, Ronazzo insisted that he keep it a secret and not blackmail him. Timon looked at him skeptically as he exhaled wearily, saying he wouldn't reveal his secrets. Even though he came specifically for them, he stated directly that he had sworn to the queen to protect her until the end of his days. But he still trusted him as a friend. In response, the man just smiled impassively without replying to his companion Ronazzo's words. He thanked him for his consideration, saying it must be difficult for him to keep so many secrets. Upon hearing the question of what to do, Timon put out his cigar and said he would first speak with his beautiful slave. Ronazzo stood up indignantly, asking since when they were in such a relationship, but the man justified himself by saying it was an accident. He looked at his friend, asking if it was really that important, because if she were happy there, he would have never brought her. The man was clearly perplexed upon seeing his friend's expression as he spoke about the girl. Timon suddenly changed the subject, asking if the noise from the festival was real, preparing to invite Aaron Rocha. By the time night fell, Tasha and Luis were already actively helping the girl get ready for the festival. They enthusiastically congratulated her while explaining where they were going now, and Aisha knew they would be attending the festival in the capital. It would last for 5 days, and the girls mentioned the tradition of lighting paper lanterns made to be released into the sky and admired. Aisha reflected on it, interested in how they are celebrated out there, and if they are as colorful as in the books. One of the twins noticed how absorbed the woman was, and instantly asked if she wanted to go with them. Aaron Rocha reassured her, saying she just wanted to know what it was like outside, and that they could go now. Timon was also busy with preparations for the festival, aware that he had to hide as much as possible to avoid being discovered. Remembering what the girl had asked him before, he concluded that her wishes were of a more personal nature. Looking thoughtfully at the ground, Timon felt the expectations were unjustified, as he didn't think they were anything more intimate. He had to shift his attention just 1 centimeter from the cart, when his brother called him, turning around to see Cashin with a serious expression. Prepared to say something, the younger brother's face showed both discomfort and a provoked blush. Due to his bad behavior upon returning to the mansion, Timon immediately questioned Satin. Regarding what happened in his absence, he glared at him and muttered through his teeth that he didn't understand why he was still there. And not at the mansion. Cashin decided to strike first, and offended declared that it was his palace too. Without reacting to his provocation, Timon coldly replied that he was not the owner and had shown him no respect. His pride wounded the boy, said he didn't understand how he could say that since they were both crisis. The man regained his composure and posed an unexpected question, asking who was the true owner of the shoes he was wearing. Looking around, he stated uncertainly that they had been his from the beginning. But his older brother contradicted him. Timon asserted that following his logic, they had belonged to the shoemaker from the start. And the same went for his clothes, clearly not expecting such a twist. Cashin stood motionless, staring dumbfounded at the man. He said that he does not tolerate those who pretend that something of his was theirs from the very beginning. But he is willing to be compassionate like a brother, and finally ashamed of his childish claims, the young man looked down at the floor. Listening to his brother's disillusioned speech for a while, he remained motionless when Timon coldly informed him that he was leaving. Guessing what had happened between the brothers, Azrael immediately ran to the younger one. The woman understood the gravity of the situation. Seeing the young lord, his face no longer showed a trace of its former confidence, and inside there was only emptiness from his foolishness. Wanting to cheer the boy up, she gently squeezed his hand to get his attention and smiled kindly. She suggested making him a hot chocolate inside the house. Meanwhile, the night festival was in full swing, twinkling with hundreds of lights as she traveled in the litter. She kept thinking that she had to rescue the prophet, but concluded that one day wouldn't change anything. Suddenly, Timon interrupted her by knocking on the small window of her compartment, pulling her from her thoughts. He helped her out onto the street. Noticing that he had arrived just in time to pick up Aisha, Timon addressed the twins, saying they could rest but should remain cautious. Meanwhile, Aaron Rocha, in an unfamiliar environment, was already wondering where to start exploring the plaza. Her gaze was drawn to the man's suddenly extended hand, inviting her to take it. Seeing her confused expression, he explained that he couldn't lose his precious sealed partner. Aaron Rocha hesitated to respond. Feeling an internal tremor from the last phrase he uttered, she finally placed her hand in his. She was surprised to realize that she liked that name. Before they could move, their attention was captured by an amazing performance. In front of them, dancers moved as if woven from air and magic. Timon noticed his companion's surprise and explained that the floral dances had begun. The cheerful face of a girl appeared before her as he mentioned that every year in Amore, a flower of the year is chosen which the dancers must symbolize. Upon learning the philosophy of the show, and having enjoyed the wonderful dance, Aaron Rocha commented briefly that it was beautiful. Timon was glad she liked it so much. He continued to smile calmly as he looked at her. The girl clearly loved the festive atmosphere, so she beamed with joy as she looked around. The man suggested visiting the market, leading her inside and showing her a wide variety of products. The delicious aroma of food roasting on the grill caught Aaron Rocha's attention. Seeing her interest, Timon noticed the grilled meats and asked if she wanted to try some. The smiling vendor kindly asked what they would like, mentioning grilled octopus and rock show on a stick. Not understanding the curious name, she asked in surprise what a rock show was. They explained that it was marinated grilled rib meat served with roasted fruits. Finally, after seeing all the options, the girl ordered 2 rock shows. She saw Timon extend his hand with 2 coins and interrupted him, not wanting him to pay for her. He looked at her in surprise when she said she wanted to buy him something since she had brought some money. After receiving her portion, Aaron Rocha also wanted to buy an octopus skewer. While chewing on a piece of meat, she calmly passed him an octopus skewer. As he tried to take the bite of the rock show, he was surprised to see she had bought him so much. The girl's cheeks flushed. When she finally accepted his small gift, they stood in front of a small stall enjoying the simple food they shared. Noticing his gaze, she stated with a smile that it was the best grilled bread she had ever tasted. Before the man could say more, a strange voice interrupted from a small stage. They turned and blended in with the crowd. On stage, the announcer solemnly presented the prizes prepared for the participants for the upcoming contest, inviting all who were interested and encouraging them not to miss the shooting competition organized by the royal family. After hearing his words, Timon thoughtfully observed the stage, until he remembered an interesting fact related to the girl. He recalled that the Empress of Thanatos had mentioned she was an expert in archery. Aaron Rosia noticed his confusion, and with a smile asked if he didn't want her to demonstrate her talent. The girl was already thinking about readying her bow, but at that moment she enjoyed seeing the surprise on the man's face. Meanwhile, the organizer was explaining the conditions of the contest, dividing the participants into men's and women's groups. He added that in addition to the 3 opportunities, any team that scored more than 3 points would advance. The whole spectacle was leading up to the finals, where the participants would shoot at objects not conventional targets. After a few minutes, the members of 2 groups of 4 participants each were already standing before him. The man drew the attention of the participants who had reached the semifinals to the small objects, hoping they would show off their talent. He tried to calm them by saying it wasn't that difficult to aim at an apple when he started hearing the participants' complaints. The first participant was Ronald, demonstrating confidence in his strength and skills. His arrow pierced a juicy apple, knocking it straight to the ground. Unfortunately for the boy, his luck didn't last long, as he missed and failed to hit the next target. Seeing this, the other participants felt psychological pressure and decided to give up, thinking they wouldn't hit the target and would be embarrassed. Ronald's girlfriend noticed this trend, so she immediately thought he had a chance to win. But shattering her hopes, the next participant appeared, who confidently stated that not everyone had given up on the contest yet. As she began, the talented girl fired her shot. Skillfully, her arrow hit the target dead on. Aaron Rosia watched her main competitor closely, studying her talent and the agility of her movements. The audience commented with surprise that she seemed to be a foreigner, so the prize might go to someone from another country. Meanwhile, Timon, lost in the crowd, was intently watching what was happening, waiting for Aishi's appearance. The talented foreigner aimed her bow at the target again, intending to hit the smallest target. To her dismay, she failed to hit it, and the arrow only grazed the side of an olive. The girl clutched her head, annoyed with herself, even as other onlookers expressed their admiration. The announcer cheerfully exclaimed that he was ready to announce the winner, as there were no more participants willing to shoot. Aaron Rosia calmly stepped onto the stage, declaring that she would participate in the contest. Preparing to hit all the targets, she prayed mentally to the deity for victory for the hand that held the bow. The group of men in front of Timon looked at each other in surprise. Noticing the unusual participant, one of them eyed her bandaged leg, doubting an injured woman could accomplish anything. Hearing such contemptuous remarks, the man tensed up, feeling an urge to punish those rude guys. Meanwhile, Aaron Rosillo was already taking aim, determined to hit the 3 targets and prove her skill. She fired the arrow, and just like before, it struck the strawberry dead center, piercing it clean through. Damon smiled, satisfied by her success, listening to the amazed gasps from the crowd that previously had little faith in her. The announcer commented on the young woman's perfect shot, immediately drawing everyone's attention to her next and more difficult target as all the spectators tensed up. They waited for the result of the skilled archer's next shot, as a determined Aaron Rosilla took her stance. She seriously studied her target, calculating the required trajectory, and finally she loosed the arrow. Anticipating her imminent victory, the young woman's calculation was perfect, and the arrow struck the smallest target, crowning her the winner. Timon was genuinely happy for his companion's victory, satisfied that she had finally shown everyone her talents. Aaron Rosilla smiled confidently, listening to the admiring shouts that she had hit the mark. Right on the bullseye. Ignoring the compliments coming her way, she turned around smiling. She found the man in the crowd who was also smiling back at her, just as the announcer recaptured the spectators' attention. Announcing that a participant had unexpectedly withdrawn, he presented Aaron Rosilla and Ronald to the crowd. He congratulated them on advancing to the finals, as the announcer solemnly declared the next stage of the competition. He didn't even notice the crack that appeared in the sky. That crack became a gateway for monsters to invade their world. Aaron Rosilla let out a terrified scream as she saw them flood the square, a whole horde of various hideous creatures. The giant monsters immediately began to terrorize everyone at the festival, forcing them into the corners as all the attendees tried to flee. Moving away from the pesky insects the size of a large ball, the man noticed the crowd was slowly sweeping him away, so he yelled out to Aaron Rosilla to keep her in his sight. He was shocked to see that the girl wasn't running. Instead, she was fighting one of the monsters. Seeing it was about to crash down on Aaron Rosilla, Timon ran and pushed her out of the way. He managed to save her from the falling monster, shielding her with his body at the last second. The girl clearly disapproved of his intervention. She believed she should be protecting the others, but he insisted that was a soldier's duty. Looking at the approaching horde of monsters, Aaron Rosilla hesitated for a moment, filled with indecision. She understood that if they didn't deal with them now, the death toll could get incredibly high. One of the monsters suddenly lunged at them, intending to cause harm. Fighting back furiously, Timon claimed that more than 30 creatures were against them, as he sliced it in half with one swift motion. He said they probably couldn't handle them all. Timon ordered the girl to get away as fast as possible before he was cut short. In front of him, the still body of the monster he'd just killed appeared, which had intended to sneak attack the man while he was distracted. He turned in surprise toward his companion, who had managed to defeat the enormous monster, and was now giving him a defiant look. Aaron Rosia ordered him to watch his back. She noticed the distrust in his gaze, so she tried to convince him that he wouldn't die. Tightly gripping her bow, she proposed saving the people as they were the only ones who could. Damon was perplexed, realizing just how belligerent and inflexible Rosia was at that moment. Realizing he couldn't oppose her, he wearily held his head. He remembered how unusual and complicated she was. Meanwhile, the queen had already been informed about the attack in the festival plaza. Teo ordered all security forces and knights to be sent to the plaza immediately. She finally gave them a furious order to search for Timon and Renazo, never imagining that one of them was already in the midst of the action. Before she could dispatch her servants, her spies came running, immediately catching her attention. The queen instantly asked why they were there, considering they should have been watching Timon. When she received no explanation, Teo understood at once upon seeing their faces. They looked at each other in shame when she said it aloud. Timon was already in the plaza as expected. His presence caused tension, yet he smiled and said he also planned to help, much to her surprise. The young woman in front of her stopped her, hinting that he wasn't there alone, guessing who she was talking about. Teo said ironically that Renazo was with him. The queen froze when the servants hastily mentioned that Timon was accompanied by his silver-haired servant. Hearing this, she thoughtfully asked why they had stopped her. The servant raised a hand and stated that his behavior was strange, drawing the queen's attention to the view from the window. Not understanding that comment, Teo immediately approached the window, searching for the reason for their confusion. Her eyes widened with fury and astonishment upon finally seeing an unexpected scene. She saw Timon and Rosia desperately resisting a massive monster attack instead of saving themselves. The young woman had discovered a creative method of destruction, using flaming arrows in the battle. Despite her burned hands, Rosia kept attacking with determination. She was trying to protect the others. The flaming arrows were effectively dealing with the flying monsters, striking them in mid-flight. Rosia was completely focused on the fight, so she wasn't paying much attention to anything else. She spun around quickly, looking for Timon after hearing him gasp. He clutched his shoulder, which was wounded, and asked her not to worry about him, pretending he wasn't at his limit. The girl knew she had to use her remaining arrows before leaving the platform. Unfortunately, she only had one arrow left. This meant she would soon be defenseless. Timon kept shielding her with his body while she, terrified, considered her next move. They both reacted upon hearing another's voice, indicating that others would now handle the remaining monsters. Recognizing who had arrived, Timon immediately knelt, showing respect. Before him stood Teo Lentifu herself, accompanied by her servants. She was clearly upset by what had happened. The royal guards had already begun to eliminate the other creatures, awaiting the queen's main attack. She had a lot to say to Timon, but decided to postpone the conversation until everything there was finished. Finally, she scanned Aisha with her piercing gaze, recognizing her as the fallen Empress of Thanatos. To begin the cleanup, Teo created a storm with a single wave of her hands, absorbing all the airborne enemies. Everyone was frozen in awe, seeing the elemental power in action for the first time. Rosillo was also surprised. Seeing the magnitude of the queen's magical powers, Teo's ability consisted of first creating a tornado, summoning a powerful storm. Then came the final stage, when with a clench of her fist, she generated an electrical impulse through the matter. As if struck by lightning, the monsters began to burn one after another with no chance of survival. Damon was one of those who also marveled at the queen's abilities, seeing them in their full magnitude for the first time. Finally, the monsters struck by the lightning fell to the ground, completely losing any trace of life. Despite the work done, Teo looked as if it were a trivial matter for her. In the end, she ordered them to return to the palace, after which Damon and Rosilla arrived immediately at her residence. Holding her head in her hand, the queen watched them sternly, waiting to hear any explanation. Meanwhile, the guilty pair stood there discreetly, saying nothing. The queen wearily struck her forehead, thinking about how foolish she had been. She recalled their farce, trying to understand how she had fallen for such a cheap trick. After waiting a few minutes, Teo calmly announced that they had deceived her, after which Rosilla indicated that she only wanted to save her own life. After her words, she turned to Damon and blurted out that she was deeply disappointed in him. Upon learning that the situation was even more serious than his betrayal, he affirmed that he would not defend himself. The queen erupted in anger upon hearing him only ask for her majesty to be as merciful as the vast sea. Unable to contain herself any longer, Teo shouted furiously throughout the hall, causing both the man and the woman to tense up immediately. She rose from her throne and immediately went to grab him by the neck, calling him an idiot. Rosilla tried to stop her, begging her to at least listen to him first. Apparently this provoked her even more, so she ordered her not to try to deceive her with her words. The queen's mood immediately dampened when she noticed the young woman's outstretched palm completely covered in soot and burns. Teo stood motionless, mentally cursing that she had to protect her people when it came to Rosilla. Teo disdainfully rejected her, pushing the man aside with her hand. With her arms crossed defiantly, she reminded her that she had lied before to survive. Teo reminded her of the day of mourning in Amore, and told her that she could now try to survive somewhere else. Her face twisted in surprise upon hearing Rosilla announce that she planned to kill Gilotti Thanatos. The young woman firmly extended her hand towards the queen, asking for help to carry out her plan. Not believing her, Teo laughed out loud, calling it a true delusion. Ignoring the outstretched hand, she asked Aaron Rosilla why she was so sure they would believe her. Their gazes met as Aaron Rosilla decided to ask if there were not reasons, but she only reminded her who she was. After the Queen's declaration, a smile appeared on Aaron Rosilla's face, provoked by a host of sad memories. She recounted that she was the eldest daughter of the Sunset family forced to marry Gilotti Thanatos. Aaron Rosilla did not forget to mention how she lost her entire family and her loyal subjects at the hands of her emperor husband. Now it was Aaron Rossi who had rejected her past and her name in the name of revenge and the emperor's downfall. After telling this, she stood motionless, looking at the Queen before her, hoping for understanding. With a wry smile, Teo called her story sad, but without proof for her to truly believe her, the young woman calmly replied that she would definitely present something that would make her believe in her sincerity if she waited 2 days. Seeing the Queen's doubt, she skillfully convinced her that she would lose nothing by waiting just 2 days. Understanding that Aaron Rossi had shared a reasonable and logical conclusion, Teo stood motionless, staring at her. She finally accepted the young woman's proposal, although clearly dissatisfied with the final result after a long and exhausting conversation. Timon and Aaron Rossi finally had the chance to return home. The girl wearily pressed her burned hand against the glass. Trying to calm her anxiety at the blurry landscape outside the window, Timon noticed her worry and decided to help her relax a bit. Drawing her attention to him, he looked at his companion with concern and asked her to give him her hand. The young woman looked at him and mentally decided that she was finally ready to accept his help without hesitation. Timon sadly observed Aaron Rossi's burned fingers, asking if it hurt. She calmly replied that yes, it hurt, but if she showed it, nothing would change. The man asked why she had decided that, since he would find out anyway, but she just said that he was hurting too. Timon looked at his open wound and assured her he was fine, and would feel better soon. Upon hearing these words, the girl blushed, as if she were internally preparing to do something unusual for her without saying a word. She timidly grabbed the edge of his clothes and moved closer, reducing the distance between them. Timon did not expect this sudden approach from her, so he immediately asked what she was doing. Aaron Rossi averted her gaze, and in response asked if he had captured her to use her in situations like this. Finally, the girl hugged him, and kissing him, asked him to heal each other after a few days, as Aaron Rossi expected. A ship was heading quickly toward Amor. The pregnant young woman on board repeated with excitement how long it had been since she was last there. While tenderly caressing her round belly, she thanked God for allowing them to arrive so peacefully and well. The red-haired man next to her asked carefully if she was cold, receiving a negative response. Smiling cheerfully, the girl called him out on how nervous he must be. Since it had been so long hearing his words about how much he truly cared, she looked at him with emotion. Anticipating their next meeting, she proposed they do something, referring to the fact they had not been in that region for 5 full years. Her partner also asked if she herself was not nervous, which brought a radiant smile to his beloved's face. Pressing her hand to her chest, she asked in response if he had forgotten how brave and courageous she was. A smile appeared on his face as he agreed that they should finish their business. Before she gave birth, the young couple looked on with complete resolve toward Amor, which appeared before them. Knowing they were expected there, they were not the only ones awaiting this reunion. As Aisha searched for them at sea, she told herself not to worry because they would surely arrive. Upon hearing the call, she went to Azrael, who informed her about the arrival of guests who wished to see her. She relayed the visitor's message that Aranrodia had to understand who she was if it was discovered she was from Maya. Aisha was petrified. Realizing the girl had finally arrived and fulfilled her request, she ordered Azrael to take her to the guest, and to summon Timon, which the woman promptly did. The second she saw her old empress, she totally lost it, couldn't even stop the waterworks from flowing. Aranrotia gave her a gentle heads up, dropping her new name while welcoming the girl with a super chill smile. Homegirl basically launched herself at the ex-empress, grilling her like, "For real, is that your name now?" But she totally swerved the question and switched it up, asking how they were feeling after that epic trek, all while cozied up to her boo. She calmed her down, saying she was tough as nails, and only in her 8th month, then glanced over at her husband Tarzan. She was totally beaming, saying she bet it was a boy cause his kicks were wicked strong. Aranrodia then gave a shout-out to the guy. He was all apologies for being MIA, saying he got the memo way too late, but with a killer smile, the girl said she wasn't his person to protect anymore. So like it was all good, no apologies needed. Back when she was empress, Tarzan always had the Sunset family's back. He was her ride-or-die knight. Then one day the Empress hit him up needing to spill some major tea. She told him straight up that she had a super personal favor to ask, and he had to do it for her, no questions asked. Rosalyn turned to him all chill and asked him to be a guardian for someone who was totally out in the open with no backup. Tarson was totally shook when she hinted that he needed to watch his own back and basically peace out with this person. Just then the guy smiled, thinking back on how it had been 5 whole years since that day, 5 years that totally changed his life. Feeling that warm family vibe, Aaron Rosilla cracked a sweet smile, totally happy for the two of them on the inside. The young couple was shook when she said she never would have dragged them all the way out there if she'd known they were expecting. Aaron, Rosia's guest, looked at her like she'd seen a ghost and was like, "Girl, I would have run all the way here to see you, even if I was in the middle of giving birth." Hearing that, Aisha just beamed, totally stoked about this sweet reunion with old friends. Meanwhile, Timon finally rolled up to the guest room to see why Aisha had summoned him, but he couldn't even get in the door. 'Cause right away all his friends in there just stared him down. The guy stood his ground and introduced himself, adding that he was glad to meet them. Then realizing he didn't recognize the person right in front of him, the girl gave a kinda nervous smile, squeezed his hand back and called him out for not recognizing her, even though this wasn't their first rodeo. The dude just stared at her completely stumped, trying to place her face. Aaron Rotia made the formal intro. This was Rana Lantifu, the queen's little sister who'd managed to bounce from Thanatos. Tamon's eyes went wide, totally shocked as it finally clicked why she was a dead ringer for the queen. Seeing his reaction, she was hoping he'd finally remembered her since he'd seen them together a bunch of times before. Timon slapped a hand to his forehead like, "Oh, I get it now," finally putting the pieces together. Aaron Rodia smirked when he nailed it, pointing out that this was the exact reason she was so sure they were gonna win. As a new day dawned, Teo was already in full-on prep mode for the minister and the Empress who had promised to bring the receipts. Was posted up on her throne looking super ticked off, clearly not vibing with the fact they'd let things get delayed. The queen totally went off on her crew. Wondering why they were so late, the woman basically bared her fangs low-key, losing her chill with her guests. Finally, the word dropped that the minister had rolled up with the Empress. Timon tried to spin a story for why they were late, saying the sun wasn't even up, but he got shut down hard by the queen. Aaron Rocha just calmly apologized for the holdup, and for making her wait, Teo decided to just cut to the chase, asking who the randos trailing them were. Peeping the hooded figures bowing before her, she was like, "Is this my test or what?" The queen greeted them with a seriously venomous vibe, totally convinced they couldn't get to her. The crew followed her command, leaving the woman absolutely shook. It was a total blindside. She looked at her sister all heartbroken and kept saying, "No way, this can't be real." Teo finally saw her sister, the one she'd been dying to see forever since they were brutally split up. She just bolted towards her, insisting over and over, "Is it really you?" Without answering, Rana whispered all shaky, "It's still there." She meant the scar Teo got from sword practice, and hearing that just hit her right in the feels. Rana remembered how their mom totally went off on her that day she accidentally nicked Teo's forehead. The throwback to their childhood was real. Teo just couldn't hold it in anymore and started bawling. She rushed over and gave her a massive, impulsive sister hug, squeezing her tight. Her face totally froze when Rana pushed her back, warning her not to squeeze so hard or she'd freak out the baby. Seeing how confused she was, Rana dropped the happy news that she was pregnant. But to her dismay, Teo was so not vibing with her choice of man, the guy she'd picked as her partner. The queen's face turned to stone when she heard the name of the dude from the Thanatos Empire. She furiously grabbed him by the collar like, "Do you even know who you're dissing?" The guy was totally blindsided by the sudden rage fest. But he was saved when Rana stepped in. Hearing her sister stick up for him, the queen just scoffed, unclenching her fist and gave him a look like she was kinda sorry, asking if he was okay, and he said yeah. She realized she'd totally jumped the gun and lost her cool. Teo kinda choked on her words and apologized, saying she was just all up in her feelings. Rana was so over her sister's constant outbursts, and went off on her saying she's always been this extra. The queen was just left, shook when Rana called her a runaway horse, just bolting without thinking when anyone gets near. Teo had to agree with her words that her country was more important than her. Not catching her sister's drift, she was stunned when Rana claimed, "That's the real reason she got shipped off to Thanatos instead of Teo." Teo grabbed Rana's shoulders like, "What are you saying, is that for real?" And she found out it was true. Their eyes locked as Rana spilled that Thanatos originally wanted to send her sister, not her. The queen was genuinely floored by this tea, never guessing her parents had a plan like that. She stood frozen like a statue as Rana calmly said that she chose to bounce from Amor herself, so there was no point in even talking about it. Totally in denial, Teo just screamed, feeling her heart just shatter into a million pieces. Rana kept airing her grievances, pointing out they hadn't seen each other in forever. And all Teo did was scream. She stared daggers at her sister and basically ordered her to stop throwing shade at her husband. That shut Teo up real quick. Clutching her chest, she surprised Tarzan by declaring that even though she's a queen, she had to understand what that man meant to her. The storm wasn't over because Teo's next big shock was just around the corner. So she went up to the ex-Empress of Thanatos but then corrected herself, calling her Aaron Rossi instead of Your Majesty, and just locked eyes with her, being totally real. The girl started spilling this heavy story about how he saved her, protected her husband, her life, and the whole future they were supposed to have together. The Imperial fam that snatched her up basically ghosted her, showing zero interest that entire time. They totally saw her as the weak link, constantly throwing shade like she was just some washed-up princess from Amor. They treated her like some random slave who didn't deserve respect. Her life was worse than a low-tier noble's, while everyone else was whispering behind her back and giving her major side-eye. One day she was just sitting there, shaking from the loneliness, crying her eyes out in a storm of pain, until this one girl called her by name, Miss Rana. And just like that, Lady Rosalyn, a ray of sunshine appeared. The daughter of an imperial noble, she became the first person to ever reach out to her during one of her lonely walks. She asked Rana to teach her the ancient language of Amor, something only the royals knew. The girl replied with a total downer vibe, saying her skills were pretty basic because she hadn't really put in the time. Hearing that no didn't stop her, though. Rosalyn immediately started brainstorming ways they could make it work. Rana totally lit up, shook with surprise and hype. When she heard the invite to study together, the kind-hearted girl just smiled, squeezing the hands of her new friend, who was carrying such a heavy burden. And that's how they got close at the academy, spending a ton of time together and growing a real friendship like two vines intertwining. Rana thought the bullying was finally over until she overheard some gossip that pretty soon Rosalyn was about to become the crown princess. The poor girl's heart got squeezed tight, realizing that her one and only friend would be leaving the academy. A little while later, the rumors were confirmed and Rosalyn bounced. It left the girl all alone. All Rana could do was sadly stare at her friend's empty spot, which had been her safe harbor. As soon as she was gone, the haters came back with a vengeance. It threw the defenseless girl right back into her personal hell. The mean teens kept messing with her, asking if she suddenly thought she was a real one or something. The girl just couldn't take it anymore, so looking for a way out, she decided to hit up Rosalyn to escape the Empire. She apologized to her for dipping without a word, explaining that her mind had been totally swamped with other stuff that whole time. The moment Rosalyn asked how things were at the academy, Rana just couldn't hold it in anymore, and all her pain came crashing down like a tidal wave. She tried to cover her eyes, but she felt like the tears would never stop. Rosalyn got it without a word and just pulled her into a quiet hug, showing her full support while trying to find a way out of this mess. The future Empress asked her where she'd want to go. She looked at Rosalyn all confused, hearing that the girl was actually down to help her, and if she had a place in mind, she could go. Rana herself was shook by that level of kindness, realizing she hadn't even said she wanted to get out of this place. In the end, she said she wanted to go to Maju, because she had a ton of good childhood memories there, like a sunny meadow in her mind. Rosalyn smiled and said she totally got it, then asked her to promise one thing. The girl just looked at her, completely surprised to hear the request was just to write her every once in a while, giving her the tea on how things were going. With a calming smile, she promised she'd find a legit messenger so they could stay in touch down the road. She added that she knew it was a total gut punch, but begged her to just wait 3 months so she could roll with her. She also mentioned that by then Rana would be old enough to legally dip from the country. 3 months later, she bounced to Maju with the knight Tarzan who Rosalyn had assigned to her. That's where she found her happy place. She said she just didn't belong in Amor anymore and had way more good memories outside the country than in it. Teo was completely wrecked hearing the heavy backstory of her sister's life. Announcing she wasn't that same old Rana from Amor, she added at the end that if it wasn't for Aran Rusia's help, she would have never come back, like not even on her deathbed. The queen was shook to hear that, having no idea how long she'd been searching high and low for her. Rana just laughed, reminding her that she only started looking after she became queen and everything had finally chilled out. She told her she'd sent like a mountain of letters from the academy, saying she missed her like crazy, but she got 0 replies. In her mind, the future queen was so swamped with kingdom drama that she basically just forgot her, totally ghosting all her attempts to reach out. She knows Teo was probably slammed dealing with their sick dad, not just with state business. That's why she always tried to let it slide. The queen looked totally stunned when she told her that even so, she was ignored, and life got way harder being so alone. Rana tried to chill her out, saying it was all good, and that it was ancient history now. Still, she tried to make her see that if she still cared at all, she had to get where she was coming from on one thing. Rana pleaded with her not to aim her sword at the one person who was her literal savior when things got sketchy, obviously talking about Aran Rusia. She added that Aran was the only reason she came back after all those years of playing hide-and-seek. She declared that she was signing over all her royal perks and the compensation for the princess, who was handed over in captivity to Aran Rusia. Hearing this, the Empress was hit with a major wave of gratitude for the girl she'd basically grown up with since they were teens. Looking ahead, Rana said that just to make this happen, she had gone down that road no matter her status. Realizing how hard this all was on her sister, Teo had to look away, feeling super guilty, trying to figure out how to fix her massive screw-up. When the sun came up, Rana announced that even though she'd loved talking with her all night, they were heading back to Maju. When asked why she wouldn't stay, she just smiled and pointed to her baby bump, wanting to have the baby in Maju. Teo got it though, and respected her sister's wishes, understanding that she had her own life and family now. Rana gave her this super grateful look when she told her to take care. Finally, the young woman was standing right there with her husband, all set to head home. They got a warm welcome from Aran Rusia and Timon, who were just strolling near the palace. They all exchanged smiles, and she thanked Rana for visiting, telling them to just give a shout if they needed anything. Then out of nowhere, Rana asked her to bless the name for her future kid. Aran Rusia was pretty shocked to hear she wanted to honor Empress Thanatos, who she loved with her whole heart. The Empress immediately thought about the possibility of it being a boy, but Rana just smiled and said if that happened, they'd pick another name, adding that she'd love to name her daughter after her though, which she thought was like the most noble name ever. Looking away a little shyly, Aran Rusia asked for real, if that's what they both genuinely wanted. Hearing the mom-to-be say yes, she smiled and said that if that's the case, then it was totally cool with her. Rana was totally glowing with gratitude, like Aran Roxia had just handed her the most epic gift ever. Tarzan gave his happy wife this thoughtful look, like he wanted to say something just as deep, and everyone kinda noticed. Seeing the curious looks from Timon and Aran Roxia, he noticed Tarzan was getting super awkward and asked if he wanted to add anything. Tarzan just grinned and said the person he really wanted to talk about was right there beside him. He was like Aran Roxia is someone who always chases her goals no matter what, adding that even if she gets scared, she'll never let it show, and she'll just deal with the pain all on her own. Aran Roxia was shook, hearing him try to pass off a responsibility that he should have handled himself. But unlike her reaction, Timon just smiled, totally getting where the guy was coming from. Then catching everyone off guard, he put his arm on her shoulder, pulling her in close and told them not to even worry. 'Cause he'd hold on to her tight till the very end, basically showing everyone she wasn't just some random person to him. The young couple looked at each other, totally vibing. They knew that the girl had finally landed in safe and loving hands. As they got closer to the ship, Rana said they looked good together and announced they were bouncing. Everyone was stoked with the chill get-together that sparked some new connections. A little while later, Aran Roxia was already deep in thought about the location of the Golden Chalice, which she'd gotten a tip about from her follower. The message mentioned a riddle that was hiding its location deep inside the Cassia forest, right next to the king's tomb. The girl sat at the table just thinking, realizing she had to find a place famous for its cassia trees. This chalice was known for holding the world's gnarliest poison, and the only thing that could neutralize it was the fourth sacred object, a red knife. Aran Roxia knew she had to find and snag both of them, to keep all the places untouched until the 7th month rolled around. She laid back feeling completely drained. She was remembering rumors about some merchant from Nauru who collected knives. Only one question was really bugging her. Could they really pull all this off in just 3 months? Getting up, she had a major urge to clear her head, so she decided to go out and just vibe with the ocean. A few minutes later, she found herself back on a huge terrace with a sick view of the sea. A random memory just popped into her head about the last thing Rana had said. Before taking off, she'd quietly asked her if she knew what her name really meant. When she heard the no, Rana gave her this warm smile as she watched her explaining that in the ancient Amora language, that name means the most beautiful sea. Aran Roxia stared thoughtfully at the calm waves shimmering in the moonlight. Finally, she smiled, feeling a warm glow inside that just soothed her soul after that brief moment of reflection. The young woman went to sleep clueless that Timon would be with her soon. When he woke up, he gently brushed a lock of her hair. It sparked a whole new train of thought. He was still haunted by that line Aran Roxia had dropped, warning him to never fall in love with her. That hardcore demand from her clearly bummed him out, forcing him to hide his deep feelings. He just admired the way she looked, understanding that for her to stay by his side, he couldn't call what he felt love. Then a sudden knock on the door forced him to look away and focus on the sound. Turns out it was Satin shifting nervously from one foot to the other. Totally stressing on how to drop this news on his boss, he finally gassed himself up and gave a low-key tap on the door. Timon popped out instantly like he was already prepped and just waiting for the call. He told the old butler to keep it on the DL and asked what was up, his whole vibe turning grim in a sec. When the dude told him a summons had dropped from the palace, Timon heard him out, then dipped back into the room and just froze. He stood there like a statue watching the girl who was totally crashed out, just staring at her face, lost in the woods of his thoughts, wondering what this new mission was going to drag him into. The guy kept gazing at her from her face down to her toes, trying to figure out how to peace out, and finally he gently held her foot. He whispered that if God was even real, he should totally heal her ankle, especially after all the times they'd tried to fix it already. All their work together hadn't fixed her busted ankle, so she was still living with the pain. He kissed her hurt leg, then got up. Flashing a gentle smile, he told her he'd be back soon. Then Timon immediately headed for Tio Lantif, where he was thrown right into a confrontation. The queen was seriously heated, a whole wildfire of rage, and she just kept coming at him over and over with new hits. But Timon didn't back down, just calmly parried all her moves, which only made her even more volcanic. As she tried to land another blow, she let out a furious curse, totally ticked off by his stone-cold calm, and lunged forward again. She came at him with a wooden sword, and seeing her keep pressing the attack, calling him out first thing in the morning just to throw down, he realized the depths of her rage. Finally, he just let her snatch the sword from his hands, wanting to put a stop to all this. He gave her a confused look, not catching her vibe at all. She shot him a nasty glare and asked what the hell he was doing. She said they weren't finished yet, but he just threw his hands up in a chill-out gesture and said that he was done with this whole clown show and was tapping out. Looking at her dead on, he asked her straight up, "Isn't this what you wanted when you called me?" With a sly smirk, the queen asked if he'd caught on to anything. She added that it would be lame if it was all over so quick. Matching her vibe, he smirked and said if she could handle it, this could go on way longer. She was absolutely fuming when Timon asked for the last time if she was really sure she wouldn't quit before he did. A fresh tsunami of anger washed over her. She swore she'd keep wailing on him until he begged her to stop, and he got that this was probably her way of blowing off steam. He just calmly told her to bring it on. She instantly launched herself at Timon, warning him that she had zero plans to go easy on him. Her plan was to beat him bloody. Meanwhile, Arizonia was just waking up clueless about the emotional hurricane he was caught in. Looking out at the bright sun, she realized she'd overslept again. Shifting to the edge of the bed, her mind immediately started racing with all the stuff she had to do, knowing she needed to get a move on and plan her day. As she got out of bed, she was shook no pain in her ankle. The girl stared down at her foot, totally confused. It was weird, a total absence of the ache that was usually her morning alarm clock. She tried to pinpoint when exactly it had stopped hurting. But her train of thought got derailed by Luis, who walked in with a huge tray. Arizonia asked him where Timon was. He told her Timon had to bounce to the palace early, cause the queen was waiting for him. Hearing that, she immediately started wondering why he'd get called out so early in the morning. Tasha totally snapped the girl out of her zone, rushing in with this massive box that was like glowing all gold. She was all like, "Yo, got a present here from the royal fam?" And Erin Rosia was totally shook. But she immediately pointed to a spot for the girl to open it, and as soon as she popped the little lock, her jaw like totally dropped when she saw what was inside. Turns out in the box were the winning bow and arrows from the festival contest. She checked out the arrows super close, noticing this crazy pink edge with a black gleam. Tasha pulled her out of it again, reminding her that besides the gift, there was also a note waiting for her. As she unfolded the letter, she read a thank you for being so brave that day she messed up her fingers. Teofil's handwriting convinced the Empress she was dealing with a legit smart queen. The girl remembered their last hangout. It was loaded with suspicion from Teofil's side, and she was just thinking how she never would have guessed that he would actually greenlight the pact. So the girl cracked a smile. Then one of the twins randomly announced that today was the festival's last day and that it wasn't canceled. The girl remembered that on the last day, they always released sky lanterns, which was like the final and most colorful part of the whole festival. Picking up on their master's sudden interest, the twins happily bounced to ask Satan and Azrael for permission to go. The girls froze when she suddenly called their names, making them hold up. They thought Erin Rosia didn't want to go, but she chilled them out, promising it wasn't that. Giving the girls a sneaky look, she said she wanted to cover her head and face and bring the kids to the festival too. Seeing their master was in such a good mood, Tasha and Louie were totally beaming, promising they'd get everything ready. A few moments later, they quickly brought in the kids who'd been rescued from that dangerous water, and seeing their surprised faces, Louis calmed them down, saying that Erin Rosia wanted to go out for a walk with them. Arson was totally blown away to hear that the ex-Empress of Thanatos, the one he was loyal to, actually wanted to spend time with them. Everyone was shocked seeing Erin Rosia in a brand new and totally different outfit. The girl smiled happily when she saw Arson and Hannah. She was glad they came anyway, and looking away kinda awkwardly, she apologized for not giving them a heads up about going out. The kids listened closely as she explained the whole plan step by step, that they were going to the festival to release the sky lanterns. Finally, she noticed Arson's super surprised expression and decided to figure out what was going on. The kid awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck, explaining he wasn't surprised about the future fun and games, because of her black dress. Seeing Aisha start to second-guess her choice, the girls totally gassed her up, saying she looked fire and everything. Their chill vibe was totally wrecked by Cashin, who stormed into the room out of nowhere, banging the doors open. His whole look was giving major bad news, like you could tell. He wasn't there for the friendly chat. Gritting his teeth and giving her a death stare, he straight up called her out for lying to his face. Erin Rosilla was legit shook by his nerve, like she had no clue what he was even on about. Cashin kept coming at her, asking why she was ghosting him, like she was faking being mute. After she shot that down, he immediately decided to figure out why she was faking not speaking the official language. She let out a tired sigh, and was straight up saying she figured if they ghosted each other, there'd be less drama. Cashin totally lost it when she finished her sentence, yelling that she was so wrong. She clapped back that even though she never hit him up, he still brought the heat. Erin Rosia told him not to even sweat it since he was the one who was rude first, not her. She iced him out, shutting down the convo with the annoying dude, and just kept walking, wanting to be so done with it all. As he watched her dip with the kids, Cashin begged her to wait up anyway, which actually got her to look back. So deciding to shoot his shot, he asked if she was going for a walk, trying to look all cool for Erin Rosia. He blushed, announcing he'd roll with her and be her bodyguard. Hearing that cringe, she was like, "What's your game?" Then some other voice told her to chill. Jorge just popped up out of nowhere, smiling and saying he'd handle the lady himself. She totally read his vibe, and Erin Rosia shut him down instantly, telling him not to even try using her to get his brother's attention. Before he could even defend himself, He just watched Aaron Rosia bounce, leaving him in the dust. Hopping into the carriage, the young woman immediately ordered them to get a move on and peel out. The driver hit the gas so fast that Cashin could only glare as Aisha pieced out his face, twisting up with rage at being dissed so hard, with how they treated him. Meanwhile, Teo was completely wiped, collapsing from exhaustion, after wailing on the guy for so long. Seeing him just stand over her all chill, she couldn't help but call him a monster. Gasping for air, she pointed at the door, telling him to go see the doctor she'd called for him. The beat-up Timon just smirked, pointing out that the queen had planned this whole thing just to throw hands with him. Teo looked away, totally annoyed, and threatened to rock him again if he didn't drop the attitude. Hearing she was tired and done hitting him, Timon condescendingly told her to work on her cardio. The queen was clearly feeling a whole mix of conflicting vibes. That's why at first she just stared ahead, lost in thought. The guy answered eagerly, keeping his cool on the outside. When Teo said his name, obviously looking for a specific answer, she asked him straight up if she could trust him. Her hopes were totally crushed when he dropped the bomb that she couldn't trust him, which immediately made her see red. Feeling a fresh burst of energy, she grabbed her weapon and called him out for his nerve, especially after she gave him a chance. Ignoring her fired-up attitude, he gave her some real talk, advising her not to trust anyone, including him and Ronazzo. He finally wrapped it up by adding that she could only trust herself. The queen was obviously having a hard time processing that, considering the power she had, given to her two childhood friends. In the end, she mentally accepted his logic and walked off in another direction, commenting that she expected nothing less slick from him. Teo was stubborn, so she still had to get the last word in, insisting that she'd be the one to decide who to trust and who to cut off. He watched her leave deep in thought as she declared that even if he was clueless about women, he wouldn't betray his country. It was tough for the girl to say those words, but she kept walking without looking back. Thinking about her last comment on his cluelessness, he let out a sly grin. Low-key, he knew they were right, and just like that, a pic of Aisha smiling popped into his head. Dude was so whipped you could basically call it love. Meanwhile, the fun times were just getting started. Aisha's evening vibe with the kids was just kicking off. Arson was just taking it all in, totally blown away by how epic the festival was. Aaron Rocha just smiled and explained it was a market, calling it a legit wonderland. Then some unknown object in a rando's hand totally caught his eye, making him hungry and curious about what they were munching on. The girl said it was octopus shashlik and offered him a bite, which totally set him off. The dude was convinced the sea creature was a child of the ocean, so eating it was basically murder, no cap. Aaron, Rocha, and the twins had to pause, cause the sky started flashing, signaling it was time for the Sky Lantern show. The whole squad managed to weave through the massive crowd, ending up with a bunch of other hyped-up onlookers. Aisha figured they'd probably never get a turn, but they cut her off, telling her not to sweat it. The girls gave each other a sneaky look, promising they'd score the tickets for the Sky Lantern ceremony. Without even waiting for a reply from their leader, they just dipped into the crowd, promising to be right back to the same spot. Instantly, Aaron Rocha's mind started bugging out with the worrying thought that they could totally get lost in that sea of people. She was snapped out of her daze by a little kid's hand tugging on her, asking for a distraction. When she turned, she saw Hannah staring her down, obviously about to spill some tea. The girl's eyes went wide when Hannah randomly asked her to buy 3 flowers. Hannah immediately pointed with her finger, showing her exactly where to go to make her wish happen. Aisha looked where she was pointing and spotted 2 girls, dropping little flowers into the water. Turns out that whole tradition was made for people who couldn't get into the main lantern ceremony and still make a wish. Hannah explained that you write your wishes on the flowers and just let them float away on the water. And after that, they're gone for good. For a hot minute, Aaron, Rocha, Arson, and Hannah just silently watched the endless stream of other people's wishes floating on the water. The girl, with a little smirk, casually asked which flowers she should cop. Without even skipping a beat, the little girl instantly pointed, right where she wanted to buy flowers. Like a force of nature, Hannah was dead set on pulling the girl by the hand, carving a path through the massive crowd flooding the streets. Aaron Rocha was still trying to get a straight answer about where this mysterious kid was dragging her. The girl was caught off guard when they suddenly stopped a sign they'd finally hit their spot. They ended up in front of a little kid who was pleading for someone to buy something, and Hannah declared she wanted those exact flowers. He was trying super hard to sell his flowers, saying that daisies stand for hope and would bless their future. As it dawned on her that the kid had led them there on purpose to help the boy, Aisha stared at the flowers, totally amazed. Finally, she turned to him and said he was selling some seriously beautiful flowers, hiding her gentle smile behind a sheer shawl. The girl asked for the price, looking him straight in the eye. The boy shyly answered that 1 flower was 10 shillings. He was totally shocked when he saw the kind woman point to the whole basket, saying she'd asked about the price for all of it. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He asked if she was for real, and she nodded, then bent down to count the flowers. Aaron Rocha. He guesstimated there were like 100 flowers in the basket, and held out a little pouch of coins, asking if that was enough. The little dude's jaw dropped when he saw it was packed with real gold coins, way more than the flowers were worth. He immediately blurted out that he couldn't take that much, saying he'd offered way too much. But Aaron Rocha just smiled. She told him to just take it since she was looking for a vendor with that exact basket anyway. She added that bummer the other vendors had already sold off half their stuff. The kid was totally floored to hear it. He said it was like the priceless treasure they'd stumbled upon, so it was okay to accept the money. The girl's genuine kindness totally hit him in the feels. He just couldn't hold back his emotions and kept thanking her, feeling this major rush of good vibes from her awesome deed. Erin Rosha herself couldn't help but smile as she left the boy behind. She kept strolling through the market with her crew, curiously checking out everything around them. The young woman calmly replied that it'd be sweet to put the flowers in their room, which is when Hannah freaked out over how many she'd bought. He smiled at the girl carrying the flowers, saying they looked way better on her than on him. Hearing this, the girl beamed back, super grateful. She was holding a container with a whole bouquet of chamomile, and despite the fading moonlight that lit up the market square, the celebration was still in full swing. Erin Rosha and the kids found themselves back in the middle of a hyped-up crowd, a sure sign the main ceremony was about to kick off. The girl whipped her head around when she heard the familiar voices of Tashi and Luis, who had just recently bailed on her. First thing she noticed were the girls' bummed-out faces. They were talking about how they'd only managed to snag 2 tickets. She gave them a thoughtful look when they said they'd already seen the ceremony. They weren't even planning to use the tickets, but it still meant one of them would have to stay behind. She assured everyone it was all good. She said they'd bought a ton of flowers anyway, which could totally be a stand-in for the ceremony for her and the girls. Luis, totally shocked, asked if she somehow knew they wouldn't score the tickets. She decided not to explain. She just mentioned it was one of her usual gut feelings. The girls watched her totally focused as she told them to give the tickets to Mrs. Aisha and Arson. Erin Rosha also realized that since the girl was one of Harz's disciples, she knew right away there wouldn't be enough tickets to go around. Luis went along with it and decided to hand over the tickets, letting them know they would go float some flowers on the water instead. As she placed the 2 precious pieces of paper in Aisha's palm, she told them to have a blast. Erin Rosha totally agreed, thinking it was important to enjoy the moment, especially since the kids had already been through so much. Meanwhile, out on the street, a cart rolled up with the temple servants carrying the sky lanterns for this gorgeous tradition. Everyone was making a wish, hoping their lantern specifically would reach the heavens and the gods of all beginnings. Erin Rosha and Urson followed everyone's lead and gratefully let their own lanterns fly. Clenching his fist tight, the guy promised her that her wish would 100% come true, with a soft smile. She thanked him, saying his wish would come true too. But suddenly her freaked-out twin sisters completely shattered the chill vibe. They were calling out for Erin Rosha, totally gasping for air. They started asking around if anyone had seen Hannah, and her worst fears totally came true when she realized the kid had vanished. She just poofed into the crowd. Trying to keep her cool, she was like, "All right, squad, let's split up and find her, and meet back at this spot." So they fanned out, hitting the lit-up streets and yelling the missing girl's name. Erin Rosha and Arson were searching too until the kid finally clocked something kinda sus. She totally zoned in when he was like, "Yo, look over there," and pointed out some daisy petals on the ground. They were scattered on the path leading into this super sketchy alley, and Erin Rosha realized they were from the exact same flowers, the ones she'd copped earlier. She figured Hannah must have gone down that alley, and her gut feeling was totally confirmed. A high-key scream came from right inside. The woman bolted down the alley only to see something she was so not ready for. She froze solid, totally shook, watching 2 thugs just wailing on Cashin. Right in front of the kids, no less. Aisha couldn't wrap her head around why Timon's brother was even there, but slowly the pieces in her brain started to click when she saw Hannah in the alley trying to chill the kid out. She knew she had to save Cashin. So she went full mama bear and jumped in, breaking up the beatdown. The thugs were not having it. They straight up told her to get lost unless she wanted to get messed up too. Seeing her, the kid yelled out, "You call my brother quick, he'll help." Erin Rosha was just stunned. She had no idea what the play was, and with the whole vibe from these goons, they suddenly got right in her face. They were all like, "Who do you think you are?" She felt this major wave of panic when one of them raised his hand to swing. He was ready to throw down. She braced for it, squeezing her eyes shut, but then had to pop them back open. She was tripping when she realized nothing happened. Good thing, 'cause Jorge had already swooped in and caught the dude's hand. He'd been with them the whole time, saving her from getting clocked. The other goon's accomplice was seriously heated. He was clearly ticked off about how things went down. Next thing you know, the criminals were laid out on the pavement, and Jorge was stoked that he wasn't too late to the party. Aisha was totally shook by Jorge just popping up out of nowhere. She was about to ask him what was up, but then her attention got snagged by Arson, who came flying in and almost wiped out. The kid was super worried about her. Jorge gave him a proud pat on the head, explaining that Arson had spilled everything. Erin Rosha let out a huge sigh of relief, realizing that if the kid hadn't called him, it would have been game over. She went over to the other kid and asked what the deal was. He told her it all went down when he was heading back and tripped. His coins went everywhere, and these dudes just mobbed him, trying to jack the little pouch she'd given him. He also gave a shout out to Cashin and Hannah, who ran in to help when they heard the commotion. The girl gave Cashin a look that totally pinned him to the spot. He got all shy and was like he was just passing by. And it looked like the kid was in trouble. Erin Rosha just kept staring him down, kinda speechless. Then the little kid came right up. He apologized like, "My bad for dragging you into this." His face just lit up with this genuine kid smile as he offered him a chamomile bud to say thanks. Her rescue was initially going to save it for a ceremony, but ended up gifting it to the dude as a thank you. The eyes of Cashin totally bugged out, shook by how deep this tiny gift was. He finally took the little flower she offered and gave the little kid a super humble thank you. While watching this, it hit Erin Rosilla that she had dipped on purpose just to save him. Like Hannah totally read her mind, she turned and shot her a sweet smile, basically inviting her back to the mansion. In the end, they all bounced back to the estate where they found Satin totally freaking out. Cashin was swarmed by Asriel and Aishi waiting for the butler to get the dock. Asriel was carefully putting a cold cloth on his bruises, asking him if it hurt. Erin Rosilla decided to just jump in, assuring them she'd handle everything. Giving a little bow, the woman told them she was out, leaving it all in the madam's hands. Finally, the girl was alone with Cashin, who, let's be real, was the source of all the drama. The guy turned beet red when she shared her theory that he'd been creeping on them at the festival. Erin Rosilla kept giving him a blank stare, basically forcing the answers out of him. He suddenly asked if his brother for real hadn't told her anything about him. The girl instantly remembered his advice to not react to the situation if she happened to run into him. She decided not to get into the deets, so she just turned and said he didn't say anything, which left him even more shook than if she had told him the truth. Erin Rosilla immediately picked up on the vibe shift, realizing her words had cut deep. She knew she had to change the subject like ASAP before he spiraled. The girl decided to play it cool, so she casually brought up how he'd been sick as a kid. He immediately replied that everything got way better when he started taking the meds Timon gave him. Erin Rosilla curiously asked what kind of medicine could get a sick person out of bed like that. Cashin matched her energy, saying he was just as surprised, since he still hadn't gotten an answer from his brother about where the meds came from. Back at the medicine box, the girl herself called it wild, asking over and over what it was like and if he had it on him. Aisha finally found the little vial of ointment. She hurried over to the guy when he mentioned it was liquid and kinda looked like blood. Putting all the pieces together, she smiled, seeing how Timon pretended he didn't care about his brother, even while giving his own blood to save him. Cashin randomly mentioned that he thinks Aisha looks a lot like his brother. He thinks they're like total lookalikes, both in their mysterious expression and their stare like they know everything about everything. Without waiting for an answer, he kept going, saying that when Timon and Aisha aren't laughing, they could be twins. As she adjusted his injured hand, she asked if he felt some type of way about that. When he said she didn't even smile at him, Erin Rosilla wrapped the bruise with a bandage, thanking him for saving the kids, even though she wasn't cool with him spying on them. Holding his hand, she said the whole thing felt more and more like bad juju, but for some reason she wasn't mad about it. Cashin just blew up with a ton of questions when she unexpectedly said that he also kinda reminded her of Timon. Without answering, the girl thought to herself that their shared obsession was the one thing connecting them, even though he had a million questions. Erin Rosilla wasn't about to get into it, so she warned him she was dipping. Heading for the door, she confirmed with a sigh that nothing had changed, while he was trying to keep the convo going. Meanwhile, a refreshed Teo gave her rival a surprised look when he said he was gonna bounce without getting treated. Holding his arm, Timon tried to sell her on the idea that he just wasn't used to showing his body to people. The queen kept pushing, but he just kept shutting her down, insisting he couldn't get treatment from anyone. With a slight bow, Timon said he had his own doc, who he'd see even if he was at death's door. Teo was totally floored by his excuses, thinking they were super weird. Finally, the guy made it back to his mansion feeling a wild burning pain all over from Teo's beatdown. A clearly freaked out Satin met him right away, asking what the hell happened. Timon gave the butler a surprised look when the guy told him Aisha was dealing with Cashin right then. Without missing a beat, he explained they'd run into some random bandits at the party. The second he heard the girl was in danger, Timon went on a full-blown manhunt for her through the whole house. His eyes were blazing with determination, fueled by the need to know if she was okay like right now. Erin Rosilla was shook when Timon busted into her room looking totally consumed with worry. Completely forgetting his own messed up state, the guy rushed over to her asking if she was hurt. She kinda spaced out and said she was fine, but her sad vibe clearly hit him hard. Crossing his arms, he laid down the law, telling her not to go out without him again, because she was a total trouble magnet. He finally admitted that the queen decided to unleash her rage on him. When Aisha asked again what went down, he decided to play up the drama, and claimed he even had broken ribs. As she checked out his injuries all tense, she said he was the one who gets into messes. When she's not around, not the other way. Hearing this, Timon just smirked like he was proving her point. Finally, he took her hand, gently, and asked her to cure him of this sickness. Erin Rosilla tried to hide her blush, totally getting what he was hinting at. The guy's face totally lit up with hope when she shot back that they should probably find a better spot first. So Timon ended up in bed, begging her to hurry up and cure him already. The girl leaned over him gently, getting a good look at his bruised up face. Not wanting to wait for her to finally take pity on him, he went straight for her lips. Erin Rosilla couldn't. He was getting dragged back into nightmare territory, where the ghost of his ancestor was on a loop, just roasting him and making him feel like trash for his past moves. She kept insisting he had to listen to his wife and always remember, even as he was trying to dip, he tried to clap back, saying he didn't want any of it. But he was still stuck in the same loop. He couldn't handle the messed up dream that was haunting him and jolted awake again, freaking everyone out with his scream. Gilotti weakly stared at his trembling hands as his body tried to recover from the nightmare, hysterically grabbing the hair on top of his head. He cursed out the main figure from his dream, ticked off that even after they kicked the bucket, they were still torturing him. He tried to chill, expecting Natasha's worried face, but was hit with a nasty surprise when he found out she wasn't next to him. The Emperor angrily yelled for the servant posted up by the door, and the guy immediately rushed into the room. Leaving the door cracked and sensing the whole vibe was off, he gave a respectful dip. His face went pale as a winter moon with fear when he heard Gilotti asking where Natasha was. But the girl swooped in and saved him from the heat. Totally oblivious, she just materialized in the bedroom they shared with the Emperor and walked right up to him, listening to him complain because she wasn't right there by his side waiting for him to wake up. Playing it smooth, she said she'd just gone for a walk, not wanting to get thick from the baby bump, which only made him want her more. Gilotti slid his hand down Natasha's hip, basically telling her to stay, but he gritted his teeth when she shot him down, saying that with the baby on the way getting busy, could be kinda dangerous as she tried to get him to chill. But the Emperor was so over being rejected all the time. His eyes went wide when she slickly reminded him that curing his sickness was like the main quest right now. Caught in the same trap, Mr. Hartz gazed out the window again, knowing he'd have to stick around for at least one more month. Hearing a noise, he zoned in, realizing this wasn't the time to be spacing out. The guard who opened the door was totally floored to find the prophet standing there, right in front of the door, like he already knew they were coming, just giving them an icy stare. He announced he'd show up on his own terms, and if they tried to get rough, he'd cloud their futures with some serious L's. The squad of Imperial Guards was shook by the man's energy, but they couldn't bring themselves to stop him. In the end, they just walked him to the Imperial Palace, totally following his lead. A servant hit up the Emperor to say the prophet had arrived. When the Emperor said to send him in, both Gilotti and Natasha were taken aback by the appearance of the guy who entered. The humble Prophet Hartz introduced himself, nodding at both of them while the Emperor kept sizing the guy up, guessing they were about the same age, even though he looked like some ancient tree. Taking charge, Gilotti asked if he even knew why he'd been summoned, since he supposedly had the gift of a healer. Hartz clapped back with some serious sass, saying if he had something to say, he should be specific. Sensing the tension in the room was getting thick, Natasha tried to steer the conversation in a different direction and just cool the whole situation down. Turning on the charm, she said they just wanted to understand why the Emperor's condition was getting so much worse. She went up to him and asked him to help them out, or at least give them a hint on how to ease his suffering. The prophet just ghosted her, his gaze drifting over to the Emperor, landing on his pained and arrogant face. He realized the Emperor had some wild power and remembered that when you use it with bad intentions, it bites back like a curse. Catching his drift, the Emperor yelled that the power was 100% his, so no cap, it couldn't hurt him. Hark asked him straight up why he couldn't trust him, cause he himself had seen descendants who totally wrecked their lives with that power. That was the last straw for what was left of Gilotti's self-control, which just set him off. Even Natasha Roanti was shocked watching the Emperor's body start to shake like a leaf in a hurricane. She kept trying to get him to spill the tea, so she asked again for any life hacks to make his condition better. Seeing the prophet looked totally spaced, she sweetly asked him to save the Emperor, trying to lock down her own influence. She put a hand on her stomach, begging them not to leave her kiddo hopeless without a dad, but the prophet totally clocked that she was just playing him, so he just looked away, processing what Natasha said, and realizing she was a straight-up hopeless enchantress. His whole fake meditation act totally threw the girl off, who just stood there like a statue waiting for his answer. The parents-to-be were basically frozen when they heard him say the odds were super slim. But there was a method. Gilotti couldn't take the suspense anymore, so after a few tense seconds, he just blurted it out. Spill it. The prophet just kept giving him this icy stare like he was talking to some spoiled kid, then thoughtfully stroked his beard and looked away. He took a dramatic pause, pacing around and curiously scoping out the place. He dropped a comment about how his tower was way more frigid than this place, and Gilotti immediately knew he was trying to negotiate for an upgrade. When he heard the cold was totally messing with his memory, Harz stared down the Emperor, saying he was simply asking for them to keep him comfortable for a while. Hearing such a bold request, Gilotti absolutely lost it. Feeling like he was losing his cool big time, he finally snapped, threatening to end him anytime he wanted. To his shock, though, the threat had the complete opposite effect he was hoping for. The Emperor was seriously shook to see the prophet straight up laughing in his face. Harz immediately put him in his place, saying that if he iced him, his own life would get chopped in half. He explained that the more he tried to hurt him, the faster his own life would just fizzle out. Gilotti gritted his teeth, totally pissed and at a loss for words. Not being able to take it anymore, he lunged at him, grabbing his robes, which seriously spooked Natasha. She tried to smooth things over, saying she totally got his feels, but that this was not the right vibe for it. Gilotti hesitated, not sure how to react to her plea to just listen to what the prophet was asking. Harz was super surprised when the dude finally gave in to his request and let him go, promising in the end to arrange his move in exchange for him spilling the tea on a way to fix his condition. The prophet laid it out that if they gathered all the sacred relics, they would create a special kind of resonance, showing up as some divine light. It totally blew the guy and the girl away when he said that if they pooled their willpower and made a wish, it might actually come true, Gilotti repeated in total awe. About the sacred relics the man mentioned, the prophet Hars calmly replied that he could tell them where to find them if they wanted. Natasha got super hyped and asked where they were. First, he told them about the venomous dagger, stashed away by a traitor among the merchants of Nilux. Gilotti got stoked and exclaimed he almost had his hands on it, but he was warned that this relic has to be retrieved by a specific person. Hars nodded when he asked if he meant that he had to go get it himself. Despite the Emperor's condition, Hars went on mentioning Marcus Primelio, who lives in the northwest, and saying he had to go get this dagger. He also made it clear that the Marquis had to find the merchant before the 10th day of the next month. Otherwise, the dagger is a no-go. The Emperor clued in real quick that this was going to be a tough one, cause that dude is a dead ringer for the Empress. Seeing Gilotti totally bummed out, Natasha was like all soft and innocent and just whispered his name. She asked if she could take a crack at convincing him, promising she'd totally nail it for the mission. He gently ran his fingers through her hair, calling her his treasure. Meanwhile, Hartz was just watching this whole charade, totally clocking the girl's sly moves. At the same time, Timon was totally crashed out in the same bed as Aaron Rocio, with his arm wrapped around her. Even though he was sleeping like a log, something suddenly started to pull him out of it. He cracked his eyes open, all confused. Trying to figure out where those weird sounds were coming from, he was shook to see Aisha shivering and hugging herself like she was freezing. The awful nightmare was messing with her so bad, she started unconsciously gripping Aaron Rocio's hand. She was having that same nightmare again, reliving her time in the dungeon. Right in front of her was that messed up road again. It was paved with the heads of her loved ones, all taken out by the Emperor. She was really going through it. It was a legit horror show until Timon shook her awake, sensing something was way off. The guy, totally overwhelmed, went right into asking if she was awake and if she'd had a nightmare, all while helping her sit up. He said she was breathing so hard he just couldn't let her stay asleep. Before he could even ask if she was okay, he spotted the tears. They were streaming down her face, which was like a blank slate. Seeing her like that totally froze him in his tracks. As she kept describing how all her favorite people were gone, Aaron Rocio just broke down. She was wrecked, talking about how they all faded out right in front of her, and she was helpless. Timon tried to get her to stop. Then out of nowhere, she grabbed his shoulders, cursing Gilotti's name. The dude yelped, totally freaked out. He saw Aisha was digging her nails into her own skin, completely losing it. The girl just couldn't stop the waterworks. The only thing that helped was Timon pulling her into a super tight hug, like he was trying to shield her from everything. They just stayed like that for a minute. After that whole emotional storm, they were quiet. Then she was totally touched when he said dead serious that he'd be her sword. He gently stroked her hair and added that even if he shattered, he'd become her claws to keep her safe. And if he had to turn into a beast, he'd carve a path for her. All while he was calming her down, bloody scratches were opening up on her shoulders. Trying to make her feel safe, he said that if anything ever freaked her out or got her down, he'd be right there with her until things were chill again. Tears were still streaming down her face, but they started to fade as she felt how genuinely worried Timon was, like his support was real. Aaron Rocio just started sobbing on his shoulder all over again like a little kid. Her tears felt like they were drowning him, making him feel like his heart was crumbling into sand. He could feel her shaking in his very bones, and it killed him that he couldn't just take her pain away. After crying all night, the girl finally woke up to the sun blasting through the window and sat up. The memories of last night slowly trickled back in. Aaron Rocio tiredly pressed her forehead, trying to wrap her head around it all being just a nightmare. She kept replaying Timon's words in her head, how he promised he'd always be there for her, that he'd be her rock. Thinking back on their whole conversation, she got super red, totally unsure how she was even going to look him in the eye now. Trying to chill, she told herself it was just a bad dream, but her thoughts got totally derailed when Azrael walked in and saw she was finally awake. Aaron Rocia's eyes landed on the flower the woman was holding, and she had to ask what it was. The woman was totally hyped, twirling the plant in her hands and calling it an Alesh floral tree, saying it could ghost your nightmares. When she heard Timon had ordered it for her, Aisha called it extraordinary, which just set the maid off on another tangent. She was smiling, spilling about how his soul was way more sensitive, even if he had a stone-cold vibe on the surface. Aaron Rocio was left deep in thought, especially when the woman said that was a secret only his inner circle would know. Their whole convo was cut short by the twins, though, who burst into the room totally glowing because their lady was finally heading to the palace. The girls basically swarmed her, gushing about how they'd picked out a special fit and accessories just for her. Then, out of the blue, Louis noticed it. Aaron Rosia's bandaged hand and immediately asked where she got the injury. Seeing her own wound, the girl blushed like super hard, because she realized then that none of it had been a dream. A soft smile just bloomed across her face, and Aisha promised them everything was going to be okay now. Meanwhile, Anna had almost reached her father's place. She was on a mission to get some info, but a wave of sadness washed over her face when she realized that he, too, was forced to lay low because of the Emperor. Arriving, the young woman scoped out Count Markrup's castle, where her dad was hiding from prying eyes. He was just chilling, writing with no clue that today was the day he'd finally have that long-awaited reunion with his daughter. Hearing a knock on the door, he gave a calm, "Come in," letting them into his study. A servant appeared before him, dropping the news that the Viscountess of Lotrain had arrived. He just froze, completely shook, finding out his daughter was there and wanted to see him. The servants helped Anna and her nanny get settled, and all they could do was wait for her father to show. The young woman peeked her head out curiously, searching for a familiar face after hearing a creak. She finally bolted towards him when he opened the door, his hands trembling. He still couldn't process that his daughter was right in front of him, and a single tear streamed down his cheek. Anna couldn't hold back the storm of emotions either, and she hugged him tight, just sobbing. After being apart for so long, all they could do was be grateful that they were both alive and safe. Wasting no time, the young woman told her father she had to ask him something. Meanwhile, Aisha was all set for her next meeting with the queen. Timon was seriously blown away by how beautiful she looked. But he still had to point out that she was late. Still feeling kinda awkward, Erin Rosia just froze up. Not knowing what to do, she just stood there in front of the serious-looking guy, still not sure what the vibe was after what went down yesterday. He must have picked up that the girl was tripping about the last incident, so he decided to break the ice. With a sly smirk, he held out his hand, telling her to give him hers in return. Without even hesitating, Erin Rosia placed her palm in his. Feeling the warmth, she figured it was worth it to just act normal, and their faces lit up with sweet smiles. They finally made it to the palace, and Timon gently helped Isha down. Her attention was immediately snagged by the birds soaring in the blue sky, which reminded her of something. Curious, she looked up to watch the doves circling around. They were like total doppelgangers for the pigeons Anna used to raise, which is why they totally caught Erin's eye. She couldn't help but wonder if the other girl, who was carrying all that weight for their future plans, was actually doing okay. Her whole vibe shift didn't get past the guy either, so he decided to ask what was on her mind. Aisha played it cool, saying she just thought they were pretty all while hoping Anna would totally pull through. In her head, she promised she'd be back soon, then turned to the guy like, "Yo, the queen's waiting on us." Timon was still just zoning out watching the pigeons. He was low-key shook by how fast she bounced. Meanwhile, sitting at the table, Anna had already spilled the tea on why she showed up. So her dad, looking surprised, was like, "Wait, who are you looking for?" And when she said she was looking for Henry Carpaccio, he had to ask again, "Are you for real?" His face got all dark and serious when she answered with a firm yes. He confessed that while his friend was out of town for a few days, he'd be handling his business for him, reminding her that Henrik is like not exactly a chill dude. He asked if she wanted to just wait for the count so they could roll out together. Anna immediately shook her head like hard pass. She was sure she could handle it on her own, basically balling up all her determination. She declared she was in a hurry and needed him to give her the details ASAP. He just kinda hesitated, looking totally undecided. He knew his daughter was basically walking into a minefield at the palace. At the exact same time, Erin was already starting her chat with the queen, bringing up the families that could be a major threat to Thanatos. It was down to just 2 families, and one of them was the Marquis de Primelio. The other was connected to the Duke of Gerdium, and they were the biggest problem. Hearing this intel from the queen, the girl just nodded, totally on board. Erin stated that now, after her family's downfall, there was one thing that super freaked out the emperor. She said no cap that it was the Marquis de Primelio who was all geared up to take on Gilotti Teo. She then asked the logical question of why they hadn't just taken him out already, considering his skills. Then she answered it herself, saying his power didn't reach that far. She already knew the emperor's abilities were kinda nerfed. He could only mess with people within a 2 to 3 kilometer range, and even if everything lined up perfectly, he could only plant the seeds of sickness in a person, not actually ice them. After hearing this new tea, the queen got this super smug smirk on her face, saying she'd never heard anything like that before. Aisha suggested that the Duke of Gerdium wasn't the emperor's little puppet anymore, so like he should be their first target. The queen gave the ex-empress a shocked look, probably wondering how she planned to get him on their side. She started to explain that Gilotti had offed the last Duke of Gerdium and his brothers, almost completely wrecking his family. The current Duke of Gerdium, who somehow survived, was now laying low on the outskirts of the empire, pretending he was just on surveillance. Teo asked if even then the emperor wouldn't rush to his side if things got real. Erin shot back with a firm, "Oh, he'd come running." But she added that the Duke would seriously doubt defending a completely useless emperor. Now that the Duke's situation was clear, the queen asked what exactly they would need from the Marquis de Primelio. Erin was totally expecting that question, and was already locked and loaded with an answer. She had a whole plan cooked up with Anna. And speaking of Anna, as soon as she got the address, she was already pounding on a door, determined to see someone. She kept yelling positive her uncle Henrik had to be in there. Finally, the door swung open, and some random young guy appeared asking who she was. He gave her this super arrogant look, trying to size her up and guess what family she was from. Anna was like totally stunned for a second, trying to process who this rude dude in front of her even was. She thought she'd never seen anyone act like that before. With a stare that was straight up Arctic, Anna knew she couldn't just give up. So she pulled herself together like a gathering storm and locked eyes with him. Looking him dead in the eye, hand on her chest, she just let it all out in one go, saying her name was Anna Lotrin, and that she needed to see Henry Carpaccio. He finally sheathed his blade when she said to just pass the word that the Viscount of Lotrin's daughter had arrived. He'd get the message. Without another word, he did an about-face like a soldier and started heading off, in the right direction. He shot them one last icy glare and basically told them to follow, and that's how they ended up in the inner courtyard. Chasing after the guy who was moving like a flash flood. He was walking so fast they were struggling to keep pace, but they kept pushing on anyway. Finally, they reached the door they were looking for. From behind it, they could hear these long, painful moans that made Anna's ears perk up. She asked him straight up what all that was about, but the guy didn't answer. As another scream cut through the air, Anna pushed, saying she was talking to him, and then asked if he was deaf to the screaming or something. Just then, a man came running toward them, recognizing Anna, who had shown up totally out of the blue. The dude looked ragged and exhausted, but still asked what she was doing there. Her face lit up with a smile when she recognized him as Henrik's uncle, who she hadn't seen in ages. He said it was a shame they hadn't seen each other for so long, but that this wasn't the best time since things were not going well at all. Henrik wearily held his head, explaining that his second daughter was about to give birth, but the labor had started way ahead of schedule. They were shook to hear that the son-in-law had gone to get the midwife, but the carriage totally flipped and they were badly injured. As he moved towards the door about to dip, Anna told him to wait and not go anywhere. She asked where all the maids were since his daughter was in there at that moment. Henrik just brushed it off, saying his wife had brought a servant, but she was basically just a kid. Anna's nanny then asked out of nowhere if they had enough hot water and clean towels ready. Rivalda explained it would be good to give the mother something she could grip to give her strength. Henrik couldn't hide how stoked he was when she said she could help his daughter give birth if he was cool with it. Anna jumped in, telling them that just one pair of hands wasn't going to cut it, so she was also down to help. Meanwhile, Erin Rosia was already laying out her whole plan for the queen, saying they'd already thrown out the bait. She got that it might not be a walk in the park, but she insisted they had to try this play. As if he was totally zoning them out, Damon just kept enthusiastically braiding the young woman's hair. While she was handling business, Teo eagerly asked why not just use military force instead of all this seduction drama, if she wanted to wreck Thanatos. Erin Rosia corrected her, saying she wanted the imperial family to fall, not for the empire to get wiped off the map. Her answer totally ticked off Teo, who was clearly on a different wavelength. He asked if she didn't think he was hearing something different from the first time around, but Aisha shut that idea down. Erin Rosia recalled how she had said she would take out Gilotti Thanatos, and then asked her to hold out her hand. Bringing up this specific case, she asked if the queen remembered completely flipping the script on her. The young woman held out her hand, and with a sly smile remembered that she had never mentioned the fall of Thanatos. Feeling how expertly she'd been played, Teo grabbed his head and laughed at how clueless he'd been. Staring at his feet, he finally got that they had been totally tricked with word games. Astutus was like, "I want Thanatos completely wrecked," while she just wanted Giolotti to take a fall. Aisha tried to chill her out, saying that Thanatos going down was basically a given since the country couldn't just keep going on like this. Teo totally latched onto those words, asking if that was the same as her wanting the empire to crumble. But she shot back immediately like, heck no. Erin Rosilla believes if the country tanks, the people will suffer, not the fallen royal fam. Teo blushed hard when she said she got it, cause she's a queen who loves her country and her people more than anything. After getting her cool back, Teo asked what her game plan was, her hand gripping the rim of the cup. Erin Rosilla started talking about an uprising, calling it the main play. The queen looked super skeptical when she said it so bluntly, that she was planning to kick off a revolution. Erin Rosilla said it was possible, but on one condition that had to be met. She turned to the guy and told him he had to help her with it since his help was the condition. Timon tightened his ponytail again, the one made from strands of her hair, and suddenly asked if this was her third wish. He said if it was, he was ready to hear her out, and he leaned in to brush his lips against the braid. Erin Rosilla was stoked that he responded to her plea for help right away, and a huge smile lit up her face. That meeting left the queen with some seriously mixed vibes. That's why she spent the whole afternoon zoned out by the window, deep in her thoughts. She understood that even if it wasn't what she expected, at least it was some kind of offer. Teo kept replaying Erin Rosilla's words about her faith that Teo would get what was bothering her. When asked about her plan, the girl mentioned the legend of a sacred relic. The story goes that if you gather all the holy relics in one place, you could make a wish to a god. She claimed she was betting everything on that to wish for the end of all supernatural abilities in that moment. Teo voiced some serious doubts about the plan, but Erin Rosilla insisted it would work. The queen squeezed her glass, thinking about how her own ability was already starting to fade. The young woman was weighing the pros and cons, aware that at the same time the cracks were getting smaller, and the seer had bet on the future Aisha was creating. As she set the glass on the table, she gave a crooked smile, slowly getting used to the fact that she had no other choice. She looked away excitedly, imagining a new era on the horizon. Meanwhile, Erin Rosilla's mind was also totally swamped with thoughts. Timon, sitting beside her, asked her what was on her mind. She spilled everything, saying that they were about to get super busy, clutching the hem of her dress tightly. She declared that she wanted the trap over Gilotti's head to snap shut immediately. Timon gave her a hard look, noticing her expression was loaded with negative vibes. The memory of that night instantly flashed in his mind. He then stated that guy had to pay for making her cry. Hearing that, Aaron Rosilla blushed, realizing he remembered that incident from the other night. She finally turned away, claiming that people cry from nightmares and acting all weird. Timon paused for a beat, watching the young woman beside him, who was making him feel all kinds of things, feeling the need to have her back. He moved closer to Aaron Rosilla and gently wrapped an arm around her waist. Finally, he came up behind her and pulled her into a tight hug. After he said that, Aisha was totally blushing, but she turned back thinking his whole vibe shift was just to mess with her. The girl kinda backed away, asking what that was all about. He just said it was a normal chat and not about to let her go. He pulled her into another hug. Claiming he just wanted to comfort her, the guy gave her this soft smile saying he didn't want her to cry. Remembering his last dream, he added that he never wanted to see her tears, not even for the people she loved most. Aaron Rusia started crying all over again, feeling the warmth and total understanding from Timon as he held her. He leaned in super close, telling her everything was going to be okay, and that she had zero reason to worry. He made good on his promise, and comforted her with a crazy, passionate kiss, just like he said he would. Meanwhile, in one of the downtown ballrooms, it was a whole high society thing thrown by the nobles with its own vibe. All the ladies dressed in their bougie best were giving each other the side-eye. Hiding their faces behind these fancy masks, the hostess started talking to them, being all mysterious about why they were all there. They were all gathered there. The ladies threw some shady looks at each other, totally remembering Asterisk, the book Asterisk. The one whose first 300 copies literally sold out the day after it dropped. They were so hyped for the reading about to go down. She announced, looking pleased, that today they were starting The Red Passion of the Desert, at the same time cruising down the streets. Aaron Rusia asked Timon to pull over right there. He didn't really get why, but she just explained that she just wanted to walk through the shopping district. At that exact moment, the romance reading was hitting its peak, serving the readers a super spicy punishment scene. In it, the main character went full-on seductress, expertly tying up Timon and slipping out of her kimono. She remembered the rules of their little game where she had to handle all the sweet pain so she wouldn't lose. The woman reading knew exactly how to work the crowd. She stopped them right at the most interesting part. After getting a ton of sad groans, she warned that if they didn't take a break now, someone might get a little too worked up. The other fans of the spicy novels kept gushing excitedly, sharing their takes. One of them spilled the tea that the scene was actually edited in, because that chapter didn't exist in the original. Hearing this, the ladies were totally shook. One of them said that scene was her absolute favorite. Another lady shared her theory that the huge demand for buying belts for, tying, probably started because of that exact scene. She also brought up this one time she went to a banquet, where a ton of young women were rocking wigs. Peeking out the window, she saw Aaron Rusha walk by with no idea that this woman was the inspiration for the main character. The girl said she'd love to ask her where she got her wig, but that would be way too awkward. Aaron Rusha finally made it to the right shop, ready to buy something. Timon kept getting closer to her, checking out the displays just like she was. The girl was looking over all the available goodies with serious interest. Among them, a gorgeous peacock feather really stood out. She was definitely getting weirded out by Timon's intense focus on everything she picked up. So she finally called him out on it. When he heard her ask why he couldn't just leave her be, he just said he wouldn't bother her. Aisha shot back that he was already bothering her, so he decided to shoot his shot, saying he'd wait outside if she bought him a gift. At first, Aaron Rusia just ignored him and turned away, feeling his eyes on her, waiting for an answer. She finally agreed to his deal, demanding that he not follow her. After ditching Timon, she let out a huge sigh of relief, finally getting a chance to take a breath. The girl knew she was heading to Thanatos soon, so she really wanted to show her people some love. She had a pretty good idea what to get for the people she vibed with, so she decided to pick out a soft handkerchief for Satan and a flower for Azrael. Damon just kept patiently waiting outside, totally zoned out on the time, until he finally spotted her with a little bag in her hand. Acting like a total kid, he asked if he could get his gift first, but obviously Aaron Roja wasn't feeling his impatient vibe. Her look screamed, "Nope," and as she started walking again, she told him he'd have to wait, because she was giving it to him tomorrow morning. The guy shot her a dark look when she announced that the gift came with like a catch. He stopped dead, all annoyed, demanding she explain what the catch was. Aaron Roja just smiled, picking up on his totally childish impatience. Damon kept staring her down, trying to squeeze an answer out of her with no clue what was coming for him the next day. A super awkward breakfast with her and his brother was on the menu. The brothers just stood there, clearly not vibing with the whole situation. With the idea of a group breakfast, Cashin was obviously uncomfortable, picking up on the straight-up bad mood from his brother Damon. Super unhappy, he turned to the girl and was like, "I don't remember inviting Cashin." She just calmly replied, stating that she'd invited him so he needed to get with the program. Damon's face totally twisted up in anger. He realized this was the exact catch the girl had mentioned. And yeah, she knew this wasn't going to be a walk in the park. So she insisted again that they just sit down at the table. Damon's ticked-off face was a stark contrast to Cashin's gloomy look. Both of them were equally against the idea, but after a second, they sat down around the table in no rush to break the super awkward silence. The guy crossed his arms and kept glaring at his brother, still mad about what he'd pulled earlier. He finally broke the silence, asking if he was planning on leaving. Cashin looked unsure of himself and quietly announced he'd be gone that same night. Aaron Rosia was watching their tense conversations super closely, secretly happy about any kind of interaction between the brothers. The kid totally lit up hearing that she'd heard about his intense spear training sessions. She told him Jorge had been talking about his accomplishments, and he just calmly said it was all thanks to being in good health. Aisha reminded him that his good health was because of the awesome remedies he was getting. Damon knew exactly where she was going with this, but he still kept acting like some cold-hearted king. Seeing his reaction, Aaron Rosia couldn't help but laugh since she knew what was really going on. The girl went over to her younger brother and said she had something for him. The kid was surprised to see a little box, since he was clearly not expecting to get a gift from Aisha. She convinced him that the present had been prepped especially for him and told him to open it. Cashin opened the box a little hesitant, slowly realizing what was hiding inside. He froze completely amazed, holding the very gloves he'd wanted so badly in his hands. These gloves were designed specifically for training, and were decked out with some cool engravings. The kid blushed with happiness, thanking her for the gear he needed so much. With her arms crossed, the imposing Aisha declared that she was giving them to him with some specific conditions. First of all, she reminded him about his disrespectful comment, and warned him not to claim everything was his from the get-go. And secondly, she straight up demanded he thank Timon for the meds he'd hooked him up with, and Cassio had no clue what her endgame was. Trying to get him to switch up his whole vibe, Aisha put the pressure on Timon, hinting that he had to play by the rules. If he wanted the gift, the dude tensed up, totally ticked off when he heard he wasn't allowed to question it, or ghost his brother's gratitude, but to just accept his words and vibe with it. He figured Aisha wasn't the type to get all up in family drama, which she totally agreed with. The girl admitted, for real, that it was some secondhand satisfaction for her, not for them both. Cassio was crushed hearing he basically didn't have a brother anymore to thank or say sorry to. He decided to use it as a low-key excuse to spill his real feelings to his bro. With tears in his eyes, he passionately laid it all out, saying that even though he was way too late, he was still crazy grateful. Timon put on a brave face, admitting he was a total noob, and sucked at explaining his thoughts. Aaron Rosia smiled when she finally got what he was trying to say. He finally hit Cassio with those words that he'd never even planned on hating him, the words he'd been dying to hear forever. While trying to wipe his tears, he bounced from the scene in a rush, giving his big bro a shout-out. It was super hard for Timon to say that so right away. He felt this weird mix of cringe and confusion. The blushing guy had to snap out of his thoughts when he heard someone laughing. Shook, he saw Aaron Rosia just glowing with joy, clearly loving the whole situation. He sarcastically pointed out that she was having way too much fun, about how she was feeling. He grumbled all salty that she just loved to mess with people. The girl decided to drop the offended act, so she quickly held out the gift. Timon took it, looking deep in thought, finally getting the present he wanted. Aisha looked at him surprised when he said she wasn't taking it back. She calmly replied that she wouldn't, since she's not one to let things slide, which Timon was clearly not on board with, thinking she'd already taken a ton of stuff. Hearing the direct question about what exactly he'd stolen, he just awkwardly replied that he didn't even know anymore. The guy, blushing like crazy, seriously declared he wasn't handing it over, holding the box with shaky hands. Aaron Rosia was shocked that her small gift had caused so many feels. He gave her a sketchy look when she told him to open the present, calmly promising she wouldn't snatch it back. His eyes finally popped open when he opened the box and saw the treasure inside. It was a simple pocket watch on a chain. Timon's heart filled with a warm, fuzzy feeling, making him blush a little. Aaron Rosia was just as hyped as he was that her man loved it so much. For a minute, they both just chilled at the table, checking out the awesome gift. Meanwhile, the Marquis de Primelia was tearing it up on horseback, racing toward the northwest of Thanatos. He could already see his horses were totally gassed, but he knew he had to book it. In his head, he apologized to his horse, justifying it because time was running out. Back in his region, this gnarly disease, a king's, had taken his wife and gotten his daughter sick. A little while ago, he got a letter with instructions telling him he had to hit up the waters of Caliph and snag a dagger. In exchange for following the order, they promised to hook him up with a bag of tulsash powder. And just like that, the emperor forced him to take on the mission, promising him the only thing that could cure his wife's illness. Annoyed by the emperor's orders, he grumbled, but still, he was pretty much forced to accept it for his daughter and his people, so Marquis Primelio glanced back. He'd heard one of his crew cry out. Turns out some dude had fallen his horse totally gassed from exhaustion. Seeing this, he decided to make a pit stop where he reread the letter. It turned out that on top of the imperial command, he got another letter, the fifth in a single day. He had no clue who the sender was, but it always spilled the tea he needed. In one of those letters, he found out the remedy shortage wasn't some act of nature, but was all Natasha Roanti's doing. Aaron Rosia decided to subtly nudge him toward figuring out who the sender was, all while gassing him up for a rebellion. She wrote that she was the one who saw the elder Marquess pass on, after which his father lay down, flowers symbolizing his family. The girl added that the yellow lilac guarded by two swords had totally withered, but she was still alive. It finally clicked for the Marquis that it was the sunset family symbol, and as for the flowers, only the siblings and the Empress knew about those. Premilio's hands balled into fists completely shook as he read that she was majorly looking forward to the day they would finally meet. The next day, Erin Russia was already getting prepped. She was all set for the trip ahead when Astral greeted her, her hair already glammed up with a shiny pin. Aisha could tell the woman was totally vibing with the gift, so she gave her a genuine compliment. She flashed the woman a warm smile when she offered to tie her hair up to make her more comfy. It was super chill between them as Astral calmly did the young woman's hair, but then she decided to break the silence. She asked Aisha if their trip would be a long one. Aisha just answered hesitantly like, maybe, maybe not, after which Azrael tried to get specifics, asking if they were traveling by horse. Erin Russia thought for a sec and said the trip would probably take a whole month. Hearing this, the woman calmly replied that in that case getting her stuff ready would be no sweat. Aisha gave her a surprised look, not catching her drift at first. Azrael just warmly placed a hand over her heart. She said her loyalty was ride or die and that she wanted to go with her. Erin Russia tried to talk her out of it, explaining that it would be a super tough journey. She just closed her eyes and said the main thing was not to be dead weight. The young woman thought it over hard, weighing all the pros and cons, and in the end, she held out her hand to the woman bowing before her, who had faithfully been by her side this whole time, and gently took her hands. Looking her straight in the eye, Erin Russia gave a calm smile, hoping their journey would be smooth sailing. Teo gave the order to do whatever it takes to snag the flute and the golden cup. She knew if she played her cards right, it could all be way easier than she thought, since the owners of the sacred relics owed her big time. The queen ordered Timon to head to Thanatos and make sure everything went down according to plan. They would meet up there later. The guy gave her a dark look, which totally gave off a vibe that something was bugging him. He reminded her she'd said she would never set foot in Thanatos, but she shot back that she didn't want to go, cause the place is grimy. With a smirk, she added that she'd get a kick out of watching the imperial family go down in flames, clearly done wasting time on chit-chat. The old dude stepped forward, and Renaza was totally shook seeing this little smirk on Tamon's face, like he was vibing with the fact that no one could stop her. The guy just brushed it off like it was hilarious, and clapped him on the shoulder, telling him not to get all emo about it. At least not until he was gone, and hearing how bad Renaza wanted to dip ASAP, he was like, bet I'm down, even though he was still waiting on her. Finally, Timon saw Aisha roll up with her crew of servants and kids. He ordered Arsen Hannah Asral and the rest of the knights to head out for Okins, also adding that he was planning to hit up Caliph. He had to go get this knife, then he'd link up with them in Okins. Satin, totally hyped, ran up to them, telling them he hoped they'd be safe, and smiling through his tears, he for real wished Aisha a successful and safe trip. Aaron Rusya gave a warm smile, but right behind her, Tasha was straight up bawling. The twins just launched themselves at Aisha, saying they'd be waiting for her to come back. As she took off with Timon, the girl waved, smiling as she said her goodbyes. They finally hopped on their horses, listening to the twins' tearful prayers get quieter and quieter as they rode away. They were pouring out all their gratitude and hope, and that sad vibe totally spread to Timon and Erin Russia, whose faces basically said it all. You could see all their doubts about the future. And just like that, their long trek began, cutting across miles of desolate, empty land. After a hot minute, the girl finally peeped the guest she'd been dying to meet for ages.